Hello
Hi
everyone.
guys,
I am
I'm
the storyteller
happy to
and I am here to
welcome
help
you
you
back.
today. I know you
If
use
you're
this video to fall
enjoying my
asleep, so before
videos,
that, like
please
the
hit
video
the like
and
button.
subscribe to the channel.
It helps
Also, where
the
are you from?
YouTube
And what time are you
algorithm
watching?
notice us me.
Now get comfortable and
Now
relax.
sit back and enjoy the story.
I never thought
The
I'd be afraid
beam
of
of
my
my
own neighbor.
flashlight
But then again, I
sliced
never
through
expected
the
to see
inky
Mrs. Johnson
darkness
standing motionless in her yard
as
for
I
6 hours
trudged
straight.
through the
either.
dense Oregon
It
forest.
started on a Tuesday. I remember because I
Towering
had just gotten
Douglas
home from my
firs
weekly yoga
creaked
class,
and
feeling
swayed
relaxed and
overhead
centered.
in the autumn breeze.
As I pulled into my driveway,
Fallen
I noticed
leaves
Mrs. Johnson
crunched
in her
under
front
my
yard,
boots with
watering her
each
prized
step.
rose bushes. Nothing
You
unusual
really
there.
think we'll
She was
find
out
the
tending to her
missing
garden most
hikers
days.
out here?
I waved as I
Asked
got out of my
Mike,
car,
my
but she
fellow
didn't respond.
ranger, as he
That was
walked
odd.
beside me.
Mrs. Johnson was always quick with a
His
friendly hello.
face looked
I figured she
pale
must
and
not have seen me,
tense in the
so I called
moonlight
out,
filtering
"Beautiful
through the
evening,
canopy.
isn't it, Mrs. Johnson?"
We
Still
have
nothing.
to try.
She just
I
kept watering those
replied,
roses,
my breath
her arm
clouding
moving in a rhythmic
in the
back and
chilly
forth
night
motion.
air.
I shrugged it off and went
It's
inside
been
to
over
start dinner.
48 hours.
A few hours
If
later,
they're
I was
still
settling in for the
alive,
night when I
they
realized
won't
I'd left my
survive
bedroom
another
window
night
open.
in this cold.
As I went to close it, I
Mike
glanced out
and
at
I
Mrs.
had
Johnson's
been
yard.
tasked with
To my
searching a
surprise,
remote
she was still
section
there,
of the
in the
national
exact same
forest,
spot, watering
miles
those
from
roses.
the nearest road
The
or
streetlights cast an
trailhead.
eerie glow over her rigid
Two
form.
college
I
students,
blinked
a
hard,
young man
thinking
and
my eyes were
woman,
playing tricks on me.
had failed
But
to
no,
return from
there
a
she was,
weekend
still as a
backpacking
statue
trip.
except for that watering arm.
Their
A
families
chill
were
ran down my
frantic.
spine. Something wasn't
Search
right.
parties
I
had
considered going over
fanned
there,
out
but it was
through
late,
the wilderness
and honestly,
in
I
a
was a little freaked
desperate
out.
attempt to
I
find
told
them.
myself I'd check on her in the morning and went
Now,
to bed, though
as
sleep didn't
midnight
come easily.
approached,
When my
a
alarm went
sense
off
of
at 6
dread
a.m., I rushed to the
knotted
window.
my stomach.
Mrs. Johnson was gone.
I'd been a
her yard
ranger
empty in the
for
pale
over a
morning light.
decade,
I breathed a
patrolling
sigh of
forests from the Great
Maybe I had
Lakes
imagined the
to
whole
the
thing,
Appalachians.
But as I sipped my
I
coffee and
knew the
watched the neighborhood come
dangers
to
that
life,
lurked in the
doubt gnawed at me.
backcountry.
I decided to pop over
Hungry
and make sure
bears,
everything was okay.
treacherous
I
terrain,
knocked on Mrs. Johnson's
brutal
door, my
weather.
heart pounding a little harder than it should have.
But out here,
After a moment, she
something
answered,
felt different,
looking perfectly normal in her floral housecoat.
sinister.
"Good morning, dear,"
The
she
hairs
said,
on the back
her
of
voice
my
as warm
neck
and friendly as
stood
ever.
on end as we
"What brings
pushed
you by so
deeper
early?"
into the woods.
I hesitated,
Suddenly,
suddenly feeling foolish.
Mike froze.
I just wanted to make
Did
sure you
hear
were all
that?
right.
He
I
whispered.
thought I saw you out in the yard pretty late
I
last night.
paused, straining
flicker
my
of
ears.
Something
In the
passed across her
distance,
face.
from the direction
It
of
was
a
gone so
tangle
quickly
of
I wasn't sure
underbrush,
I'd seen it at all.
came a muffled whimpering
You
sound.
know me, she laughed. Always fussing
Cautiously, I
over those
stepped
roses.
forward,
Must have lost track of
sweeping
time.
my light over the
I
ground.
nodded, forcing a smile.
My heart nearly
Well,
stopped.
As long as you're okay.
Huddled at the base
great
of
day,
the
Mrs.
tree
Johnson.
was the missing girl.
As I turned to leave,
Her clothes
I
were
could have sworn I
shredded
heard her mutter,
and bloody.
"Time is
Tears
irrelevant now."
streaked her
But
dirt-caked
when I looked
face.
back, she was just
She
smiling
looked
and waving
up at
goodbye.
us with
I tried
wild,
to shake off the
terrified
weirdness as I
eyes.
went about my day.
"Run!"
But
she
when I got home
screamed.
from work that
"It's
evening,
coming!"
there was Mrs. Johnson
Whoa,
again,
easy
standing in the
there.
exact same
You're
spot as the
safe
night
now,
before.
I
This
said
time,
in my most
she wasn't
soothing
watering.
voice,
She was just
slowly
standing
approaching
there,
the
facing the street,
traumatized young
arms
woman.
at her sides.
"I'm
I watched her
Ranger
for a
Ethan.
full 5 minutes.
This is
She
Ranger
didn't
Mike.
move, not even a
We're
twitch.
here to help."
My palms started to sweat.
She shrank
This was
back
beyond
against
weird.
the tree
It was
trunk,
downright creepy.
quaking with fear.
I debated calling the police.
I knelt
But what would
down
I
a
say?
few feet away,
My
not
elderly neighbor
wanting to
standing very
startle
still.
her further.
They'd think I was crazy.
"Can
Instead,
you tell me
I
your
decided to
name?"
investigate myself.
I asked gently.
I walked over, my feet feeling heavier
"Lila."
with each step.
She stammered
"Mrs. Johnson,"
through chattering
I called
teeth.
out when I was about 10 feet away.
"Please, we have to
No
go."
response.
It
I moved closer.
It took Adam.
"Mrs. Johnson,
A
are
chill
you okay?"
rippled down my spine.
Still nothing.
I
I was
exchanged
right next
a
to her
worried
now,
glance
close enough
with
to
Mike.
touch her. Her eyes were open,
"What took
staring straight
Adam?"
ahead.
he asked.
She wasn't blinking.
"A bear?
My heart
Mountain
was racing
lion?"
now. I reached
Lila
out,
shook
my
her
hand
head
shaking,
vehemently,
and touched her arm.
a hysterical
It was
edge
cold.
creeping into her
Not like
voice.
a corpse, but
Not
Wrong.
an animal.
Like touching a mannequin.
It looked like a
Suddenly,
man, but
Mrs. Johnson's head snapped towards me,
It moved
her neck
wrong,
turning at an impossible
like
angle.
it was
Her
wearing
eyes
someone
locked onto mine,
else's skin.
but they weren't the warm,
My
twinkling
blood
eyes I
ran
knew.
cold.
They were completely black.
I'd heard local
like empty
tribal
voids.
legends about dark
I stumbled
creatures
backward.
stalking these
A
woods.
scream caught in my throat.
Spirits
Mrs.
that could
Johnson's
take the
mouth
form
opened,
of
impossibly
animals or
wide,
men.
and a sound came out that
But
I
I'd
can only
always
describe as a dial-up
dismissed
modem mixed
them
with
as
nails on a
campfire
chalkboard.
ghost
I ran.
stories.
I ran faster than I've ever run in
Now,
my life,
seeing
slamming
the
my front door
primal
behind
horror
me and
in
locking it with
Lila's
trembling
eyes,
hands.
I
I
wasn't
spent the
so
rest of the
sure.
night huddled on my couch, lights on,
I slipped off
jumping at
my
every
pack
sound.
and pulled
Mrs.
out
Johnson
an
remained in her
emergency
yard,
blanket.
perfectly still once
Moving
again,
slowly,
until dawn broke,
I draped
and
it
she
over the
disappeared back into her
shivering
house
girl's
as
shoulders.
if nothing had happened.
She
The next few
clutched
days
it
were a blur of
around
paranoia
herself.
and sleepless nights.
Let's
Mrs.
get
Johnson's
you out of
bizarre
here,
behavior
I
continued,
said, helping
but it wasn't
her
just
to
her
her feet.
anymore. I started
We'll
noticing
take
other
you
neighbors
back
acting
to the
strangely
ranger
too.
station.
Mr. Peterson,
Get you warmed
who
up
usually
and
left for
checked
work at
out
7
by
a.m.
the
sharp, now
EMTs.
stood by his mailbox for hours,
As
checking
we
it over and
started
over again.
hiking back
The teenage
way
girl
we'd
next door
come,
sat on her front steps
a
all day,
twig snapped
brushing
in
her
the
hair with
underbrush
robotic precision.
behind us.
Even my best
I
friend Sarah,
spun
who lived a
around,
few
my
houses
light
down, seemed
slicing
off.
through the shadows.
When I went to talk to her,
I caught a
her speech
flash
was
of
stilted,
luminous
with odd
eyes
pauses
and a dark,
intonations that made my skin
gangly
crawl.
silhouette
I felt like I was
shambling
losing my
between the
mind.
trees.
Was I the only one who saw
Then
how
it was
wrong
gone.
everything was? I
Lila
tried
let
talking to
out
people
a
outside
choked
our neighborhood,
sob.
but they all brushed
It's
off my
following
concerns.
us.
You're just stressed,
Icy
they'd say.
tendrils of
Maybe you
fear
need a
crept
vacation.
up the back of my
But I
neck.
knew what I was seeing.
I
Something
drew
was
my
very,
sidearm,
very wrong in our
flicking
little
off
suburban
the
enclave.
safety.
I started
Mike,
documenting
get her
everything.
out of here.
I took
Call
videos,
for backup.
kept a
I'll
detailed
cover
journal,
you.
even set up a camera to
He
record the street
nodded
at night.
grimly and pulled
footage I
Lila
captured was
away
chilling.
at a jog.
People moving in ways that defied
I
human
centered
anatomy,
myself,
synchronizing their actions in
breathing
impossible
deeply
ways,
like I'd been
disappearing and
trained,
reappearing in the blink
and
of an eye.
scanned the forest.
One night, about 2 weeks
A
after it all
guttural
started,
growl
I woke up to a
rumbled from
strange
the
sound
brush
coming
to
from
my
outside.
left.
It was
I
that
tried
same
to track
screeching
the
noise Mrs.
sound,
Johnson
but
had
it
made,
seemed
but
to
amplified
slide and
100-fold.
fracture,
I cautiously
echoing
peeked out my
from
window and nearly
multiple
fainted at what I
directions
saw.
at once,
Every single one of
as
my
if
neighbors
the
was in the street.
thing was everywhere
They stood in
and
a perfect
nowhere.
circle, their heads tilted back at
Two
unnatural angles,
glowing eyes
mouths agape,
appeared in the
emitting that
darkness,
bone-chilling
far
sound.
too high off
In the
the
center of the
ground to
circle
be
was
human.
Something. It was
My
hard to
heart
look at
hammered
directly.
against my
Like my eyes
ribs
couldn't
as
quite
I
focus on it.
stared down the
It
creature
seemed to
in the
shift and
darkness.
change. One moment
The
looking like a
eyes
pillar of
blinked
swirling
out of
darkness,
existence
the
for a
next,
split
like a
second,
mass of writhing tentacles.
then reappeared
As I
10
watched,
yards to the
frozen
right.
in horror, my neighbors began
Sweat
to change,
beaded on
their
my
bodies
forehead
elongated,
despite
limbs
the cold.
twisting and contorting,
How
their
could
skin
it
rippled
move
and
so
bubbled,
fast?
taking on an oily,
I
otherworldly
thumbed
sheen.
my radio
I must have
handset
made a
clipped
sound,
to my
a
shoulder.
gasp, a whimper. I'm not
Dispatch,
sure.
this is Ranger
But suddenly,
Ethan, badge
every head snapped in my direction. 100 pairs of
3274.
pitch-black eyes
I
locked
have
onto
a
me.
visual
The thing in the center
on an
pulsed, and I
unknown
felt a pressure
hostile
in my head like
subject,
it was trying to push its way into my mind.
requesting immediate
I stumbled
backup
back
at
from the
my
window,
location.
clutching my
Over.
skull, fighting
A
against the
hiss
invasive
of
force with
static
everything
was
I
the
had.
only reply.
I don't know how long I
I
struggled,
tried again,
It could
my
have been minutes
voice
or hours,
cracking with tension.
but eventually,
Dispatch,
pressure
do you
subsided.
copy?
and silence
Over.
fell. When
Nothing.
I finally worked up the courage to look
A
outside
sinking
again,
feeling hit
street
my
was empty.
gut as I realized
there was
the
no sign of
truth.
the nightmarish
We
gathering I'd
were
witnessed,
on our own out
but
here.
I knew it had been real.
I steadied
wasn't
my
over.
aim at the space
The next
between
morning,
those
everything
hellish,
seemed normal.
glowing eyes.
My neighbors went about their
The
day as if
creature
nothing had
let out
happened.
a raspy
They smiled and
snarl
waved,
that sounded
looking just like
almost
they always had.
mocking.
But I knew better now.
Stealing my nerve,
I saw the emptiness
I
behind their
squeezed
eyes,
the trigger.
the slight oddness in their
The
movements.
shot cracked through
Whatever
the
had
night
happened
like
last night,
thunder.
These weren't my
In
neighbors
the
anymore.
muzzle flash, I
They
caught
were
a glimpse of
something
the
else.
thing.
I packed a
Gaunt,
bag that day and left town,
elongated
driving
limbs,
as far and as fast as I
a
could.
hairless,
I've been on the
leathery
move ever
hide,
since, never staying
a
in one place for
twisted
too long.
face that was
Sometimes
a
I think about
grotesque
going back,
patchwork
about trying
of
to save my
human
old
and
neighborhood, or
animal
at least figure out what
features.
really happened.
Then
But
it
then I remember those
vanished
black
into the
eyes,
shadows.
that otherworldly
My
screech,
bullet
and the
shattering
feeling of something
bark
trying
from
to
a
invade
tree
my
trunk
mind.
behind where it
No.
had stood.
I can never go back.
Breath
All I
ragged,
can do is keep
I
running and hope
waited
that
for
whatever
the
took over
thing
my
to
town
come
doesn't spread any
charging out
further.
of the brush.
But late at night,
But
in
the
the quiet
only
darkness of
sound
whatever
was the
temporary lodging
fading
I found,
echo of my
I can't shake the
gunshot.
feeling that it's already too late.
A minute
That
dragged
the invasion I
by,
witnessed is just the
then
beginning.
another.
And sometimes,
The
when I look in
forest
the mirror,
was deathly
I swear I see a
silent.
flicker of blackness in
No
my own
owls
eyes.
hooting, no insects buzzing. As if everything living had fled or been driven out.
The first night I heard the hammering,
Satisfied the
I thought
immediate
it was just a
threat
neighbor
had
doing some
passed,
late-night DIY.
I turned
By
and
the third
sprinted
week,
to
I
catch up
realized I
with
was living
Mike
above
and
a nightmare.
Lila.
It started
I
innocently
found them
enough.
half a
I had
mile
just moved
ahead
into my
on the
first studio
trail,
apartment, a quaint little space
pale
in
and
an old building
shaken but
downtown.
unharmed.
The rent was suspiciously cheap, but as a broke
What
college
was
student,
that thing?
I wasn't about to question my good
Mike
fortune.
asked, his
The first few
voice
days were
hoarse.
blissful. I reveled
I
in my
shook my
newfound
head.
independence,
I
arranging
don't
and
know,
rearranging my meager belongings
but
until
I'm
the place felt
starting
like
to
home.
believe those old
But on the fourth
legends.
night, as I was
I
drifting off to
glanced
sleep,
at Lila,
I heard it,
who
a
clung
steady,
to Mike's
rhythmic
arm,
thumping coming from
wide-eyed
somewhere below
and
me.
trembling.
Thud, thud,
My heart
thud.
ached for what she'd
I
been
groaned and
through,
rolled over, burying my head under my
and for the
pillow.
likely
It was
fate of
probably
her
just someone hanging
companion.
pictures or something. No big deal.
Let's keep moving,
But the noise
I
didn't
said.
stop. It went on
Backup
for hours,
should meet us at
well
the
past
trailhead.
When my
As
alarm
we
went off the
hiked,
next morning,
my neck
felt like I barely
prickled
slept
with
at all.
the unshakable
over
feeling
breakfast,
of being
I debated
watched
whether to
from
say
the
something to the
shadows.
building manager.
I
But I didn't want to be
remembered
that
the
person,
chilling warning I'd
The
once
annoying new
heard
tenant
from
who
a
complains about
Chinook
every little
elder
thing.
on a ride-along
So I
in
kept
Washington.
quiet, hoping it was a one-time occurrence.
Beware
It wasn't.
those who walk like
Every
men
night,
but
like
hunt like
clockwork,
beasts.
the hammering would start
They are
around 10
the
p.m. and continue
skinwalkers,
until the early hours of the morning.
ancient and evil,
Sometimes it was that steady thudding.
and they hunger
Other
for
times it was more
human
erratic,
souls.
like someone was
At
frantically
the
trying to nail
time,
down their
I'd
entire
laughed
floor.
it off.
After a week of this, I was
Now
at my
I
wit's end.
shuddered at the
Dark
memory.
circles had taken up permanent
What if
residence
the
under
old
my
man
eyes,
was
and my
right?
grades were starting to slip from
What
sheer
if,
exhaustion.
after years
I finally
of
worked up the
close
courage to knock
calls
on my
with
downstairs neighbor's
nature's
door.
teeth and claws,
I waited, hearing movement
I'd
inside.
finally met
but no one
something
answered.
beyond the
I tried again
natural.
the next day, and the day
I
after that.
tightened my grip
Same
on my
result.
sidearm and
It was like they were
quickened my
deliberately
pace,
avoiding me.
desperate
Frustrated,
to escape the
I went to the building
darkness
manager,
pressing
a
in
portly
from all
man named
sides.
Frank, who always seemed to be sweating
Little
profusely.
did I know that the
Hammering,
true
he
nightmare
said,
was
frowning as he
just
mopped his brow
beginning.
with a handkerchief. That's
We
odd.
emerged
The fellow
from
below
the
you
tree
keeps to
line
himself
into
mostly,
the gravel
never had any
parking
complaints
lot
before.
of the remote
Well,
trailhead.
I'm complaining now,
I
said,
blinked,
trying to keep the
momentarily
irritation out of my voice.
disoriented by the
Can you at
glow
least
of
ask
the
him to keep it down after
solitary
midnight?
streetlight after
Frank
so
nodded,
long in
looking
near
uncomfortable.
total darkness.
I'll see what I can do.
The lot was
But nothing
deserted,
changed.
except
anything,
for our
the
green
hammering got
forest
louder,
service
more insistent.
SUV,
And now,
and
I
the
started
missing
noticing other
hiker's
strange things.
abandoned sedan.
Sometimes, when I came home from class,
No
I could swear
backup
things in
in
my apartment
sight.
had been moved.
An
Nothing
icy
major. A
river
book
of
slightly out
fear
of place.
flowed through
A
my
mug on a different
veins.
shelf.
Why
but enough to
hadn't
make me feel
dispatch
uneasy.
responded?
Then there were the noises.
Get her
Not
in
just
the
the
truck,
hammering anymore,
I
but scraping
ordered
sounds,
Mike, trying
like
to
something
keep
being
my
dragged
building
across the floor.
panic out of my voice.
At once, I could
He
have sworn I
bundled
heard whispering
Lila
coming
into
from my
the
closet.
back seat as I
But when I
slid
threw the door
behind the
open,
wheel.
heart pounding,
I
there
turned
was
the
nothing
key
there.
in the ignition.
I started spending less and
The
less time in
engine
my apartment.
coughed and
I'd
sputtered,
study at the library
but
until it
refused
closed,
to catch.
then crash on friends'
No,
couches as often as I could
no,
without overstaying
I
my welcome.
muttered,
But I couldn't
frantically
avoid my
pumping
home
the
forever.
gas.
One night,
On
about
the
3
third
weeks after the
try,
hammering first
the
started,
motor
I
finally
came
roared
home late
to
from
life.
study group.
I
As I
threw
approached
it
my
in
door,
gear
I
and
noticed
slammed
something
the
strange.
accelerator.
A small envelope
The
had been slipped
tires
underneath.
spat gravel
The corner just
as
peeking
we
out into the hallway.
fishtailed out of the
My
lot.
hand shook as I picked it up.
I pushed the
There was no
SUV
name,
to
no
its
return
limits,
address.
taking
Just
the
a plain white
winding
envelope,
forest road as
slightly
fast
bulky,
as I dared.
as if something other than paper
The
was
high
inside.
beams
I should have thrown
illuminated
it away.
trees
Should have called the
whipping
police,
by
Mary,
on
or at
either
least Frank.
side.
but curiosity
Mike
got the better
braced
of me.
himself against
Inside
the
the
dash.
envelope was a single
In the
Polaroid
rearview
photo.
mirror,
As soon as I
could
saw
see
it,
Lila
my blood ran
hugging her
cold.
knees to
It
her
was a
chest,
picture of me,
rocking
sleeping in my
back and
bed.
forth.
I dropped the photo
As
like it
we
had burned
sped
me,
down
my
an
mind reeling.
isolated stretch
Someone
with
had been in my
steep
apartment.
embankments
Someone
hemming
had
us
watched
in,
me sleep. The
Lila
violation
suddenly
made me feel
let
sick
out
to my
a
stomach.
piercing scream.
I don't know how long I
It's
stood
out there,
frozen in the hallway.
I saw it.
But eventually,
My
survival
eyes
instincts kicked
flicked
in.
to the side
I needed to get
mirror.
out of there. I
In
burst
the
into my
darkness
apartment, grabbing a
beyond
duffel
the
bag and shoving
roadside,
clothes
a
into
pair
it
of
haphazardly.
iridescent orbs
As I moved
flashed
around the
in
small
the
space,
underbrush.
I became acutely
They
aware
were
of how exposed I
keeping pace
was.
with us.
The window that I used to
How
love
is
for its
that
view of the city
possible?
now felt like a giant eye,
Mike croaked
watching my
out.
every move. Just as I was
I
about to
had
leave,
no answer.
the hammering started
I
again.
just focused
But
on
this time,
driving.
it wasn't coming from
knuckles
below.
white
It
on
was
the
coming from
steering
inside
wheel.
my walls.
An
Thud,
otherworldly
thud.
shriek ripped
I bolted
through
for
the
the door,
night,
but as my hand touched the
Dopplering
knob,
as it
the
fell
lights went out.
behind us.
Not just in my apartment, but
Lila
in the entire
sobbed in the
building.
back seat.
I heard doors opening in the
10
hallway,
miles
confused
to the
voices
ranger
asking
station.
what was going on.
10 miles
In the
to
sudden
safety.
silence, I heard something else.
Nothing to do
A soft
but
scritching
outrun
sound like
the
nails on
nightmare
wood.
snapping
It
at
was
our
coming from
heels.
inside my closet. My heart was
Halfway
pounding
there,
so hard I thought
the
it might burst out of my
SUV
chest.
lurched violently
Slowly,
as a tire
dreading what
blew
I might
out.
see.
I
turned
fought
toward the
for
closet
control
door.
as we
It was
swerved
opening,
and skidded.
just a crack, but it was
We
definitely
careened
moving.
off the road,
I didn't wait to see what
crashing
emerged.
through a
I yanked my
guardrail.
door open and ran.
I had
leaving
a
everything
snapshot
behind.
vision
I
of
spent that night in a
treetops
24-hour
and a steep
diner,
ravine.
jumping at every sound.
Then everything
My mind
went
conjuring
black
terrifying
as we
scenarios.
tumbled into free
When dawn
fall.
broke, I
I
steeled myself to
clawed
go
my
back.
way back
I
to
needed answers.
consciousness,
This
pain
time, when I
shooting
knocked on
through
my
my
downstairs
battered
neighbor's door,
limbs.
it opened.
The truck
A
was
young man stood
crumpled
there,
at the
looking
bottom
perfectly
of
normal
a
in
gully,
jeans and a t-shirt, but
wedged
his eyes,
against a fallen
there was
log.
something off about them.
Shattered
Too wide,
glass
too
and
intense.
twisted metal
"Can I help you?"
surrounded me.
he asked. His voice eerily
Disoriented,
calm.
I called
I
out
opened my
for
mouth,
Mike and
but no
Lila.
words came out.
No
What could I say?
response.
Hey,
I kicked out the
have you been
spider
stalking me and
webbed
taking pictures while I
windshield
sleep?
and crawled from
he
the
tilted his head,
wreckage.
studying me.
In the feeble
You're her,
glow
aren't you?
of the
The one
dying
from upstairs.
headlights, I
I've been waiting for
spotted
you to come
Mike
down.
slumped motionless
chill
a
ran down
dozen
my
yards
spine.
away,
What do you want from
thrown
me?
from the
I managed to
vehicle.
croak out.
A
His face split
sticky
into a wide
pool
grin,
of crimson
too wide to be
spread
natural.
beneath his head.
Want?
I
Oh,
stumbled
I don't
to
want
him,
anything.
rolling him
I just need
onto
you to
his
see.
back, searching
Before I could react,
desperately
he
for a
grabbed my
pulse,
arm and pulled
for
me
breath,
inside.
for any sign
The
of
door
life.
slammed shut behind us.
But it was too
What I
late.
saw inside that apartment will haunt
His
me for the rest of
vacant
my
eyes
life.
stared
Every
into
inch
the
of wall
void,
space was covered in
glassy
photos.
and still.
Photos of me. walking to class,
Unfathomable
me
grief
at the grocery
mingled
store,
with
me in my
primal
apartment.
terror as
Some were taken from
reality
impossible
sunk
angles,
in.
as if the photographer had been hanging
Mike
from the
was
ceiling.
dead.
But the ceiling,
Lila was
oh
missing,
God, the ceiling.
likely
It was
dragged
a giant
off.
collage of my face.
And
Hundreds,
somewhere
maybe
out
thousands
in
of
the
photos all
lightless
cut out and
woods,
pieced together like some
an
demented
ancient
jigsaw puzzle.
evil hunted
In the
me.
center was a life-sized photo
I
of me
was
sleeping,
alone
the
with the
same one from the
skinwalker,
envelope. I tried to scream,
crushed
but no
under
sound
the
came
weight
out.
of
The man,
loss
if he
and
was even
dread.
human, still
I
had a grip on
slumped
my arm.
against the fallen
His skin felt
log,
wrong, too smooth, almost plastic.
cradling my fractured
see now?
forearm against
He
my
whispered.
chest.
His breath hot on my ear.
Blood dripped
Do you
into my
understand?
eyes from a
You're everywhere.
laceration
You're
above
everything.
my brow.
You're us.
I wiped
I don't
it
remember
on
how I
the
got away.
sleeve of my
My next clear
tattered
memory is of running
uniform
down the street,
as a
barefoot
pained
and sobbing.
sob
I
escaped
flagged
my
down a police
lips.
car, babbling about stalkers
Mike,
and photos and hammering. They
I'm
investigated,
so
of course.
sorry.
But when they went to the
My
apartment, it
radio
was empty.
crackled with
No photos,
static
no
from
hammers,
where
no
it
creepy
lay
neighbor.
a few feet away,
Just a normal, slightly
jarred
dusty
loose in
apartment.
the crash.
Frank swore up and
I
down that
crawled
no one
to
had
it,
been living there for months.
grimacing at
The
the
police clearly
white-hot
thought I was
bolts
having
of
some kind of
agony
breakdown.
shooting through my
Maybe
ribs.
I was.
I keyed
moved
the
out that day,
handset, a
crashing with a
desperate
friend
surge
until I
of
could find a
hope
new place.
sparking in my chest.
I changed my phone number,
This
my
is
email,
Ranger
even
Ethan.
dyed my hair.
Emergency
Anything to feel safe
officer down.
But I can't shake the
Need
feeling that it's not
immediate
over.
assistance.
Sometimes, I
The
swear I
only
hear hammering
reply
in the
was
distance.
an eerie,
And just
garbled
yesterday,
hiss,
I found a
like
plain
a
white
serpent's
envelope on my new
rattle
doorstep.
filtered through
I
a
didn't open it.
distorted speaker.
I'm not sure I want to know what's inside.
My hope
but as
shriveled
I sit
and
here writing
died,
this,
replaced
help but
by
wonder,
dawning horror.
what if he was right?
The skinwalker.
What if I am everywhere?
It was blocking my
What if I am
radio somehow.
them?
I was
The
completely
hammering is
cut
getting
off.
louder now.
Overhead,
I think it's time for
the
me to run
moon
again.
emerged from behind a veil of clouds. In its spectral light, I saw a sight that froze the blood in my veins.
The moment I saw the ghostly figure in the
A
Polaroid,
trail of
I knew
bloody
we'd made a terrible
footprints
mistake.
led away from
But by
the
then,
wreckage,
it was already too late.
intermingled
It all
with
started on a crisp
strange,
autumn Saturday.
elongated
My wife,
handprints
Sarah,
pressed
and
into
I
the earth,
were out for our weekly garage
as
sale
if
hunt.
something had
We've been
crawled
doing this for
away
years,
on all
always on the
fours
lookout for hidden
like a
treasures
beast.
among other people's cast-offs.
The
that
tracks
day,
led
we found
deeper
something that would
into the
change our lives
darkened
forever.
forest.
We were about to
Every
call it quits
instinct
when Sarah
screamed
spotted
at
an
me
old
not
lady
to
setting up
follow,
a sale in her front
to
yard.
wait for
One
rescue.
last stop, she pleaded,
But I knew in
giving me
my
those
heart
puppy dog
that
eyes
no
I could
help
never
was
resist.
coming.
I sighed
Not in
dramatically,
time
but
to
steered the
save
car towards
Lila
the curb.
from whatever
The yard
nightmare
was a jumble
awaited
of
her.
knickknacks and outdated
I
electronics.
had to act.
Nothing we hadn't seen
Broken
100 times
body
before.
be damned.
I was ready to leave when
I
Sarah called
limped
out,
to Mike's
"Hon,
corpse,
come look at this."
tears
She was
blurring
holding
my
an old
vision
Polaroid
as I
camera,
gently
the kind that
pried
spits
his
out the photo right
sidearm
after
from
you
its
take it.
holster with
It was in
trembling
surprisingly good
hands.
condition. Its tan leather
The
casing
crash
only
had
slightly
thrown
scuffed.
my own gun somewhere
It's so
into
retro,
the underbrush.
Sarah gushed.
I
Wouldn't it be
checked
fun
the
to have for parties?
magazine.
I had to
4
admit,
rounds
it was pretty
remaining.
cool. We
It would
haggled with the
have
old
to
lady
be
for a bit
enough.
before walking away with the camera and a
Jaw
box of film
clenched
for $20.
against the pain.
On the
I
drive
set
home,
off into the
Sarah
woods,
couldn't stop talking about all
following
the
the
fun we'd have
grisly
with our new
trail.
toy. I
Step
smiled,
by
caught up in her
agonizing
enthusiasm.
step,
If only I'd
I
known then what
forced
that camera would
myself
bring into our
onward.
lives. We decided
even
to test
as
it out as soon as we
every
got home.
ragged breath
Sarah
sent
posed in front of our
daggers
fireplace,
lancing through
grinning
my
from ear to ear.
chest.
I raised the
The
viewfinder to my
forest
eye and pressed the
closed
button.
in around me
There was a
like
whir and
an
a click,
icy
and the
tomb.
camera spat out a small square of
The
film.
putrid
We watched
scent
with
of
childlike
rotting
fascination
leaves
as the image slowly
mingled
developed.
with the
But
coppery
as it
tang
did,
of
our
blood.
excitement turned to confusion.
An
then to
owl
fear.
screeched
There was
in
Sarah,
the branches
smiling
above,
in front of the fireplace,
nearly
just as we
stopping
expected.
my heart.
But behind her, barely
After
visible in
an
the shadows,
eternity of
was
hellish
something
slogging,
else.
I
A vague,
reached a
humanoid
small
shape,
clearing.
tall and thin.
Moonlight
looked like glowing
illuminated a
eyes.
shape at its
What
center.
the hell? I
A
muttered,
body
squinting at the photo.
lying on its back.
Sarah grabbed it from my hands.
A female
Is this some kind of
form
double
with
exposure?
long dark hair
shook
spilled
my head
around
slowly.
its head like a halo.
I don't think so. This camera's too
Lila?
old for that kind of
I
trick.
croaked,
We stared
hope
at each
and
other,
horror
a chill
warring
settling over the
within
room.
me.
It's got
I
to be a
stumbled
smudge on the lens or
forward and
something.
dropped to my
Sarah
knees
said,
beside her.
But her voice trembled
But it
slightly.
wasn't Lila.
I wanted to believe her.
It was the corpse
really
of
did.
a young Native
But deep
American
down,
woman
I
in a
knew we
fringed
captured something that
buckskin
shouldn't
dress.
exist.
Her
Over the next
skin
few
was
days, we took more
desiccated,
photos,
clinging
telling
to
ourselves we
bone.
were just testing the camera.
A gaping
Each
black
time,
void
that shape
filled her
appeared,
chest where
always in
her
the
heart
background,
should have been.
always just out of focus.
She'd been dead
And
a
each time,
long
it
time.
seemed a little closer, a little more defined.
Realization
We tried to rationalize
slammed
it.
into me
Lens
like
flare,
a freight
faulty
train.
film, our eyes playing
The
tricks on us.
skinwalker's last
But with
victim
each new photo, it
left
became
as
harder
a
to deny the
gruesome
truth.
message.
Something was there.
I whirled
Something that only
just
showed up on
as
film.
a dark shape descended
after we
from
bought the
the
camera,
branches above.
I woke up in the middle of the night to find
Its
Sarah's side
eyes
of the bed
burned
empty.
with an
I found her in the
eldritch
living
green
room,
glow.
surrounded by all the photos we'd taken.
Impossibly
Her face
long,
pale in the dim
sinewy
light.
limbs unfolded
she
as
whispered,
it dropped,
pointing at the picture
skittering
spread out on the
towards
coffee
me.
table. I
Choking on
and my
terror,
blood ran cold.
I raised my
In the
gun
first photo,
and pulled the
The
trigger.
figure was just a vague shape
Click.
in the far background.
It was empty.
But in each subsequent image,
The
it
creature
had moved
grinned
closer.
with a
In
mouthful
the
of
latest
dripping
one,
fangs.
taken just that evening,
Then
it was
it
standing right
lunged.
behind Sarah, its
The
long, skeletal
skinwalker
fingers nearly
barreled
touching her
into me
shoulder.
with the force
We
of
have
a
to get rid of it,
battering ram,
Sarah said, her
knocking
voice
the
shaking.
useless
The
gun
camera,
from
the
my
photos,
hands.
all of it. I
We
nodded,
tumbled
too
in a
scared to argue.
tangle of
We gathered
thrashing
everything up and
limbs.
drove to the nearest dumpster,
I glimpsed
tossing
a
it all in
muzzle
without a second
bristling
glance.
with fangs
As we drove
and razor
home,
claws
I felt a weight lift off
slashing
my
the
shoulders.
air.
It was over, or so I
Searing
thought.
agony ripped across my
morning,
chest
I woke up to
as
find a
its
Polaroid on my
talons
nightstand.
shredded my
My
flesh.
heart nearly stopped when I saw
I
it.
screamed,
A picture of
beating
Sarah
at the
and me
abomination
sleeping in our bed.
with my one
And there,
good arm.
looming over us, was
But
the
it
figure,
was like
clearer
punching
than
a
ever
slab
before.
of
Its
gristled
face was a
meat.
twisted mask of
The
hunger and
creature
malice,
pinned
its
me,
eyes burning with
its
anotherworldly
fetid
light.
breath
I
scalding
shook
my
Sarah
face.
awake, showing her the photo
Those
with trembling
glowing,
hands. She
intelligent
screamed,
eyes
scrambling
bored
out of
into
bed and backing
mine
against
with
the wall.
pure malevolence.
She gasped.
As
We
its
got rid of
jaws gaped,
But clearly,
viscous
whatever we'd
strands of
unleashed wasn't
drool
bound by something as
spattering
mundane
my
as a camera.
cheeks.
We'd opened a door,
I knew
and
that
now
I
it was
was
coming
staring
through,
into the
whether
face
we wanted
of
it to or
death.
not. From that day
I
on,
braced
our
for
lives
the
became a
feeling
waking
of
nightmare.
fangs
We'd
tearing
find
into my
Polaroids everywhere,
jugular,
in our mailbox,
for my
slipped
life
under
to
the door,
drain away
even
in a
in sealed
crimson
food containers
flood.
in the fridge. And in
But
every photo,
instead,
the entity
the
was closer,
skinwalker
more
reared
solid,
back,
more real.
its
tried
misshapen
everything we could
head
think of.
cocking to
We
one
brought in a priest
side
to
as
bless
if
the house.
listening to some
We consulted
distant
psychics
sound.
and paranormal investigators.
Then,
We
to
even
my
tracked down the
shock,
old lady we'd bought
it
the camera
spoke.
from. But her house
Its
was empty,
voice was a
looking like it had been
sibilant
abandoned
rasp,
for years.
ancient
Nothing
and
worked.
cruel.
The photos kept coming.
Not yet,
And with
little
each one,
lost one.
We could feel the
The
boundary
hunt is
between our
not
world
over.
and whatever hellish
Run
realm
now,
this thing
pray,
came from growing
run.
thinner.
With that,
Our friends and family
it
started to
bounded
notice
away
something was
into the
wrong.
forest, leaving
looked
me
haggard,
lying there,
jumping at every shadow,
shaking and
flinching
bleeding.
at the click of a camera.
It took
But
an
how could we
eternity
explain?
for me to struggle
believe
to
us?
my feet,
Then,
leaning
about a month after
heavily
it all began,
against a tree
the photos
trunk
stopped.
for support.
just like that, for
My
3 blissful
mind
days, we didn't
reeled,
find a single
unable
Polaroid.
to process the
Maybe it's
horror
over,
I just
Sarah
experienced.
said hopefully on the 3rd night.
That
maybe
thing
it's
had
gone.
spoken to me
I wanted to believe her.
in English.
God, how I wanted
What
to believe her.
ungodly
something
intelligence
felt off.
drove its actions?
The air seemed heavier, charged
But
with a kind of
one
electric
thing
anticipation.
burned through the
That
haze
night,
of
I woke
pain
up to the
and
sound of the
fear.
bedroom door creaking open.
It hadn't
Groggy and
killed me
disoriented,
when it had
I
the
reached for
chance.
Sarah, only to
It
find her side
wanted
of the
to
bed
toy
empty and
with
cold.
me,
Sarah?
like a predator
I called
savoring
out,
the
my voice
thrill
sounding
of
thin
the
and scared in
chase
the darkness.
before the kill.
No answer.
And it
I fumbled
still
for the
had
bedside lamp,
Lila.
my heart pounding in my chest.
Rage ignited
As light
inside
flooded
me,
the room,
burning
I saw something
away
that
the
made my
fog
blood turn
and
to ice.
despair.
Sarah was
I
standing at the
wasn't
foot of
going
the
to
bed,
let
but
that
it wasn't
happen.
Sarah. Not really.
I wouldn't
Her
leave
body was there,
Lila to its
but her eyes-
non-existent mercy.
Her eyes were black,
Even if it
empty
cost
voids,
me my life,
and
I
behind her,
had to
no
try to
longer
save
confined
her.
to a photograph,
It was my
stood the
duty,
entity,
my penance
even
for
more
leading
horrifying
my
in person.
friends into this
impossibly
nightmare.
tall and thin, with
I
skin like
retrieved
cracked,
my fallen
ancient
gun
parchment stretched
and
too
set
tight over
off
jutting
into the
bones.
forest
Its
once
face
more,
was a nightmare of angles and
following
shadows,
the trail
with those
of
burning
broken
eyes fixed directly
undergrowth
on me.
left by
As
the
I watched,
skinwalker's
paralyzed with terror,
passage.
it reached out one
My
long skeletal hand
injuries
and placed it on
screamed
Sarah's
with every
shoulder.
step,
She didn't
but I
react,
gritted my
didn't even
teeth
seem to
and
notice.
pushed onward.
Sarah,
I didn't
whispered,
know if I
my
was
voice cracking.
tracking the
Sarah,
creature
please.
or walking
Slowly,
into
jerkily,
an ambush,
like a marionette on strings.
but
Sarah
it
raised
didn't
her
matter
arm.
anymore.
In her hand was the
All
Polaroid
that
camera
mattered
we thought we'd thrown away.
was finding
Click,
Lila.
whir. The camera
I
spat
owed
out
her
a photo,
that much.
but instead of dropping to the floor,
Hours
it floated in
passed
the air
in a
between
red
us.
haze of
I watched,
pain and
unable to move,
exhaustion,
unable
as
to even
I
scream,
stumbled
as an
through
image
the
formed.
endless
It was me,
expanse of
sitting
shadowed
up in bed,
trees.
eyes wide with horror.
My blood-soaked
And behind
shirt
me,
clung to
reaching
my
for my
body,
shoulder, was another
the
of those
fabric
things.
heavy and
I
cold.
felt something cold brush against my skin.
I shook with
Click,
chills,
whir.
fever
The last thing I
building
remember is the
behind
flash of the
my
camera,
eyes.
brighter than the sun, burning
I
away
knew my
everything I knew
wounds
and
were
loved.
likely infected.
I don't know where I am now.
But still,
It's dark here,
I pressed
and cold,
on.
and I'm not alone.
As false dawn
Sometimes I catch
lightened the
glimpses of other
eastern
people,
sky to
or
a
things that used to
sickly
be
gray,
people,
I
drifting
caught
in the
a
void.
flash of movement
Sometimes I see
through
Sarah,
the trees ahead.
but her eyes are always
I
black,
froze,
always empty.
breath catching
And
in my
sometimes
throat.
I see a flash
There,
of light,
in
hear
a
the whir
small
of an old
grove,
Polaroid camera.
knelt Lila.
In those moments, I feel a
She
tug,
was bent over
like something's trying
something
to
on
pull
the
me
ground,
back into the world
her
of the
back
living.
to me.
But I'm afraid.
Lila!
afraid
I
of what I
called
might
out,
become if I
voice
go back,
cracking.
afraid
It's
of what I might bring
Ethan.
with me.
I'm here
So I
to
drift
help
here,
you.
in this place
She
between places,
turned
and I
slowly.
wonder about
Even
the power
at a
of images,
distance, I
about the
could see
doors we
that her
unknowingly
eyes
open,
were
and I
blank.
wonder about that old
Her
Polaroid camera,
movements
sitting in
jerky
some new
like a
garage sale,
marionette
waiting
with
for the next
tangled
unsuspecting buyer.
strings.
If you're
She
reading this,
rose to
consider
her
it a
feet
warning.
and
Be
shambled
careful what you
towards
capture
me.
on film,
Lila,
because sometimes
I
the camera
whispered,
doesn't just take your picture.
a knot
Sometimes
of
it
unease
takes so much more.
tightening in my
Oh.
gut. As she neared, I saw that her clothes were gone, replaced by a gruesome patchwork garment of stitched animal
The scent
hides.
of bacon wafting up the stairs wasn't what woke
Antlers
me.
protruded
It was the
from her
impossibility
matted
of it all.
hair.
My mother
Viscous
had been
black
dead for 5
fluid
years.
dribbled from the
I lay there,
corners of her
tangled in my
mouth.
sheets, convinced I was
No.
dreaming. The
I
familiar
breathed
sizzle,
in
the clink
horror.
of pans, the
What
soft
did
humming
it
of
do
an old
to you?
Beatles tune. It was
She
all so
lunged
visceral,
at me,
so
bony
real.
fingers
But
hooked
it couldn't
into
be.
claws.
Could it?
I
Slowly,
stumbled back,
I swung my legs over the side
narrowly
of the bed,
avoiding her
my bare
grasp.
feet touching the cold hardwood
This
floor.
wasn't Lila
The house creaked as
anymore.
I stood. A
The
sound so
skinwalker
familiar it
had
made my
done
heart ache.
something to her,
I'd been staying here in my childhood home for
transformed
the past
her
week,
into something
sorting
monstrous.
through the last of Mom's things before
She
putting the
came
place
at
on the
me
market.
again,
Dad had
gnashing
passed a year
teeth
after her,
bared in a
and I couldn't
feral
bear to keep
snarl.
this big empty house full of ghosts.
Tears streaming
I
down
crept down
my
the stairs,
face.
my
I
hand
raised
trailing
the
along the
gun
banister,
and took
where I
aim
could still
with
see the
shaking
notches marking
hands.
my height as I grew up.
I'm sorry,
With
Lila.
each step, the
I'm
sounds
so
and smells from
sorry.
the kitchen grew stronger.
I pulled the
My heart
trigger.
was pounding so hard I could
The
feel it in my
shot
throat.
echoed through the
As I
woods
rounded the
like
corner into
thunder.
the kitchen, I froze.
Lila staggered,
There she was,
a blossom
my
of
mother,
red spreading
standing at the
across
stove,
her chest.
her back to me,
She
wearing the
crumpled
floral
to the
apron I'd given
forest
her for
floor
Mother's Day when I
and
was
lay
10.
still.
Her gray
I
hair was pulled
collapsed
back
to
in
my
its usual
knees
neat
beside
bun,
her,
wisps
a
escaping at
howl
the
of
nape of her
anguish
neck.
tearing from my
Mom,
throat.
My voice came
I
out as a hoarse
cradled her
whisper. She
blood-spattered
turned,
face in my
and I felt the
hands
world
as
tilt
the
on its
light
axis.
faded from
It was
her
her
eyes.
face, every line and wrinkle
Then,
exactly
all
as I
around
remembered.
me,
Her
the
blue eyes
trees
crinkled at the
erupted
corners
with
as she smiled.
spectral green
Good morning,
eyes
sweetheart.
and guttural
I
growls.
hope you're hungry. I'm making your
The
favorite.
skinwalkers
I couldn't move,
emerged from the
couldn't breathe.
shadows.
This was impossible.
Dozens of
I'd watched her
misshapen
die,
abominations
held her hand as she took her
skittering
last
from
breath in
the
that sterile
undergrowth.
hospital room.
They
I buried her.
encircled me, a closing
How-
noose of
are you here?
undulating, noisome
I managed
bodies.
to choke out. She
I
laughed.
surged to
The
my
sound so
feet,
achingly familiar it brought
rage
tears to
and
my
grief,
eyes.
swallowing
Honey,
the last
I've always
tattered
been here.
remnants of my
Now,
sanity.
Sit down.
I
Breakfast is almost
charged
ready.
at the horde,
In a daze,
screaming until
I
my
found myself
throat
sliding
was
into
raw,
my usual chair at the kitchen
emptying
table.
my gun
The
into
old
their
rooster-patterned
midst.
placemats were there.
Searing
the chipped sugar
pain
bowl,
exploded
even Dad's
through
reading
me as
glasses
they
folded
fell
neatly by
on
his
me
empty
in
plate.
a wave of
Mom set a
snapping
plate in front of
fangs
me.
and tearing
Bacon,
claws.
scrambled eggs, and
I
toast
felt my
cut
flesh
diagonally, just the
shredding,
way I liked it as a kid.
my bones
Then she sat across from me, folding her
But I
hands
fought
under her chin
on.
and beaming.
even
Eat up,
as
dear.
the
You
world
look
went
thin.
dark and
I
cold
picked up my fork,
around me.
more out of habit than hunger.
My last thought
As I took a
as
bite,
the
flavors
skinwalkers
exploded on my
dragged
tongue.
me down into
It tasted exactly like I
oblivion
remembered,
was of the
like
old
Saturday mornings in
Chinook
love and home.
legend.
We
The
sat in
one that
silence as I ate,
foretold of
Mom
the
watching
day
me with
the
that
great
same warm
evil
smile.
would rise
but
from
as the initial
earth,
shock began to wear off,
and the
I started
warriors
noticing
who would stand
her
against
movements
it
were slightly off,
unto their
too fluid,
last breath.
like a well-oiled machine rather than a
I
living
could
person.
only pray
And
I
her
had
eyes,
been one
though
of them.
kind, never seemed to
Even
blink.
as I knew my
Mom,
fight was over,
I said slowly, setting down my
darkness,
fork.
drifting
What's going
in a
on?
void
How is this
beyond
possible?
pain, beyond
Her
fear,
smile flickered, just
a
for a
ghost
moment.
of a man who
What do you mean,
once
sweetie?
was.
Everything's fine.
Then
I'm here,
distant voices
just like always.
filtering through the
A
black,
chill ran down my spine.
muffled and distorted
died
as if underwater.
5 years ago. I was
Lucky
there.
to be alive.
She reached across the table,
Severe
taking my hand in hers.
lacerations,
Her skin was
broken
cool.
ribs,
too cool.
punctured lung.
Oh, honey, you must have had a
Ranger
bad dream.
found him
I'm
just
right
in
here.
time,
I pulled my hand away,
babbling
standing
about
up so
monsters.
abruptly my chair scraped across the linoleum.
Light
This isn't
lancing
real.
into
You're
my
not real.
eyes like
Her
needles.
face fell. a look of hurt crossing her
I
features.
tried to turn my
Don't say
head
that.
away, but
Of course
couldn't
I'm real.
move.
I'm your mother.
Panic
No, I
sparked
said,
through the
backing away.
narcotic numbness
My mother is
weighing
dead.
me down.
I don't know what you are, but
Where
you're not
was
her.
I?
As I
Slowly,
spoke, something
aching,
changed in her
I
eyes.
prized
The
open
warmth
my
drained away,
eyelids,
replaced by
squinting
something
against
cold
the
and
glare.
alien.
Sterile
When she smiled
white
now,
walls,
it was all
humming
wrong.
fluorescent
Too wide,
lights,
too many teeth.
the tang of antiseptic.
Now, she said.
I
her
was
voice
in a
taking on an
hospital
odd,
room,
echoing
swaddled
quality.
in bandages.
Is that any way to talk to your
An
mother
IV
after all
line
I've done for you?
snaked from my arm.
She stood, moving towards
Welcome
me
back,
with that too fluid
said
grace.
a voice,
I backed
rough
up until
with
I hit the wall,
exhaustion.
my heart racing.
I rolled my
Stay
head
away
to
from
see
me,
a
I
haggard,
warned, my
stubbled
voice shook.
face smiling
She kept
down
coming,
at me.
her form seeming
I
to flicker and
blinked,
shift.
uncomprehending.
One moment she was my mother, the next something
Frank,
else.
I croaked.
Something with two long
My
limbs and eyes that
supervisor
glowed
from
faintly
the
in the morning
ranger
light.
station nodded,
I just want
patting
us to
my
be a family
unbandaged
again,
shoulder
she
with
said,
a weathered
her
hand.
voice layered now, as if
You
multiple
gave
people were
us
speaking at
quite a
once.
scare, son.
Don't you want that, sweetheart?
Found
Don't you
you
miss me?
half dead in the middle of
I did.
nowhere, covered
God help
in
me.
blood.
I did miss her.
What the hell
For a
happened
moment,
out
I
there?
almost gave in.
I
Almost let
opened my
myself believe
mouth,
this impossible thing,
then
just to
shut
have
it.
her back.
Memories
But then
came
I saw my
flooding
reflection
back.
in the window behind
The
her.
skinwalkers,
I was alone.
Lila,
There was
Mike,
no one there but me.
the horror
That's
in
when
the
I ran.
forest.
Out of
But
the
I
kitchen,
couldn't
through
force
the
the
living room,
words out.
fumbling with the front
They
door lock as I
curdled
heard
on
her.
my tongue
It
like poison.
coming after me. I burst out onto the
Who
porch,
would believe
down
me?
the steps, and
I
into the
hardly
street.
believed it
I
myself.
ran until my lungs burned, until I
Maybe
couldn't
it
run
was
anymore.
better to let
When I
them
finally
think
stopped,
a bear
gasping for
or
air,
a cougar
I
had
found myself in the
attacked
local
us.
park where Mom used to take
Let
me to feed the
Lila
ducks.
and Mike's
As my
families
breathing
have
slowed,
closure
I tried to make sense
untainted
of what had
by
happened.
cosmic evil.
Had it all been a hallucination?
Let the official
vivid dream,
report read
or something
animal
more
attack
sinister?
instead
spent the
of
day wandering the town,
supernatural
too afraid
entities
to go back to the
beyond
house.
human
As
comprehension.
evening fell, I found myself outside Mrs.
I don't
Abernathy's
remember.
place. She'd been our
I
neighbor for as long
mumbled,
as I could
fresh
remember.
tears
A kind
leaking
old
from
widow
the
who always had a
corners of
cookie and
my
a sympathetic
eyes.
ear for the neighborhood kids.
It's all a blur.
Before I knew it, I was knocking
Frank
on her door.
squeezed my shoulder.
When she answered,
Sympathy
her eyes
etched
widened
into
in
the
surprise.
lines of his weathered
Tommy,
face.
Is that you?
It's all right,
Mike,
Ethan.
I
You've
haven't
been
seen
through
you since
hell.
the funeral.
Just
Come in.
rest now.
Come in. I
I
followed her
closed
into her
my
cluttered
eyes,
living room,
letting the
sinking into
tide
an
of
overstuffed
weariness
armchair as
pull
she
me
fussed
back
about making
into
tea.
merciful darkness.
When she finally sat across from me,
In the
her
weeks
roomy eyes
and
were full
months
of concern.
after, I threw
Now,
myself
what's
into
troubling you, dear?
physical therapy,
You look like you've seen a
determined
ghost.
to recover,
The words
to
tumbled out of me
regain
then.
my strength.
Everything that had happened that morning.
But as my
every
body
impossible,
healed, my
terrifying
mind
detail.
fractured a
To her
bit
credit,
more each
Mrs.
day.
Abernathy listened without
I
interrupting,
couldn't escape
her expression
the
growing graver
nightmares.
by the minute.
Flashes
When I finished,
of glowing
she set down her
eyes
teacup
and
with a shaky
glistening
hand.
fangs
Oh,
jolting
Tommy,
me awake.
I was afraid something like this
screaming.
might happen. I leaned
Glimpses
forward.
of distorted
What do you
figures
mean?
lurking in every
She sighed
shadow.
heavily.
The
Your mother,
ceaseless feeling
she was always
of
so
being
devoted to this
watched,
place, to her
stalked,
family.
hunted.
When she was dying,
The
she told me
wilderness
she wished
that
she could
had
stay here
once
forever,
been my
watching over
sanctuary
you all.
now filled
I'm
me
afraid
with
she may have
only
gotten her
dread.
wish in a way.
The
chill
primal
ran through me.
awareness that there
Are
were
you saying-
things out there
What are you
beyond human reckoning.
Mrs. Abernathy reached out,
Hungry
patting
things
my
in the
hand.
forest that
This
walked
house,
like men.
this town,
And
it has
to
a way of
chase
holding on to
that
people
knowledge
sometimes,
was to
especially
court
those who aren't ready to
madness.
let go. I've seen it
I
before.
quit the
over
ranger
years.
service,
It's not always.
moved to
pleasant.
the city,
I
took
thought
a
about the
job
thing
as
wearing my
night
mother's face,
security guard.
how it had changed when I denied it.
Told myself
What can
that
I do?
concrete
You
and
need to let her go,
electric
Tommy.
light could keep
Truly let
the
her go.
demons at bay.
And you need to leave this place.
But in the
Sell the
darkest
house.
hours
Move on with
before
your life.
dawn,
It's what she would have
I
wanted.
still see their eyes
I
in
nodded
every
slowly,
corner.
feeling a weight
Hear
lift off
their
my shoulders.
growls
Deep down,
echoing up
I think
from
I'd
the
known this all
forgotten
along.
places below.
The next day, I went back to the house.
And I know
It was
the
silent,
truth.
empty.
The
No smell of
skinwalkers are
bacon,
still out
no sound
there,
of humming,
waiting,
But as I packed up the last of the
watching.
boxes, I could have sworn
No
I felt a
one is
presence
safe
watching me.
in the dark.
Not menacing now, but sad. Resigned. As I loaded the final box into my car, I turned back to look at the house one last time. For just a moment, I thought I saw her in the window, my real mother, smiling softly.
Growing up
raising her
as
hand
an
in
only
farewell.
child in the
"Goodbye,
rainy,
Mom," I
foggy
whispered. "I
coastal
love you."
city of Glendale,
Then I got in my car and drove away.
I relished
leaving the
the
ghosts of my
freedom
past
that
behind.
came with being
It's
home
been a year since
alone
then.
while my
I sold
parents
the house,
were away.
moved to the city, started
At
a new life.
16 years
Sometimes
old
I still
in the
dream of
summer
that
of
morning, of the
2018,
impossibility of bacon frying
they
and my mother's
trusted
smile.
me enough to
But it
leave
doesn't
me
frighten me
by
anymore,
myself for a
because
long
now I
weekend
understand. Love
while
doesn't
they
die,
went
not
to
really.
catch their
It just
favorite
changes form.
band on
And
tour.
sometimes, if we're lucky, it gives us one last
Little
chance to
did
say
I
goodbye.
know the relaxing solitude I usually enjoyed would be shattered by a series of inexplicable events that began
The
on
first
that
photo arrived on a
fateful
Tuesday.
Friday afternoon.
By Friday, I was convinced I
The
was losing my
rain
mind.
pounded against the
Or worse,
living room
someone,
window as I
something,
sat on the
was stealing
couch,
it from me.
engrossed
started
in the
innocently
game
enough.
of Halo Reach on
I
my
just finished my
Xbox.
morning run, sweaty and
The
breathless,
thick
when I
fog
noticed an
seemed
envelope
to
poking out from under
swallow
my
up the
apartment door.
typical city
No name,
sounds,
no return address.
leaving only
just a
the
plain
steady
white
white
envelope.
noise of the
Curious,
downpour.
I tore it open.
Feeling
Inside
a
was a
bit
single photograph.
frustrated after a
My blood ran
lackluster
cold as I
match,
stared at the image.
I glanced
It was me,
outside
from just
and had
moments
to
ago,
do a double take
stretching on the
at the
sidewalk outside
strange
my building
sight
after
that
my run.
greeted me.
but the angle was all
There
wrong.
on the sidewalk
photo
in
had been
front
taken
of
from
my
above,
house
as
walked
if the
an
photographer had been hovering
unusually
20
tall
feet in the air.
woman,
I rushed
moving
to the
at
window,
an eerily
scanning the
slow
street,
pace.
the neighboring buildings.
As I
Nothing.
studied her,
No
more
drones, no
disconcerting
scaffolding,
details
Nothing that could
emerged.
explain the impossible angle.
Despite the chilly, wet
I
weather,
convinced myself it was
she
some sort
wore
of trick.
only a
Maybe a
thin,
neighbor with a
low-cut
really long
dress
selfie stick
without
and too
any
much time on their
coat or
hands.
jacket.
I tossed the photo in a drawer
Her
and
short
tried to forget
black
about
hair
it.
clung
But
to
the
her
next day,
pretty
there was
face,
another envelope.
which was
This time,
turned
the photo
slightly
showed me at
downward.
work, hunched over my computer.
Judging by
Again,
the maple
the angle
tree
was
she
wrong,
passed,
like the
I
camera had been embedded
estimated
in the
her
ceiling
height to
directly
be
above my
around
desk.
6'6".
But our office had solid walls.
Why
There was
on
no way
earth
anyone could
would
have taken
someone
that
be
shot.
walking
By the
so
third day,
slowly and
when I found a
nothing
photo
but a
of myself
flimsy
sleeping,
dress
taken
through
from an
this
angle that would have put the
miserable
photographer
rain?
floating above
I
my bed.
wondered.
I knew this was no
It was
prank.
certainly
I
odd,
called in sick to work and
but
spent
I
the day
figured
pacing my
it wasn't
apartment,
any of my
jumping at every
business.
sound. I searched every inch
Shaking
of the
my
place for
head,
hidden
I
cameras but
queued
found
up
nothing.
for another
I
game,
even called a security company.
but I couldn't
But their suite
resist
came up empty,
sneaking
too.
a few more
Maybe you
peeks
should
at
talk
the
to someone.
mysterious woman
My best
as
friend
she
Jess suggested
continued
gently
her
when I called her in a
snail-like
panic.
journey past
You've
my
been under
house.
a lot of stress lately.
Just as she
But I knew
reached
what I
the
was seeing.
edge of my
These
window's
photos were
view,
real, and they were
I could
impossible.
have sworn she
On the fourth
turned
day,
and looked
things
directly
escalated.
at me
The
before
envelope contained
disappearing
not one
around the
photo,
corner.
but a series of them. Me
A
brushing my
slight
teeth,
shiver
me
ran
checking
through
my phone
me,
on the subway,
though
me
I
buying
couldn't
coffee,
quite
all from
pinpoint
angles
why.
that defied the laws of physics.
The
But it was
rest
the
of
last
the
photo that
evening
truly
passed
terrified
without
me.
incident.
It showed me
The
opening
strange
the previous
woman
day's envelope,
eventually
my face
slipping
twisted
from my
in fear,
mind as I
and in the
lost
background,
myself
barely
in
visible,
binge-watching a
was a
new
shadowy
Netflix
figure.
series.
watching me.
But at
I dropped
around
the
10
photos like they
p.m.,
burned me. My
movement
heart pounding
outside
so
the
hard I
window
thought it might
once
burst out of my
again
chest.
drew my
I couldn't
gaze.
stay here. I had to get out.
The heavy rain
I threw some clothes
persisted,
into a bag and
but
bolted from
the
my
dense
apartment.
fog
I didn't
had
have a plan.
mostly
I just knew I
dissipated,
needed to be somewhere,
allowing
anywhere
the soft
else.
orange glow of the
I ended up at a cheap
streetlights
motel
to
on the outskirts of
penetrate
town.
the darkness.
As I lay on the lumpy bed, staring at
And
the water-stained
there,
ceiling,
illuminated
sense
under
of what was
one of
happening.
those lamps,
who was doing this?
was the
How were they getting these
unmistakable
impossible shots?
figure of the tall
why me?
woman in the dress.
Sleep eluded me.
She was
Every creak
moving
and rustle
even
sending my
more
heart
slowly
racing.
than before,
When dawn finally broke, I felt like I'd
barely
aged years
covering
in
a
a single
foot
night.
every
I
10
was in the
seconds.
shower, trying to wash away the grime of
I
fear and
paused the
sleeplessness.
show,
When I heard it,
unable to look
soft thud
away
from the
as
main
she
room, like
gradually
something being
inched
slid under
her
the door.
way down the sidewalk.
it couldn't be.
As she
Not
passed directly
With
beneath
shaking
the
hands,
street
I
light,
turned off the water
I
and wrapped a
let
towel
out
around
an
myself.
audible gasp.
I crept to the door, my bare feet
The
silent on the
woman
cold
looked
tile.
like she had
There,
been
on the
through
faded
hell.
carpet, was an envelope.
Her
A
dress
scream
was
bubbled up in my
torn
throat,
in several
but I swallowed
places,
it down. This was impossible.
and her
No
pale
one knew I was here.
skin was
I
smeared
hadn't
with
used my credit card,
grime and
hadn't
mud,
called anyone. I'd paid
as
cash,
if she had
given a
taken
fake
a
name.
fall on the
For a long
soggy
moment,
ground.
I just stared at the envelope,
She seemed
water
to be
dripping from my
struggling,
hair onto the floor.
her
Part of
posture
me wanted to run,
suggesting
to keep
pain
running
and
and never
fatigue.
stop. But a smaller,
Concern
braver part
overpowered
knew
my
I had to
initial
face this.
hesitation.
I picked up the envelope
This
with trembling
woman was
fingers and tore it
clearly
open.
in trouble
The
and
photo
needed
inside
help.
made my knees buckle.
I leaped
sank to
up
the
from
floor,
the
my
couch
vision
and
blurring with
hurried to
tears
the
of terror
front
and
door,
confusion.
flinging
was
it
me,
open and stepping
now,
out onto the
Sitting on the
sheltered
motel room
porch.
floor, opening an envelope.
But as I raised
looked up,
my hand
my
to
eyes darting
call out
wildly
to
around the
her,
room. But I
she
was alone.
vanished.
There was no one there.
It had only
no
taken
camera,
a second
nothing
for
that could have
my
taken this
eyes
photo
to
in the
leave
split
her
second
as
since
I
I'd opened the
exited
envelope.
the house.
As the impossibility
But
of it all crashed
somehow,
over me,
in that
I noticed
brief
something
moment,
else about the photo.
she had disappeared.
In the mirror behind me, barely visible,
Even if
was
she
that
had
same
broken
shadowy
into
figure
a
I'd seen
sudden
before.
sprint,
But this time,
there was no
it was
way
clearer.
she could have
This
moved
time,
out of
I could
my
make out
line of
features.
sight that
It was
quickly.
me, but not me as I
I
am now.
stood there stunned
This was an
for a
older version
long
of
minute,
myself,
trying to
gaunt and
make
haunted
sense
looking,
of what
with
I had
eyes that
just
seemed to glow
witnessed.
with an unnatural light.
A thorough
I
scan
don't know how
of
long
the
I sat there,
surrounding
staring at
area
that photo,
offered
my
no
mind
clues
reeling.
to her whereabouts.
It could have been minutes or hours.
Deeply
eventually,
unsettled,
A strange calm
I
settled over me,
retreated back inside,
with a certainty that terrified
double-checking
me.
that I had locked the
couldn't run from
door
this.
behind me.
Whatever was happening,
Sleep did
Wherever
not
these
come
photos were
easily
coming from,
that night.
it was
My
tied to me
mind
in a way I couldn't
replaying the
escape.
bizarre
I got dressed in
encounter
a daze and
over
checked
and
out of the
over as
motel.
I tossed
As I
and
drove back to
turned.
my apartment, my mind
To my
raced with
surprise, I
possibilities,
ended up
each more
sleeping
outlandish
fairly
than the
late
last.
the next
Time
morning,
travel,
finally
parallel
dragging
universes,
myself
some
out
kind
of
of psychic
bed
projection.
around 9:30.
When I got home, there was
The
another envelope waiting
relentless
for me.
rain drumming
This
on the
time,
roof
I didn't hesitate
and the
to open it.
lingering
Inside was
unease
a
from
note,
the previous
written in
evening's
handwriting eerily
events
similar to my own.
made the cozy
camera doesn't lie,
interior of my
but time
home
does.
feel like
Find
a
me where it all
welcome
began.
refuge.
I knew immediately where I had to
After a
go.
quick shower,
An hour later,
I
I
padded
was
into
standing
the
outside my
kitchen to
childhood home,
refill my
a place I
cat
hadn't visited in
Jasper's
years.
food and water
the house
bowls,
looked smaller than I remembered.
taking a
the paint
moment
peeling,
to chuckle
the garden
half-heartedly at his
It had been abandoned
voracious
since my parents died.
enthusiasm for his
Too full of memories
breakfast.
for me to face selling it.
Still
As I walked
puzzling
up the
over
cracked
whether
driveway,
I had
I saw movement
imagined
in
the
an
whole
upstairs window.
thing with the
My
woman,
old bedroom.
I
heart
settled
pounding.
back
I made
onto
my
the
way inside.
couch and lost
The house was
myself
musty,
in a few
filled
more
with dust and
rounds of
echoes of the
Halo.
past. I climbed the
But my
stairs slowly,
focus
each creaking
kept
step bringing me
drifting
closer
to the rain-splattered
what?
window,
the truth.
my
madness,
eyes flicking
both.
back to it between
I pushed
matches.
open my bedroom door, and there I was,
When the clock
the
hit
older me from the
noon,
photos,
I
sitting
set
on my
down
old
my
bed,
controller
camera in his
and
lap.
ventured into
"Hello,"
the kitchen
he said,
for a
his voice
snack and
gravelly
some
with age
water,
and something else.
stretching
something
out
alien.
my stiff muscles.
I've been waiting a long time for this.
As I returned to the
What are
living
you?
room,
I managed to
sipping
choke
from
out.
my glass,
He smiled,
my
but it didn't reach
gaze
his
was
eyes.
again drawn
Those
to the
terrible,
window
glowing
out of
eyes.
habit.
I'm you. Or
I
rather,
nearly
what you
choked
become
on the water.
in a future that no longer
There
exists.
she was,
He explained then,
the woman
in
from
halting
last
sentences
night,
punctuated by bitter laughs,
shuffling down the
about the accident,
sidewalk through the
one that hadn't
pouring
happened
rain
yet,
and thick
the one
fog.
that would send me hurtling through time
The
and space,
daylight, dim
untethered,
as it
able to
was,
see every moment of my
provided a
life, but
clearer
unable to change
look at
anything,
her
unable to
deteriorating
do anything but
state.
watch. But then I found this,
Her tall
he said,
frame
holding
was
up the camera.
hunched over,
It looked ancient,
arms
covered in
wrapped
strange
around
symbols.
herself as
It lets
if
me reach
warding
back,
off the cold.
influence things, and now,
What
finally,
remained of her
warn
dress hung off
I
her
sank
in
to the
tatters,
floor, my mind struggling to
plastered
process
to
it
her
all.
skin,
Warn me
and
about what?
revealing far too
choice you're
much
about
of
to
the
make.
glistening,
one that leads
muck-streaked
to all of
flesh beneath.
He gestured at himself,
I
his
stood
twisted
frozen,
form, his glowing
glass
eyes.
halfway to my
You
lips,
can change it.
as she
You have
moved
to.
past at an
How? I
agonizingly
whispered.
slow pace.
He stood then, moving towards me with that
Movement
unnatural
in my
grace I'd seen in the
peripheral
photos.
vision caught my
By taking my
attention.
place, by becoming me,
Across the street,
I tried to back away.
a man
I was
walked
frozen in
briskly
place.
in the opposite
As his hand touched
direction,
my shoulder,
apparently
jolt of electricity run
undeterred
through
by
me.
the foul
the
weather.
world seemed to tilt and spin.
I waited
And
for
then I was
him to
floating,
react to the
watching as my
woman's
younger self
obvious
blinked in
distress,
confusion, looking down
to
at the camera
stop
now in his
and offer her
my
aid.
hands.
But to my shock,
What have you done?
he didn't even spare her a glance
asked.
dot.
But I was
It
already
was as
fading,
if she
the edges of
wasn't
my
even
vision growing
there,
dark.
completely
The last thing I saw was
invisible
myself,
to him.
young and terrified.
Just as
clutching
the
that
man
cursed camera.
passed out of view,
I don't know how
the
long I've
woman
been like
suddenly
this.
stopped
Time has
and
no meaning
clutched
when you
at
can
her
see every
chest,
moment at once.
swaying
I watched
for a
myself
moment
grow up,
before collapsing
fateful
to her
choice,
knees on
become
the
the thing I feared,
rain-soaked pavement.
and I watched myself warn.
Heart pounding,
myself.
I dropped my
It's a loop,
glass,
endless
barely
and
registering the shatter.
But maybe,
as I
someday,
bolted for the
I'll
door,
find a way to break it,
phone in
to
hand.
truly change things.
If she
Until
was
then,
having a
I watch,
medical
and I wait.
emergency, she
And
needed
sometimes,
help
when
immediately.
the cosmic winds are just right,
I
send a
raced
photo,
down the short
a warning,
path from my porch to the sidewalk,
myself,
ready
to you,
to call an
to
ambulance.
anyone who will listen.
But
Be
when I
careful of the
reached the
choices you make.
spot where I
Be
was
careful of the
certain I
paths
had
you take.
seen her fall,
Because
there was
sometimes
nothing.
the person haunting you is
No
yourself.
crumpled, unconscious figure. No blood or signs of a struggle. She had simply vanished. Unnerved, I jogged
The
a
splash of
little
our midnight
ways
swim
up
was
and
drowned out
down
by
the
the thunderous
sidewalk,
pounding of my heart when I saw the
scanning the
message scrawled in
surroundings
blood.
for any
Someone,
trace of her.
or something, had been
But
watching
the
us,
street was
and now they wanted
deserted.
us to know it.
The unrelenting
supposed to be a
rain,
perfect
the
summer
only
night.
movement.
My girlfriend, Lena, and I had
Crouching
been cooped up
down to
studying for
where I
finals all
thought
week,
she had
and with the
collapsed,
heat wave that had settled over
I
the city,
noticed
we were
something
desperate for some
bizarre.
relief. The idea
A
of a
small
late-night dip in my
patch of the
backyard pool seemed
sidewalk
like the perfect
that
way to
felt
unwind.
warm to the touch,
Race you to the deep end,
even
Lena
hot,
called out, already halfway
despite
across
the
the patio
chilly
before I could
water
even
pouring
respond.
down on it.
I chuckled, admiring the way
Jerking
the
my
moonlight
hand
glinted
back,
off her
I
wet
muttered
skin as she
in
dove in with
disbelief.
barely a ripple.
What in the world?
I followed suit, the cool
I
water
barely
a blessed
slept a
relief
wink
against my skin.
Saturday night.
We
My
splashed and
mind
played, our
churning
laughter
with
echoing in the
questions
still
and
night air.
unsettling
It felt
possibilities.
like we were in our own little world.
By
far
the
removed
time
from the
weak
stress of
sunlight
exams and the
began to
oppressive heat of the
filter
day.
through my
That's when we heard
rain-streaked window on
A
Sunday
rustling
morning,
sound, coming from
I
beyond
was
the fence
already
that separated my yard
downstairs
from the neighbors.
nursing a cup of strong
brief,
coffee,
So quick I almost thought I'd imagined
determined
it.
to stay
But Lena's
alert
wide
in
eyes told me
case
she'd
the
heard it too.
mysterious woman
Probably just
made
a raccoon,
another
I said,
appearance.
trying to sound more
But
confident
the
than I
day
felt.
passed
They're
without
always getting into
incident.
Mrs. Johnson's trash
No
cans.
sign of the
Lena
tall
nodded,
figure
but I
in
could
the
see the
tattered
unease in her
dress.
eyes. Maybe we should head in,
As
she
evening
suggested,
fell,
her voice
I
barely
tried
above a
to
whisper.
convince
I was
myself
about to
that
agree
the
when another
stress
sound
of
reached us.
being alone
This
for
one was
the
different.
weekend
A soft
had
scraping,
caused me to
like nails on
imagine
wood.
the whole thing.
It was coming from the other side of the
Just
fence,
an
right where
extremely
we'd heard the
vivid,
rustling.
recurring
My blood ran cold.
hallucination
This was no raccoon.
brought on by too many
Inside.
hours of video
Now,
games
I
and
hissed,
junk food.
already moving towards the pool ladder.
It was a
Lena didn't
flimsy
need to be told twice.
explanation
We scrambled
but
out of
the
the pool,
alternative
grabbing our towels and
that I
practically
had
running to the back
actually
door.
seen a
Once
woman
inside, we
appear
stood
and
dripping on the kitchen
disappear
tile, our hearts
was
racing.
too disturbing
What do
to
you think that
consider,
was? Lena asked, her voice
figuring
shaky.
I should
I shook my head,
probably do
trying to calm
something
my nerves.
productive
I don't
before
know.
my parents
Probably
returned the
nothing.
next day.
Just some animal.
I spent a
even
few
as I
hours
said it,
cleaning the
I knew I
house
didn't
from
believe it.
top to
There
bottom.
had been something deliberate
The
about those
mindless
sounds.
work
Something that
providing
sent
a
shivers down
welcome
my spine despite the
distraction.
warm night air. We
By
decided
the
to try and shake
time
it
I
off,
crawled
convincing
into
ourselves
bed
we were
just
just being
after
paranoid.
midnight,
We made some popcorn,
I was
put on a movie,
exhausted,
and curled up on
my
the couch.
eyes heavy
By the
and
time
gritty.
the credits rolled, the incident by the pool
Sleep
seemed
was
like a
just
distant memory.
beginning to
I should
overtake
probably
me
head
when
home,
3
Lena said,
distinct knocks
stifling a yawn.
echoed through the quiet
late.
house,
I walked her to the
causing
door,
me to sit
giving her a
bolt
quick kiss
upright
goodbye.
in bed.
As she drove
My
away, I
drowsiness
couldn't shake the feeling that I
evaporating.
should have insisted she stay the
They
night.
were heavy,
But that was silly,
deliberate,
right?
and
Nothing had actually happened.
unmistakably coming
I locked
from
up
the
and headed
front
to bed,
door.
telling myself I was
I
being
held my
ridiculous.
breath,
But sleep
hoping
didn't
I
come
had
easily.
imagined it.
Every creak of the house,
But a minute
every
later,
rustle
the
of
3
leaves
knocks
outside my
sounded
window
again,
had me on edge.
sending my heart
Then I finally
into
drifted off.
overdrive.
My dreams were filled with shadowy
Who
figures
could
and scraping sounds.
possibly be at the
The
door
next morning,
this late?
I woke to the sun
And
streaming
in this
through my
weather,
window, feeling groggy but
my
relieved.
parents weren't due
In the light
back
of day,
until
last
tomorrow
night's fear
afternoon.
seemed foolish. I
Pulse
stretched,
pounding
deciding a
in
morning
my
swim would be the
ears.
perfect
I
way to start the
crept
day.
downstairs
I
as
padded downstairs and
silently
out
as
onto the
I
patio,
could,
the concrete
not
already warm under
wanting
my
to
bare
alert
feet.
whoever
I was halfway
was
to the pool when I
outside to
saw
my
it,
presence.
and the world seemed to tilt on its axis.
Reaching the front
There,
door, I
on the white
pressed my
concrete
eye
of the
to
pool
the
deck was a
peephole,
message, written in
my
what looked
clammy
horribly like
hands
blood.
shaking
We see you.
slightly.
My stomach
But the
lurched.
porch was
This
empty.
couldn't be real.
No sign
It
of
had
a
to be a
late
prank,
night
a sick joke.
visitor.
But as I stumbled closer,
Perplexed
the
and
metallic
more
scent
than
hit
a
me,
little
and
spooked,
I knew,
I unlocked the
real.
door and pulled it
This was
open
blood.
just a crack,
with shaking hands,
peering
I
out
pulled out my
into
phone
the
and called Lena.
rain-soaked night.
"You need to come over," I said,
At
as soon as
first
she answered.
glance,
Now,
everything appeared
she
normal.
must have heard the panic in my
The
voice
street
because she didn't
quiet
ask
and
questions.
deserted.
Just said she'd be right over.
But as I made to
While I
close
waited,
the door,
I paced the kitchen,
something
alternating
caught
between
my
staring
eye.
out at the horrifying
A
message and checking
small,
every lock in
bright
the house.
splash of
When Lena
color
arrived,
on the
her
weathered
face went pale
welcome
as I
mat.
showed her the pool deck. "Oh
I
my God,"
stooped to
she
pick it
whispered.
up,
"We have to call
my
the police."
breath catching
I
in
nodded,
my throat
already
as I
dialing.
examined it
The next
under
few
the
hours were a
porch
blur of
light.
police questions and crime
It
scene
was
tape.
a lollipop,
They took samples of the blood,
a large
dusted for
red
fingerprints,
one,
asked
the
us over
kind
and
you
over
might
if we'd
see
seen
at
or
a
heard anything
county
suspicious.
fair or candy shop.
"Just some rustling," I said,
The
feeling
cellophane
helpless.
wrapper was tied
thought it
with
was
a
an animal.
thin black
The
ribbon.
police were sympathetic but
The
not particularly
material
helpful.
soft and
With
silky
no signs of forced
between
entry
my
and no clear
fingers.
threat, there wasn't
There
much they
was
could
no
do.
note,
They advised
no
us to stay vigilant,
explanation for
install
its
some security
presence.
cameras, and call
I
immediately
took
if anything
the
else happened.
strange gift inside,
After they left,
locking the
Lena and I
door
sat at my kitchen
securely
table,
behind me.
both of us too shaken to speak,
In the harsh
The message
light
had been
of the
cleaned away,
kitchen,
but I could
I
still see
turned
it
the
every time I closed my
lollipop
eyes.
over in my hands,
"What do we do now?"
searching
Lena
for
finally
any
asked, her
identifying
voice small.
marks or labels.
I reached across the table, taking her
But
hand in
there
mine.
was nothing.
"We'll figure it out.
Just
Maybe-
the generic,
Maybe it was just a one-time
almost
thing,
too
a sick
perfect
prank."
candy,
But even as I said
and
it,
that
I knew
unusual
neither of us
ribbon,
believed it. Whatever
which
this
seemed
was,
to
it
absorb
felt
the
far from
light
over.
around it.
The next few days were tense.
Something
I
about
installed
it
security
felt
cameras,
off,
changed all the locks,
a
even
niggling
considered getting
sense
a dog.
of wrongness
Lena stayed
that I
over,
couldn't
neither
quite
of us
put
wanting to
my
be
finger
alone.
on.
We jumped at every sound,
After a few
scrutinized every
minutes
shadow.
of debate, I
Sleep became a
decided
luxury
to
we could
err on
rarely
the
afford.
side of
It was
caution
on the third night that it
and
happened again.
tossed the
We were
lollipop
both
in
finally
the
asleep
trash,
when a loud crash jolted
not
us awake.
willing to
It
risk
came from downstairs,
tasting it.
the sound of breaking
But
glass,
the ribbon I
my heart in
kept,
my throat. I grabbed the
sliding
baseball
it
bat
from
I'd
the
started keeping by the
cellophane
bed
and
and crept towards
tying
the
it
stairs.
around my wrist
Lena right
like a
behind me.
bracelet.
The house was dark and silent.
It was silly,
but I could feel a presence.
but I felt
a
an
weight
odd
in the
sort
air
of
that hadn't been there
connection
before.
to it.
As
A
we reached the bottom of
compulsion
the
to
stairs, I
keep
saw
it
it.
close.
The living room window was shattered,
Monday
glass
morning
glittering on the
dawned
carpet.
chilly
And there,
and gray.
pinned to the curtain
The
with what
rain
looked like a hunting
finally
knife,
tapering
was a
off
piece of
to a
paper.
light drizzle.
With trembling hands,
I was
I pulled the
finishing
knife
up
free
the
and unfolded the
breakfast
note.
dishes
the message,
when I heard
again
the
in what looked
welcome
like blood,
sound of my
made my blood
parents'
run
car
cold.
pulling
You
into
can't
the
hide from us.
driveway.
Lena let out a choked
Relief
sob beside
washed
me.
over
I
me
pulled her
as they
close,
came
my
through
mind
the
racing.
door.
This couldn't
Their
go on.
presence
We needed
chasing
help.
away the
Real help.
lingering
Beyond what the local
unease
police could
from
provide.
the strange
That's when I
events
remembered
of
my
the
uncle,
weekend.
a retired detective who
Over
now worked as
lunch,
a private
they
investigator.
regaled me
If
with
anyone could help us,
stories from
it
their
would be
trip,
him.
raving
The next
about
morning,
the band's
after another sleepless night
electrifying
and another round of
performance.
useless police questions, I
When
called
they
him.
asked how
To his
things
credit,
had gone
he didn't
in their
question the urgency
absence,
in my voice.
I
Just said he'd be
hesitated
there
for
by
a
nightfall.
moment before
Uncle
replying
Mike
with a
arrived just as the
simple
sun was setting,
"Fine."
his weathered face grim as I filled him in on what
I
had
had
been
never
happening.
been one to keep
He listened without
secrets from
interrupting,
my parents.
his eyes sharp and
But
calculating.
something held me back
got yourself
from
in quite a situation,
divulging
kiddo,
the unnerving
he said when I finished.
encounters with
But
the
don't worry,
woman in the
we'll figure
tattered
this out.
dress.
Over the
I
next few
couldn't
days,
shake the
Uncle Mike
feeling that
became our shadow.
speaking about her
He
would
analyzed the security
somehow
footage,
make her more
interviewed neighbors,
real,
and set up
more
additional surveillance
dangerous.
equipment. He even
As
brought
the
in some of his
days
old police buddies to keep an
turned
eye
to
on the
weeks,
house. For
I
a while,
began
it
to
seemed to work.
relax,
Days passed without
settling
incident,
back into
and I
the
started to hope that
familiar
maybe,
rhythm of
just maybe, it was
school
over.
and hanging out
But
with
then came the night
friends.
that changed everything. It
I
was past
didn't
midnight.
see the woman
Lena and I
again,
were asleep.
and
Uncle Mike
gradually
was
I was
monitoring the
able to
security feeds
convince
downstairs.
myself that the
I woke to
whole
the sound of
thing
Lena
had
screaming.
been a
I bolted
bizarre,
upright, my heart
stress-induced
pounding.
hallucination.
Lena was sitting up in bed, her eyes
The
wide with
black
terror, pointing at the
ribbon
bedroom window.
remained tied around
There,
my
written in
wrist,
glowing paint that
a
seemed to
subtle
drip down the glass,
reminder of that
was another message.
unsettling weekend.
Time's up.
But I
Before I
managed
could
to
react,
push it to
the
the
lights in
back
the room
of my
flickered and
mind.
died. In the sudden
Until a
darkness,
few
I heard a
days
sound
ago,
that made my blood run
when
cold.
she
The
returned,
soft click of our bedroom door
it
opening.
was late,
Uncle
close
Mike?
to
I
midnight,
called out, my voice
and
trembling.
I was on
But
my
the figure
way
that
home
stepped into
from
the
a
room was
study
not my
session
uncle.
at my
It was
best
tall,
friend Ava's
unnaturally so,
house.
its limbs too long
The
and jointed in all
normally
the wrong
packed
places.
subway platform
In the
was
faint moonlight
deserted,
streaming through the window,
the
I could see
fluorescent
its
lights
face,
casting
or rather,
harsh
the lack
shadows
of
on
one.
the concrete.
Where features should have been,
Stifling
there was
a
only
yawn,
smooth,
I
pale
pulled
skin.
out my phone to
Lena's
check the
scream caught
train
in her throat as
schedule,
the thing tilted its head,
silently
regarding us
willing
with
the
an eyeless
minutes
gaze.
to tick by
Then,
faster.
slowly,
A prickle
deliberately,
of awareness
it raised a
made me
long-fingered
glance
hand
up,
and pointed at us.
and my
That's
blood
when I heard
ran
it.
cold.
A voice.
There,
not from the creature.
directly across the
It seemed to
tracks
come from
on the
everywhere and
opposite
nowhere at once,
platform,
filling the
stood
room
the
with its
woman.
chilling whisper. We warned
Her
you.
impossibly
Now,
tall
you're
figure
ours.
was
The
unmistakable,
last thing I remember is a
even
blinding
at
flash
this
of light.
distance.
And then,
But gone
nothing.
were the tattered
I don't know
dress
where we are
and
now.
dirt-streaked skin.
Lena and I are together.
Instead,
place,
she wore a sleek
not like
black
anywhere I've ever
dress
seen.
that hugged her
The laws of
curves,
physics don't seem to
the
apply
hem
here.
falling just
Sometimes I
above
think
her
I see
knees.
familiar things.
Delicate
backyard pool,
glasses
Lena's
perched
car,
on her nose,
My uncle's worried face.
framing eyes
they
that
flicker and
seemed
change
to
like
bore
mirages.
into mine.
And always,
I stood
always,
frozen,
I feel them
phone
watching.
forgotten in my
The eyeless
hand,
ones.
as she
The ones who
raised a
took us.
graceful arm and
I don't know if
waved
anyone
at
will
me.
ever read this.
A
I
small
don't even know how I'm
smile
writing it or where
playing
these
at the
words will end up.
corners of her full
But if you're
lips.
out there, if you're reading this,
The gesture
please,
was almost
be
friendly,
careful. Listen
but
to the
there was
rustling in the
something
night.
predatory
Pay attention
about
to the
it.
shadows that move when
A
they shouldn't.
sense of
And whatever you do, don't
anticipation
ignore the
that
warnings.
made my skin
Because they're
crawl.
watching. They're always watching.
As
And
I
once they've set
watched
their
in
sights on
mute
you,
horror,
There's no escape.
her other hand drifted to her left wrist, long fingers toying with a thin band of black that encircled it.
The moment
My
I opened
gaze
that old
dropped to
leather-bound
my
book,
own wrist,
I knew I'd made a terrible
to
mistake.
the identical
But by
ribbon
then,
I had
was too late.
impulsively tied there
The
all
story had
those
already
weeks
begun to write
ago.
itself into reality.
The
all started
revelation
on my
hit
10th
me
birthday.
like a punch to
My
the
parents,
gut.
knowing my love for all things
She
old
knew.
and mysterious, had scoured
She
antique
had
shops
left
for the
the
perfect gift.
lollipop,
They
had
found it in
somehow
a dusty
marked
corner of a
me
shop
with
that
the
smelled of
ribbon.
mothballs and forgotten memories.
Before
a book
I
so
could
old,
react,
the title had
a
faded from its
train
spine.
came
It's
barreling
blank
into the
inside,
station,
My mother said as I unwrapped
screeching
it.
to a halt
Her
in
voice
front of
tinged
the
with
woman
apologetic
and
disappointment.
obscuring her from
But I
view.
thought you might like to write your own
I
stories in it.
blinked rapidly,
If only she'd
my
known what would happen when I
paralysis
did.
broken, and
That
took
night,
a stumbling
tucked under my
step
covers with a
back
flashlight,
from the edge of
I
the
opened the book for
platform.
the first time. The
When the
pages were
train
yellowed with
pulled
age,
away a minute
but
later,
crisp and unmarked.
she was gone.
I put pen to paper
The
and began to
opposite
write.
platform,
Once upon a
as
time, I
deserted
scrawled,
as it had
There
been
was a
when
boy
I
who
first
could make his dreams
arrived.
come true. I
I
fell asleep
barely
with the book
remember
clutched to
the
my
rest
chest,
of the journey
my mind
home.
swirling with possibilities.
My mind reeling
The next
as
morning,
I tried to
I woke to find a
process what I
shimmering
had
golden
seen.
key on my nightstand.
It had to have
It
been
hadn't
her,
been there when I went to bed. I was
the
sure of it.
same tall,
picked it up,
beautiful
marveling at
woman
its intricate
who had
design and
haunted my
unexpected weight.
thoughts for weeks.
That's when I noticed the book.
But how
it had
was
fallen
it
open
possible?
in the night, and there on the
And
page where
what
I'd
did
written
she
my story,
want with me?
Starter was a continuation in handwriting that wasn't
With
mine.
shaking hands,
The
I
key to his
unlocked
dreams
the front
lay
door
waiting,
and slipped
golden and
inside,
gleaming, ready to
engaging
unlock
the
a world of
deadbolt
wonder and
behind
danger.
me.
My heart
The
raced.
house was
This was
quiet
impossible.
and still.
And yet there it
My
was.
parents
both on
having
the
gone
page
to
and in my
bed
hand.
hours ago.
Excited and a little scared,
I crept
I
up
added to
the
the story.
stairs to my
the
room.
boy used the key to
My
open a
heart
door that hadn't been
pounding
there
so
before.
loudly, I was
No
sure
sooner had I
it
written the
would
words
wake
than I
them.
heard a creak behind me.
Closing
turned
the
to find a
door
door in my
softly
bedroom
behind
wall,
me.
ornate and ancient
I
looking,
sank
with a
onto the
keyhole
edge
that
of
seemed
my
to beckon.
bed. My
hands
legs
trembling,
suddenly
I inserted
weak.
the key and turned it.
I
door
fumbled
swung
with
open
the
to reveal
ribbon
not
on
my
my
closet,
wrist,
but a
intending to
sun-dappled forest
yank it
glade that
off and
definitely didn't
stuff it
belong in
out of
suburban
sight.
Ohio. I
But
slammed the
as
door
my
shut,
fingers
my heart
brushed
pounding.
the silky
This couldn't be
material,
real.
a wave
dreaming.
of calm
I had to
washed
be.
over me.
But when I pinched
My
myself, I
racing
didn't
heart
wake up.
slowing and my
The door was still
breathing
there,
evening
the
out.
key still warm in my hand.
It was almost
Over the
as
next
if
few
the
days, I
ribbon was
experimented.
alive,
I wrote about
responding
flying
to
and found
my
myself
touch
soaring
with
over my
a
neighborhood.
soothing energy
I described
that
a friendly
drained the
dragon,
fear
and
and
it appeared in my
confusion
backyard,
from my
much to
body.
the neighbors' alarm.
I lay
I
back
even
on
managed
the
to
bed,
ace a math test
suddenly
by writing that I was a
bone-tired,
genius at multiplication.
and let my
It was
eyes drift
exhilarating,
shut.
intoxicating.
As I hovered
For
on
the
the
first
edge
time
of
in my
sleep,
life, I felt truly powerful.
fragments of the woman's
things started
face
to go
floated
wrong.
through my
It began
mind.
small.
Her
I wrote about a
dark,
never-ending ice
knowing
cream
eyes,
sundae, only
her
to find myself buried
enigmatic
in a mountain
smile,
of melting dairy that
and
nearly drowned
somehow,
me. I described a
inexplicably,
day off from school
I felt
and
a
woke to
sense
find the
of
building had
connection,
burned down overnight.
of
Thankfully, no one was hurt.
longing.
I tried to be more careful after that,
The next
think
few
through the
days
consequences of my
passed
words.
in a haze.
But the book
my
seemed to have
thoughts
ideas of its own.
consumed by the
One night,
mysterious woman
frustrated with
and
my
the
little sister's
strange
constant
hold
pestering,
she
I
seemed
wrote,
to have
and
over
the annoying
me.
girl disappeared, never
I
to
went
bother
through
anyone
the
again.
motions of my daily
I regretted it
routine,
immediately,
attending
crossing out the words and
classes
scribbling,
and completing
just kidding,
assignments.
underneath.
But my heart
But when I went downstairs
wasn't
for
in
dinner,
it.
my sister's
I
chair was
found
empty.
myself constantly
"Where's Emily?"
glancing
I
at the
asked,
black
trying to
ribbon
keep the
on my
panic out of
wrist,
my voice.
running
My
my
parents looked at me
fingers
strangely.
over its smooth surface
Emily?"
like a
My
talisman.
father asked. That's when I
My
realized the
friends
true
noticed the
power and danger
change in my
of the book.
demeanor,
It
the
hadn't just made my sister
distracted air
disappear.
that hung
It had
over me
erased her
like
entire
a
existence.
cloud.
Frantic,
They asked
I ran
if
back to my
everything
room
was
and wrote,
okay,
Emily returned,
if I needed
and
to
everyone
talk.
remembered her.
But I brushed
page
off
remained
their
blank after my
concern
words.
with a
The
forced
book, it seemed, had
smile and a
limits,
vague
or perhaps a
excuse
cruel
about
sense of humor.
stress from school.
Desperate, I stayed up all night,
How could
writing
I even
variation after
begin to
variation,
explain
trying to
what
bring my
I
sister
had
back.
experienced?
As the sun rose, I
The
finally struck on a
impossible
combination that
events
worked.
that had unfolded
realized
over
the
the
true
past
value of
few
family.
months.
And his sister returned.
I
The
knew I
memory
should
of her
be
restored
afraid,
to all.
that I should
I heard a
tell
plaintive
someone what
moan
was happening.
from the next room, and nearly
But
cried
the more
with
I
relief.
thought about the woman,
After that, I swore I'd never
the
write in
more
the
I
book
felt
again.
drawn to
I hid
her,
it away in my closet,
like a moth
under a
to
pile
a
of old
flame.
toys and outgrown clothes.
There was
For
something
weeks,
magnetic
I managed
about
to
her,
resist its siren
a
call.
pull that I
But then
couldn't
came the day Jimmy
resist
Hoskins
even
pushed
if
me
I
into a mud
wanted
puddle in
to.
front of the whole school.
And deep down,
Humiliated and angry,
I wasn't
I retrieved
sure
the
I
book and
did
wrote,
want to resist.
Jimmy Hoskins got exactly what he
As
deserved.
much as she
The next day,
terrified me,
Jimmy wasn't at school.
there was a part
the
of
day
me
after,
that craved
when
the
he finally
thrill of
returned a
her
week later.
presence,
He was pale and
the
quiet.
electric
his arm in a
charge
cast.
that coursed
I
through
overheard
my
him telling someone
veins
about a hit-and-run
whenever I
driver.
caught a glimpse of
The
her.
guilt was overwhelming.
I
hadn't
found
meant for him to
myself
get hurt.
staying up
Not
late
really.
into the night,
I tried to write something to heal
pacing
him,
my
to
room
undo
and
the damage, but the book
replaying
refused to
every
cooperate.
encounter with her
It
in
seemed
my
to feed on
mind.
darker impulses,
I
twisting even the most
analyzed
innocent
every
wishes into
detail,
monkey's paw scenarios.
from the way she
knew I needed to
moved
destroy it.
to the
But every
intensity
time I
of her
tried,
gaze,
something stopped me.
searching for
The matches
some
would fizzle out
clue
before
as to
touching the
who
cover.
or what she
The scissors
was.
would slip, nearly cutting
But
me
there
instead.
were no answers,
It was like the book had
only
a will of
more
its own,
questions.
a determination to survive.
And as the
weeks
days
turned to months,
turned into
I
weeks,
found myself using the book more
I
and more,
began to
despite the
wonder if
consequences.
I would ever
I couldn't
see
help it.
her again.
The power was too alluring.
If the strange
the ability to shape
connection
reality
between
too
us had
intoxicating.
been nothing
I wrote
more
myself
than a
into
figment
popularity,
of my
only to find my new
imagination,
friends shallow and cruel.
until
I gave
one
myself
rainy
superhuman
night,
strength, then
as I
accidentally
lay in
destroyed
bed
half the furniture in
staring
my
at the
house.
ceiling,
I even tried to bring my dead
I
grandfather
heard
back
it.
to life. But the
Three
shambling, vacant-eyed thing that
unmistakable
appeared in our
knocks,
living room was so
heavy
horrifying,
and
I
deliberate,
immediately wrote it out of existence.
echoing from the front
Each time,
door.
I swore it would be the last.
My heart
Each
leaped
time,
into my
I
throat
found myself
as I
opening the
sat
book
up,
again, sure
my
that this time I
body
could control
moving
it.
almost
But
of
the
its
book
own
was changing
accord.
me. I could feel
I
it,
padded down the
darkness
stairs
growing
in a
inside me,
daze,
feeding
my
on my
bare
desires
feet
and fears.
silent on the
I
carpet.
became withdrawn,
As
jumpy.
I reached for the
My parents
doorknob,
worried, but I
I
couldn't
caught
explain.
a glimpse of the
Who would
black
believe me?
ribbon on my wrist,
It all came to a head the night of
pulsing
my 11th
softly
birthday.
in the dim light.
My parents, concerned
And
about my recent
somehow,
behavior, had thrown
I
me a
knew
surprise
what,
party.
or rather,
All my classmates
who
were there, the living
I
room
would
festooned with
find on
balloons
the
and
other
streamers.
side.
As everyone sang Happy
With
Birthday,
a deep breath,
my
I
eyes kept
turned the
drifting to my
knob
bedroom,
and pulled the
where
door
I knew the
open,
book was hidden.
ready to
I had been
face
planning to
whatever
write
lay
myself a
ahead.
spectacular birthday gift.
For better or
Consequences
worse,
be damned.
my
But
fate
looking at the
was
smiling
tied to
faces around
hers
me,
now,
my parents,
and
my
I was
sister,
done
thankfully
running
restored.
from it.
Even Jimmy Hoskins with his arm finally out of its cast. I realized what I truly wanted, what I needed. I slipped away from the party and up to my room. With shaking hands, I opened the book one last time
in my
and wrote,
line of work,
the boy realized the
it's
true
not the
magic was not in
hiking
getting
that
everything
gets
he
you.
wanted, but
it's
in
not the
appreciating what he
rugged
had.
trails or
And with
the
that
weather,
knowledge, the book's power
though
over him
that
ended.
stuff is no picnic
As
either.
I wrote the final word, I felt a shock run through me.
It's the people,
The book grew hot in my hands,
or worse,
so hot I had to
the
drop it.
things that
As
aren't
it fell to
people.
the floor, the pages
I'm
began to
Garrett
blacken and curl,
Teague, a
as if being
search and
consumed by an
rescue
invisible
officer
fire.
with the United
In moments,
States
all that
Forest
was
Service.
left was a pile of ashes.
Been
I
at
stood
it
there,
since
staring at the
97,
remains of something that
and
had been
I've
both
seen
wondrous
just about
and terrible.
everything out
I
here
felt a
in these
profound
woods.
sense of loss, but also
Or
relief.
so I thought.
The power was gone.
It was
But so was the
2011, north
The
of
danger.
Flagstaff,
I
Arizona.
rejoined the party, hugging my parents
That's
extra
where
tight,
this all
even
went
smiling
down.
at Jimmy. For the first time in
The
months,
call
I
came
felt
in
light,
around midnight.
free.
I was just about
That
to
night,
hit the
as I got ready
sack
for bed,
when my phone
I noticed
buzzed.
something on my desk.
The shrill
brand new
ring
journal,
cutting
a
through
gift
the
from my
quiet
grandmother.
of my small
For a moment,
cabin.
My heart raced
I
with mingled
fumbled
excitement
for
and
it in
fear.
the dark,
But when I
already
opened it,
knowing
the pages
what it
were
meant.
reassuringly blank.
In this
Just
job,
an ordinary book,
late night
waiting to be
calls are
filled with
never
ordinary
good
words.
news.
As I climbed into bed,
Teague,
I realized
I
that the greatest
grunted
magic,
into the
the
receiver.
truest power, lay
The
not in
voice
some
on
enchanted
the
book,
other end was
but in the
familiar.
stories we choose to tell
Marjorie
ourselves.
from Dispatch.
The ones about kindness and
Her
forgiveness,
usual
and the
cheerful
everyday
tone
miracles
was
of being
replaced with something
Those
more
are the stories
somber.
that truly shape our world.
Garrett,
And those are the
we've
ones I
got
choose
a
to write now.
situation.
One ordinary,
Missing
extraordinary
hiker
day
up
at a
in the
time.
San Francisco peaks. Name's Devin Matthews. Didn't make it back to his car. I sighed, rubbing the sleep from my
The
eyes.
scratching in the walls started on my third
Another
night in the
one?
cabin.
What's
the
the
seventh
story?
night, I discovered the horrors hidden
Overnight
behind
hiker.
them. Now,
Solo
I'm
trip.
not sure I'll make it out alive.
His
I
girlfriend
jumped at the chance to
reported him
house sit for my
missing
aunt
when
in
he
her remote
didn't
mountain
check
cabin.
in this evening.
As a struggling writer battling a
Last
severe
seen
case of
yesterday
writer's block,
morning at
I
the
thought a change of
Humphreys
scenery
Peak
might spark my
trailhead.
creativity. The
I
isolation,
shook my
the crisp
head.
mountain air, the
Even
picturesque
though
views,
Marjorie
it
couldn't
seemed
see
perfect. If only
Let me
I'd known
guess.
what was waiting for me in those
it.
woods.
City boy,
The first 2
no
nights were
satellite
uneventful.
phone.
I spent my
Got
days
it
hiking the
in
nearby
one.
trails,
Marjorie
and my evenings
confirmed.
curled up by the fireplace,
Just him and a
desperately
water
trying to
bottle
coax
from
words
what
onto
we
the
can
blank
tell.
page of my laptop.
Darwinism
The quiet was
at its
oppressive at times,
finest,
Mo,
I
but I told
muttered.
myself it was exactly what I
It
needed.
wasn't the first
On the
time
third
we
night,
had to go
as I was
fish
drifting off
some
to sleep,
unprepared
I heard it.
hiker out of
A
trouble,
faint scratching sound
and it
coming from
certainly
inside the
wouldn't
wall
be
next
the
to my bed.
last.
At first, I dismissed
All
it as
right.
mice. An
I'm
old
on
cabin
it.
in the woods was
Who's
bound
my
to have a few
partner for
unwanted
this
guests,
one?
right?
Tom
But as the
Greer.
night wore
He's
on,
already been
the
briefed.
scratching grew louder,
Meet
more
him at the
insistent.
station
It
in
didn't
an
sound
hour.
like any mouse I'd ever heard.
I
rhythm
hung
was too
up and
deliberate,
started
almost
getting dressed.
Intelligent. I barely
Tom
slept
was
that
a
night.
good choice.
My eyes fixed on the wall,
Ex-Marine,
waiting for
tough
whatever
as
it was to
nails,
break through.
but
When morning came,
surprisingly
bringing with it
gentle
blessed
for a
silence,
guy with a
I convinced
body
myself
like a
I'd imagined
brick
it all.
wall.
The isolation was just getting
We'd
to me.
worked together plenty
The
of
next night,
times before,
The scratching started earlier and
and I
louder.
trusted him with
This
my
time,
life.
it wasn't confined to one wall.
As I laced
It
up
seemed
my
to be coming
boots,
from all
I
around me,
couldn't shake
surrounding
this
me in a cage of
nagging
unseen
feeling
claws.
in the pit of my
I
stomach.
pulled the blankets over my head like a child, as
Something
if that
about
flimsy
this
barrier could protect me
felt
from whatever was trying to get in.
off.
By the fifth night,
I've
I was
had
a
my
wreck.
share of rescues.
Dark circles ringed my
seen
eyes,
things
and my
that
hands
would
shook
turn
as I
most
clutched my coffee
people's
mug.
hair white.
I'd called my aunt,
But
casually
this
asking if the cabin had any pest problems.
was
She
different.
laughed, saying the
I
place was
just
as
didn't
solid
know
as a
why
rock.
yet.
Not even a mouse could get in
I
there.
grabbed
she
my
assured me.
gear and headed out
Her
into
words,
the
meant to
cool
comfort, only
Arizona night.
intensified my fear.
The
If it wasn't mice,
stars
what was
were
making
out in
those sounds?
full force,
That night, fueled by a potent
twinkling
mixture of fear and
innocently
sleep
above the
deprivation,
looming
I decided to
silhouettes of the
investigate.
pines.
I waited until the scratching
I
started,
took a deep
then grabbed a
breath,
flashlight
trying
and began
to
tapping on the
calm my
walls,
nerves.
listening for hollow spots.
It was just another
Near the back of a
rescue
closet,
mission.
behind a rack of my
Find
aunt's
the
old
lost
coats.
hiker.
I found it,
Bring him home
a
safe.
section of the wall that sounded
Simple.
different. My heart pounded.
But as I
I
drove
pushed
towards
aside
the
the coats and ran
station,
my hands over
the
the rough wooden
unease
planks.
grew.
There, almost
forests
invisible unless you knew
out
to
here,
look for it,
They
was the
hold
outline of a door.
secrets,
I should have stopped
dark
there.
things
Should have
that
called
most
the police,
people
or at
wouldn't
least waited
believe.
until morning. But
And
the scratching was
sometimes,
getting louder,
just
more
sometimes,
frantic, and I knew I wouldn't
those
last another
secrets
sleepless night.
decide to show
With trembling
themselves.
hands, I felt along the
Little
edges of
did
the
I
hidden
know
door until I
this
found
was
a
going
small,
to be one of
recessed
those
handle.
times.
I pulled,
And by
and
the
the
end
door
of it,
swung open with a groan
I'd
of
be
protesting
wishing I'd
hinges.
never answered
The smell
that
hit me
damn
first,
phone.
a musty, dank odor tinged with something metallic
The
that made my
station
stomach
was
churn.
a hive of
I shone my
activity
flashlight
when
into
I
the darkness,
arrived.
revealing a narrow
Night
passageway that seemed
rescues
to lead
always
deeper
put
into the house.
everyone on edge,
Every instinct screamed
and this
at me to
one
close
was
the door
no
and run.
exception.
But a morbid
I
curiosity,
spotted
coupled
Tom
with the need to
immediately,
understand what had been
his
tormenting
bulky
me,
frame
propelled me
hunched
forward.
over a map spread
The
out
passageway
on
was
one of the
tight,
tables.
forcing me to hunch over as
He
I
looked
crept
up
along.
as I approached,
Cobwebs
a
clung to my
grim
hair and
smile
face,
on his
and the
face.
beam of my flashlight danced over
Teague,
walls that seemed to be
he
closing in
nodded.
around me.
Ready
The
for
scratching
another
had stopped,
wild goose
replaced
chase,
by an eerie silence that
smirked,
pressed against my eardrums.
falling into our usual
After
banter.
what felt like an eternity,
More like
passage
idiot
opened up into a
tourist
small
chase.
room.
What have we got?
my flashlight beam swept across
Tom
the space,
pushed the map
and I had to
towards
clamp
me.
a hand over my mouth to stifle
Devin
a
Matthews,
scream.
28,
The room was a nightmare
software
come to life.
engineer from
Chains
Phoenix,
hung from the ceiling,
decided to
their
take
ends
on
attached to
Humphrey's
rusted
Peak
manacles.
solo.
Dark stains
Last
splattered
seen
the floor
here,
and walls,
he pointed
and
to
in
a
one
spot
corner
on
sat
the
a
map
table covered in tools
at the
that belonged in a
trailhead
torture chamber,
yesterday morning.
not a mountain cabin.
No
The worst of all were the
contact
pictures,
since.
dozens of them,
I
pinned
studied
to
the
every
map,
available surface.
tracing the
Each showed a different
possible
person.
routes with my
Men,
finger.
women, even
Any
a few
idea
children,
which
in
trail he
various
took?
states of terror and pain.
Tom shook his
Some I
head.
recognized from missing persons
That's
reports
the
I'd
thing.
seen on the news over the years.
Guy didn't
My
file a
mind reeled,
proper trip
trying to
plan.
make sense of what I was seeing.
Could be on any
My
of
sweet,
these
kindly
trails,
aunt,
or worse,
was she responsible for
off
this?
trail
Or had she
entirely.
unknowingly purchased a house of horrors?
I
A
cursed
noise
under
behind
my
me
breath.
made me whirl around, my
This
flashlight
was
beam cutting through the
exactly the
darkness.
kind of thing
There,
that
at the entrance
made
to the
our
passageway,
job a nightmare.
stood a figure. The beam caught a flash of
All
eyes,
right,
reflecting
so
back at me
we're
like a
looking
wild
at a
animal's
full sweep
before the
then.
figure retreated into the
Any
shadows.
other details
I
we
ran.
should know?
I've never moved so fast in my life,
Tom
scrambling through that
hesitated
narrow
for a
passage, my breath
And
coming
I
in
caught a
ragged gasps.
flicker of something
I
in
burst
his
out of the
eyes.
hidden door and slammed it shut behind me,
Concern?
not stopping until I was out of the cabin
No.
and in my car.
It was deeper
My hands
than
shook
that.
so badly I could barely get the key
Fear.
in the ignition.
What
As
is
I peeled out of the
I
driveway,
pressed.
I glanced in my
He
rearview mirror.
leaned in closer,
A face peered out from one of the
lowering his
cabin's
voice.
windows, gaunt, pale,
This is
with
the
those same
third
reflective eyes.
disappearance in that
It wasn't my
area
aunt.
in the past
I
month.
drove straight to the police station in the nearest town,
My blood
babbling
ran
about
cold.
hidden rooms and missing persons.
What?
They were skeptical at first,
Why
Martin,
wasn't
but
I
something in my
told
terrified
about
demeanor
this?
must have convinced them to
It's
investigate.
been kept quiet.
The next few days passed in a
Higher
blur
ups
of police
don't wanna
interviews and
cause a
sleepless
panic.
nights in a cheap motel.
But
When the
Garrett,
police finally
he
raided the
paused,
cabin,
making
they found
sure
exactly
no
what I
one else
described,
was listening.
and more.
The other
The
two
hidden
were
network
never
of passages
found.
extended throughout the entire house.
The
and
uneasy
even into tunnels
feeling
dug
in my
into the
gut
mountainside. They
intensified.
found bodies,
3
So many
disappearances in
some
the
recent,
same area
some little more
in
than
such a
bones,
short time.
and journals detailing
That
decades of
wasn't
abductions
just
and torture.
bad luck.
The earliest
That
entries
was a
dated back to
pattern.
long before my aunt had purchased the
Any
property.
connections
But of the
between
creature
the
I'd seen,
victims?
the
I
pale,
asked.
inhuman thing with
Tom
reflecting
shook
eyes,
his head.
there was no sign.
Nothing
The police
obvious.
dismissed my account of it as a
Different
stress-induced
ages,
hallucination.
backgrounds.
Maybe they were right.
Only common
God,
factor
I hope they were
is
right.
they were
My aunt
all
was cleared of
solo
any involvement.
hikers.
She was as
I
horrified as
rubbed
anyone,
my chin,
immediately putting the
mind
property up for
racing.
sale. I haven't
We
spoken
need to
her
be
since that
careful
day.
with this one,
I can't
Tom.
bring myself to look her in the
Something's
eye,
not
knowing
right.
what horrors lurked behind her walls.
He nodded, his
It's been months
expression
now,
grim.
and I'm trying to move on
I
with my
hear
life.
you.
I've started
We
writing
go
again.
in, we find
The
this
words flow easily
Matthews
now,
guy, and
though
we
every
get
story
out.
seems to twist into horror by the
No
end.
heroics,
My
no
nights are plagued by
unnecessary
nightmares
risks.
of narrow passages and chained
Agreed,
walls, of
I
pale
said.
figures with gleaming eyes.
But I
it's
couldn't
the sound
shake
that
the
haunts me most.
feeling that it wouldn't
Sometimes,
be that
in the
simple.
quiet hours before dawn,
We spent
I
the
swear I
next
can hear it
hour
again.
going over
That
the
faint,
details,
insistent scratching,
plotting our
as if
search
something's
grid
trying to claw
and
its way out
checking
of the
our
walls,
gear.
out of my memories,
As we loaded
out
up
of the
the
darkest
truck,
corners of my mind.
the first
I've had
hints
my own
of
walls
dawn
checked.
were starting to
There's
lighten
nothing there,
the
of course.
eastern sky.
The scratching is all in my head.
But instead
lingering
of the
trauma from
usual
those terrifying
sense of
nights.
hope that
At
came
least,
with a new
that's what I tell
day,
myself.
I
But
felt
sometimes,
only dread.
when I catch a glimpse of my reflection in a
As
darkened
we
window,
pulled out of the
I could swear
station,
my eyes shine
I
back at
caught
me,
Tom
just for a moment.
staring at the
And I
looming
wondered, what
silhouette
if I
of
brought
the
something
San
back with me from that
Francisco
cabin?
peaks in the distance.
What if the real horror isn't what I found in those
You
hidden rooms,
believe
but
in
what found me?
monsters, Garrett?
I'm writing this now
He
as a
asked
warning.
quietly.
If you're ever in a quiet place and you
I
hear
thought
scratching
about
in the
all
walls,
the things
don't
I'd
investigate.
seen in these
Don't go looking
forests
for answers.
over the years.
Some truths are better left
The
buried. Some doors
inexplicable,
better left unopened.
the
Because once
impossible.
you've seen what lies behind the walls, you
I
can never
believe
unsee
there
it.
are things out
And you
there
might find
we
that the
can't
scratching
explain.
isn't just coming from the
I
walls
answered
anymore,
carefully,
but from somewhere deep inside you,
and I believe
place you
that
never knew existed,
sometimes
awakened by
it's
horrors you
better
were
not
never meant
to
to
try.
witness. So if you hear scratching
Tom
in the night,
nodded
do what I should have done.
slowly,
Run,
his eyes never
Run,
leaving the
and
mountains.
don't look back, because you
Let's
never know
hope
what might
we
be
don't
looking
run
back at you.
into any of those things today. As we drove towards the trailhead, the rising sun painted the sky in hues
The first
of
time I saw
orange
Mr. Peterson
and
dancing
pink.
in his yard at 3 a.m.,
It should
I
have
thought
been
he was drunk.
beautiful.
by the third time,
Instead,
I
it
realized
felt
something
like
far more
a
sinister
warning.
was at play. Now,
The day
I'm not
was
sure
just
if any of us in this
beginning,
neighborhood are truly human
but I
anymore.
had a sinking
I've lived next door
feeling
to the
that
Petersons for
before
nearly
it
a
was
decade.
over,
They were the
we'd be
quintessential elderly
facing
couple.
something
He was a
far
retired
worse
accountant,
than just
she
a
a former
lost
school
hiker.
teacher. They kept their lawn
Little
immaculate,
did I
hosted
know
bridge
how
nights on
right I
Thursdays,
was.
and always had a kind word for everyone.
We reached the
Normal,
Humphreys Peak
boring
trailhead
That all
around
changed
7
the night
a.m.
Mrs. Peterson died.
The parking
It was a
lot was
quiet
empty,
passing,
save
peaceful
for a
in her sleep.
lone blue
The
sedan.
neighborhood rallied around Mr.
Devin's
Peterson,
car,
bringing casseroles and
according to
offering
the
condolences.
description we'd
He
been
seemed to be
given.
handling it well, all things
Tom and
considered.
I did a quick
bit
sweep
quiet,
of
perhaps,
the vehicle,
but that was to be
but
expected.
found nothing out
About a
of the
month
ordinary.
after the funeral, I woke up in the
Just
middle of the
another
night,
city
parched.
slickers
As I
ride
shuffled
with
to the
a
kitchen for a glass
I'd
of
rather
water,
be coding
movement in the
bumper
Petersons'
sticker
yard
that
caught my
made
eye.
me roll my eyes.
Curious, I peered out the
All
window.
right, I
There
said,
was Mr.
shouldering
Peterson
my
in
pack.
his bathrobe and slippers,
Let's get moving.
dancing in the moonlight.
We'll start with the
But it
main
wasn't any
trail
dance
and
I'd ever seen
branch
before.
out if we don't
His
find any
movements were
signs
jerky,
of him.
almost spasmodic. His arms
Tom
and legs
nodded,
bending at impossible angles.
Checking his
His head
GPS
lolled on his
one
neck as
last
if it might
time
snap off
before
at
we
any
set
moment.
off.
I stood there,
The trail
transfixed,
started off easy
my
enough,
thirst forgotten. Part of me
winding
wanted to
through
look away,
ponderosa
but I couldn't tear my
pines
eyes
and
from the
aspens.
grotesque spectacle.
The
After
morning
what
air
seemed like
was
hours, but
crisp,
was probably only minutes,
carrying the
Mr.
scent
Peterson
of
suddenly
pine and
stopped.
earth.
His head
Under
snapped
different
up, and for a
circumstances,
heart-stopping moment,
it would
I
have
could have
been
sworn
a
he was looking
pleasant
right at me.
hike.
I ducked away from the window,
But there
my heart
was
pounding.
an undercurrent
When I
of
finally worked up the
tension
courage to look
that
again,
I couldn't
the
shake.
yard was empty.
The
The
forest
next morning,
felt
I saw Mr. Peterson
wrong
getting his mail.
somehow.
He waved and
Too
smiled,
quiet.
same as always.
I've spent enough
wanted to ask
time
about
in
what
these
I'd seen,
woods to know
but
their
how do you broach a
rhythms,
subject like that?
and this wasn't
neighbor,
it.
Saw you doing
No
some freaky
bird
dancing
song,
last night.
no rustling
Everything
of
okay?
small animals in the underbrush.
I convinced myself
Just
I must
the
have been half
crunch of
asleep,
our boots
that
on
it
the
was just a bizarre
trail,
dream
and
brought on
our
by stress
own
and late-night
measured
snacking.
breathing.
But deep down,
We
I knew what
called
I'd
out
seen was real.
periodically, our voices
later, it
echoing
happened
through
again.
the trees.
This time, I was ready.
Devin
I set
Matthews,
up my phone
search
to record
and
through
rescue.
the window,
Can you hear
determined
us?
to have proof.
But
when I
only
played back the
silence
video the next
answered.
morning, all I saw was an empty
After
yard.
about 2 hours
Mr.
of
Peterson was
hiking,
nowhere to be seen,
we
even
reached
though
a
I knew,
fork in the
I
trail.
knew he had been there.
One path
That's when the fear
continued
really
up
set in.
towards the peak,
What was happening?
while the other
Was I losing my
veered
mind?
off into denser
I started
forest.
watching more closely. During the day,
Which way
Mr.
you
Peterson
think he
seemed
went?
normal enough,
Tom asked,
if a bit more
wiping
energetic than
sweat
usual for a
from
man
his
his
brow.
age. But there were
I
oddities.
studied both
Sometimes
paths,
his movements were too
trying
smooth,
to think
too fluid
like
for
a
his arthritic
novice
joints.
hiker.
Other times,
If
I'd
he
catch him
was
staring
sticking to
blankly
his
into space,
plan, he'd
completely
have taken the
unresponsive until
path
someone
to the
spoke to him
peak.
directly. And
But
then
if he got
there were the
lost,
noises. Late at night,
he could
when
be
the neighborhood was
anywhere.
quiet,
Tom
I'd hear sounds
finished
coming from his
grimly.
house. Not the usual
That's
creaks and
when I
groans of an old
noticed
building
something
settling,
off the
but
main
something else.
trail.
Something that
A
sounded
flash
almost
of
like
color
chittering.
that didn't
I
belong
tried
among the
talking to other
browns
neighbors,
and greens
casually
of the
bringing up
forest
Mr. Peterson
floor.
in conversation.
I
Most
moved
just commented
closer,
on how well he was
pushing
coping with his wife's
aside
death.
some low-hanging
But Mrs.
branches.
Abernathy, the neighborhood gossip,
Tom,
leaned in
I
close and
called
whispered,
out, I've
"Have
got
you noticed
something.
anything strange
It
about
was a
him lately?"
backpack,
My
half
heart
hidden
raced.
under a
What do you
cluster
mean?
of pine trees.
She glanced around, as
Tom
if afraid of being
joined me,
overheard.
and together we
saw him in his garden
examined the
the other day.
find.
He was pulling
No
weeds.
signs of struggle,
his
no
arms,
blood.
They were too long,
It was just
and when he turned to wave at me,
sitting
neck,
there,
it twisted
as
further
if
than any
someone
human
had
neck should.
deliberately placed
I
it.
felt a chill run down my spine.
I radioed
wasn't the only
in our
one who had noticed.
discovery while Tom started
Things
going
escalated
through
quickly
the
after that.
pack.
More neighbors
He
reported
pulled
odd
out a
sightings.
map,
Mr.
a bad
Peterson
one,
walking on the
with
roof in the
barely
middle of the
any
night.
landmarks.
Mr. Peterson's
And a
shadow
few
moving
energy
independently
bars.
of his body.
Standard
Mr. Peterson's
stuff for
eyes
an
reflecting
amateur
light like a
hiker.
cat's. And always,
But then Tom's
Always.
expression changed
dancing.
as he pulled
it
out a
became a nightly
notebook.
occurrence. As
He
soon as the
flipped
clock
it
struck
open,
3, Mr.
and I
Peterson
saw
would
his
emerge from his
eyes
house and
widen.
begin his otherworldly gyrations.
Garrett,
More
he
and more
said,
neighbors
his
witnessed
voice
it.
low.
But like my video,
You
no
need
one
to
could
see
capture
this.
proof. Cameras
I
malfunctioned.
moved closer,
Phones died
peering over
inexplicably.
his shoulder.
We tried to intervene.
The first
A group
few
of us went to his
pages
house
were
one
filled
afternoon,
with scrawled
intending to confront him,
drawings,
to offer help if he needed it.
spirals,
But as soon as we
geometric
stepped onto his
shapes,
porch, a
strange
wave of
symbols
dizziness washed
that
over
made
us.
my eyes hurt
By the
if
time
I
it passed,
looked at them too
we were
long.
back in our own homes with no memory
What
of how
the
we got
hell?
there.
I muttered.
That's when people started to change.
Tom
It
shook
began
his
with
head
Mrs. Abernathy.
slowly.
One day she was her
These
usual
symbols,
chatty self.
They looked
next, she
familiar
was
somehow.
Different. Her
A
movements
chill
became jerky,
ran down my
her speech
spine.
stilted, and her eyes.
What, you think
They had the
he's
same
some
blank
kind
look
of
I'd seen in
cultist?
Mr. Peterson's.
Don't
Then it was the
rule it
Johnson
out,
family across
Tom
the street,
replied,
the Garcias
his
next door to
expression
them.
grim.
One by one,
I've
our
seen
neighbors were
similar
transforming into
things
something
before,
else.
in some
I
of the
barricaded
darker
myself in my
corners
house,
of the world.
watching through the windows as my once normal
wanted to
suburban neighborhood
dismiss it,
descended into
to
madness.
say it was just some
Every
city
night at 3
guy
a.m.,
trying to act
more and more
deep
people
in
joined
nature.
Mr. Peterson in his dance.
People get
Their bodies
weird when
contorted in
they're
ways
out
that
here
defied
alone.
anatomy. Their
But I
faces
couldn't
frozen in
shake
rictus
the
grins.
feeling that we'd
I stopped
stumbled
sleeping,
onto
stopped
something
eating.
much bigger
I knew it was only a matter of time
and
before they
much
came for
more
me.
dangerous
But what could I do?
than a simple
Who would believe
missing
me?
hiker case.
Last night, it finally happened.
Let's keep
At exactly
moving,
3 a.m.,
I said,
there was a
trying
knock
to
at my
keep
door.
my voice
I didn't
steady.
answer, but it didn't matter.
Maybe we'll
The
find
door
more
swung
clues
open
up
on its
ahead.
own, and there stood Mr.
As
Peterson.
we
but
continued
it wasn't
up the
really him
trail,
anymore.
the air
His body
grew
had
thinner,
elongated,
the
his
trees
limbs stretching to
denser.
impossible lengths. His skin was
That
pale and
uneasy
waxy,
feeling
almost
from
translucent,
earlier
and
was
his face,
now a
where his
full-blown
features should have
alarm
been,
bell in
there was
my
only
head.
a smooth, blank expanse of
Something was
flesh.
very, very
But somehow,
wrong here.
I knew he was smiling.
I've walked
Behind
through
him,
some
I could see
pretty
the others,
strange
the
stuff
entire
in
neighborhood,
these woods.
transformed into these
Seen
alien
things
beings,
that would
swaying
turn
gently
most
as if to
people's
music I couldn't
stomachs.
hear. Mr. Peterson,
But this,
or the thing that used to be Mr.
this
Peterson,
was different.
extended a hand to me.
The forest
His fingers were
itself
too
seemed
long,
to
too
be
thin,
watching us.
ending in points rather
The
than nails.
shadows
I
between
knew
the
if I took
trees
that hand,
growing
I would join
deeper
them.
and more
I would
menacing
become one of them.
with each step.
Part of me wanted to.
Another
Part of me
hour
was tired
passed,
of being afraid, of being
and
alone.
the silence
Wouldn't
became
it be easier to just
oppressive.
give in?
No
But I couldn't.
birds, no
Some
wind,
last shred of humanity,
just the
of
sound of our
individuality,
boots on
rebelled
the
against
dirt
the idea.
and the occasional
ran.
snap of a
Somehow,
twig underfoot.
I made it past them, out into the street.
We reached
I
a
ran
clearing,
and ran, not looking back,
a small
until I
patch
collapsed
of
from
grass
exhaustion.
surrounded
I
by
woke up in this motel
towering
room,
pines,
miles away from my home.
and that's
I
where
don't know
we
if I'm
saw
safe
him.
here. I don't know
He
if I'll
was
ever be
sitting
safe
with
again.
his back to
Because
us,
now I understand the truth.
motionless.
It's spreading. It's spreading.
At first
Whatever took over
glance,
Mr.
it
Peterson,
looked like he
whatever
was
changed my
just
neighbors,
resting,
it's not confined to our little suburb
maybe
anymore.
taking in the
As I
view.
write this, I can see people
But
walking past
something
my
about
window.
the way he
Their movements
sat,
are a little too smooth,
stiff and
their smiles a
unnatural,
little too wide.
set every
And in the
nerve
distance,
in
I
my
swear I can hear
body
the
on
faint sound of
edge.
chittering. I don't know how long I
Devin,
can run. I
Tom
don't know if
called
there's anywhere
out.
left to hide.
No
All I know is
response.
that the world is changing,
We moved
transforming into
closer,
something inhuman.
and that's when
And
the
it all
smell
started with
hit
an old
us,
man dancing in his yard
Rot.
at 3 a.m.
like
you're reading
something
this,
had been
you're
dead
still
for
human,
a week.
Be on your guard.
Tom gagged,
Watch your neighbors
and I
closely.
covered my mouth
And whatever you
with
do,
my sleeve.
Don't dance.
This
Because
wasn't
once the
right.
music starts, once you join
This
their grotesque
wasn't right
ballet,
at all.
you may never be yourself again.
We circled
As for me,
around to get a better
I'm
look,
not sure how much longer I can
and
resist.
that's when I saw
Even
it.
now, I feel a strange
Devin's
urge to
face
move,
was
to
slack,
sway to a rhythm
his
I can't
eyes
quite hear.
wide open,
My joints ache with the need to
but there
bend in
was
ways they
nothing
shouldn't.
behind them.
Maybe it won't be so bad.
He
Becoming one of
looked
them.
alive,
Maybe
but it was like
No.
no one was home.
I have to stay strong.
His skin,
I have to warn others.
if you could call
I
it
have to-
that, was
Wait.
wrong,
Do you hear that?
pale,
Is it 3
almost
a.m. already?
translucent,
I think
like
it's time
he'd
to
been
dance.
drained of blood. But there wasn't a single wound on him. Tom knelt down, cautiously
The day we
reached out
finally
to
opened the
check
basement
for
door,
a pulse.
I realized our new home
But
wasn't just haunted
before
by the
his
past, it
hand
was
even
infected by it.
touched
What we
Devin's
found down there
wrist,
would change our lives forever,
something moved.
and not in the way we'd hoped when we bought this old house.
Devin's head
My
twitched,
wife, Sarah,
just
and I
a tiny
had always dreamed of
movement,
owning a piece of history.
like a glitch
When we
in
stumbled
a
upon
bad
the listing
video
for the old
feed.
Blackwood Manor, it seemed too good to
We
be true.
froze.
A sprawling
That's
Victorian
when
on
we
5
heard
acres,
it, the
just outside the
sound
city limits,
behind us.
for a price that made our
Heavy,
realtor's eyes bulge.
deliberate
The catch?
footsteps that
It
didn't
needed
belong to
extensive
anything
renovations.
human.
We were
Tom
too blinded by
spun
visions of
around,
high
his
ceilings
hand
and ornate woodwork to see
instinctively
the red
moving
flags,
to the gun
the seller's
strapped to
insistence
his
on an
waist.
as-is sale, the way the
I
locals
followed,
clammed up whenever we mentioned the
and
property,
that's when I saw
even
it,
the realtor's nervous laughter
just
when we asked
beyond
about
the
the
tree
locked
line.
basement door.
The
Oh,
thing that
that old
stood
thing,
there
she'd
wasn't
said,
something
waving a
you could
manicured hand.
describe
Probably
easily.
just storage.
The
Nothing to worry about.
closest I could compare
We
it
should have
to
worried.
was a
The
large,
first few weeks were a
emaciated
whirlwind of
bear,
unpacking and planning
but
renovations.
it was wrong.
We threw ourselves into stripping
Its
wallpaper
limbs were
and
too
refinishing
long,
floors,
too thin,
trying to ignore the unsettling
and it
feeling
had
that
the
came over us
skin.
whenever we passed that basement door.
It looked like it had
It
been
was solid
stripped
oak,
off,
incongruously
stretched
new compared
taut
to the rest of
over
the
its
house,
frame,
with a heavy
glistening
padlock
in
that
the
looked like it
dim light,
belonged on a prison cell rather
and
than
the
a family home.
smell.
When we should get that
God,
open,
the
I
smell
said one
was
night over
like
dinner.
nothing I'd
See
ever
what's down there before we
experienced.
start any major work.
Rot,
Sarah
sweat,
nodded, but I could
death,
see the
all mixed
apprehension in her
together into a
Maybe we
nauseating
should call a
cocktail
locksmith, she
that
suggested,
made my
or the
eyes
previous
water.
owners. They might still have
It
the key.
stared at us,
But our
but
calls went
not with
unanswered,
eyes.
and every locksmith in
There were
town suddenly
just
became too busy to take on new
Pits
clients.
where its eyes
It was
should
as if
have
the
been.
entire community was conspiring
And
to keep
then
that
it
door
let
closed.
out this sound,
Finally, frustrated
this
and more than a
low,
little curious,
vibrating
I
hum
decided to
that
take
made
matters
my
into my own
teeth
hands.
rattle in my
I bought a
skull.
heavy-duty bolt cutter, and one Saturday morning
Before
while
we
Sarah
could
was out grocery
react, it
shopping,
lunged
I
at
approached
us,
the door with
moving
determination.
faster than
The padlock
anything
put
that
up more of a
size
fight than I
should.
expected. The metal
Tom
was thick,
fired a
unyielding,
shot, but
and for
it
a moment
didn't
I thought
even
I'd need to
slow
buy a bigger
down.
tool.
I
But then,
grabbed him by
with a
the
screech
arm,
that sent shivers
pulling
down my
him
spine,
backward as
it
we
gave way.
ran,
I
adrenaline
stood there for a long
kicking into
moment, bolt
overdrive.
cutters in hand, staring at the now open door.
Tom
A cool
shouted
draft
as we
wafted up from the
bolted
darkness
down the
beyond,
trail,
carrying
our
with it a
legs
musty
burning
medicinal
as we
smell that made my
scrambled
nose
over
wrinkle.
rocks and roots.
Taking a deep breath,
The sound
I
of that
flicked on my
thing
flashlight
behind
and
us
started down the
getting
stairs.
closer.
The beam of light
I
revealed a
glanced
scene that
back,
belonged more in a horror
just
movie
for
than
a
a family
second,
home.
and saw
The
Devin.
basement was vast, much
His
larger than the
body was
footprint
no
of the house
longer
above.
in the clearing.
Rows upon
He
rows
was
of filing
standing,
cabinets lined the
his
walls,
head
their metal
tilted
surfaces
at an
dulled with age.
unnatural angle,
ancient medical
and he
equipment,
was walking
gurneys,
towards us,
IV stands, and things I
slowly,
couldn't even name, were
methodically,
scattered throughout the
as
space.
if every step
But it was the far wall that
calculated.
made my blood run cold.
My heart
A
pounded
massive
in my
corkboard covered
ears as
nearly the
we
entire
ran.
surface, pinned with
I
hundreds
could
of yellow
hear
papers.
Tom shouting
As I
into
moved
his
closer,
radio for
I realized
backup,
they were patient files.
but there was
Each one
no
bore a photo,
response.
hollow-eyed men and
The
women
trees
staring blankly at
around
the
us
camera,
blurred
and a list
as
of
we
treatments
pushed
that made my stomach
ourselves
churn.
harder, trying to
Electroshock
put
therapy,
as much
lobotomy,
distance between
experimental
us
drug
and
trials.
whatever that thing
This wasn't
was.
just a basement. It was an
The
archive
trail
of
seemed
horrors.
to stretch on
I was
forever.
so absorbed in the ghastly display that
But
I didn't
finally,
hear Sarah come home.
we burst through
Her
the
scream from the top
trees
of the
and
stairs
into
nearly
the
gave me a
parking
heart
lot
attack.
where our truck
John,
was waiting.
what are you doing down there?
Tom threw
Her
open
voice
the
was shrill
door
with
and
fear.
we both scrambled
I hurried back up,
inside,
trying to
slamming
block
it
her view
shut
of the
behind
basement.
us.
But it was too late.
For a moment,
She'd seen
there
enough
was
to know
silence.
something was terribly wrong.
No
We spent the rest of the
footsteps,
day in
no
shocked silence,
movement,
poring over the
nothing.
files I'd brought up
I
from
was
the basement.
about to say something,
story they told was
maybe
nightmarish.
crack a joke to break
Decades
the
ago,
tension.
our beautiful Victorian
But
had been a
then
secret
I
government
saw it.
facility, a place where
Standing
unspeakable
at the
experiments
edge of
were
the
conducted
tree
on
line,
unwitting
just
patients
barely
in
visible
the name of
in the
national
fading
security.
light, was
We have to go to
Devin.
the police. Sarah
Only
said,
it wasn't
her face
Devin
pale.
anymore.
I nodded, but something held me
His
back.
body was
A nagging
distorted,
feeling that this went deeper
limbs
than we
stretched
realized.
out in impossible
I said.
angles. His
Do some
skin
more research
pale
first.
and sickly.
We don't know who was involved in
And
this,
next to
or
him,
if they're still out there.
That thing was
Sarah
standing
reluctantly
too,
agreed,
watching
and we
us.
spent the next week digging
We
deeper
didn't
into the
wait.
house's history. What we found
Tom
only raised more
floored the
questions.
gas, and we
The property
tore
had
out of
changed
there,
hands dozens
leaving
of
the
times over the
forest
years,
behind us.
always for far less than its true
But as
value.
we drove away,
Previous owners reported
I
strange
couldn't
occurrences,
shake the feeling
unexplained
that
noises,
whatever
shadowy
that
figures,
thing was,
and a pervasive sense of
it had
dread
let
that
us
drove
go.
many to sell within months
like
of moving
we
in.
weren't worth the
But it was
trouble,
the medical records that truly
or
chilled us.
worse, like
Many
it
of the
knew we'd
patients
be
had
back.
gone missing, their files marked with
The
a simple
drive
red
back
X.
to the
Others
station
had been
was
released
a
back
blur.
into society.
Neither
But
of us
follow-up
spoke.
notes painted a disturbing
What
picture.
could we
Blackouts,
possibly say?
violent outbursts,
How
inhuman
could we
strength.
even begin
It
to
was as if whatever had
process
been done
what
to them
we
in that
just
basement had
seen?
fundamentally changed them.
When
As
we
we delved
finally
deeper into
pulled
the
into
house's
the
secrets,
station parking
Strange
lot,
things began to happen.
Tom killed the
Items would
engine,
move
but
on their
made
own.
no move to get
Shadows
out.
flitted at the edge of our vision.
We sat there in
always,
silence for a
always,
long moment.
There was the feeling of
The
being
events
watched.
of the day replaying
night,
in my mind
I woke
like
to find
some
Sarah's
kind
side of the bed
twisted
empty.
horror film.
Panicked, I searched the house,
Garrett,
calling her
Tom
name.
finally spoke.
I found her in the basement,
His voice
standing in front
barely
of the
above a
corkboard,
whisper.
her eyes vacant. Sarah,
What the hell
I
did
approached
we just
cautiously.
see out there?
Honey, what are you
I
doing down
shook
here?
my head, my
She
mouth
turned to me,
dry.
and for a moment,
I
didn't
don't know,
recognize her.
Tom. I
Her
really
face was
don't
blank,
know.
her eyes cold
We
and
had
empty.
to report in.
Then she blinked,
had to tell
and confusion
someone
washed
what
over
happened.
her features.
But as we
John,
walked into the
what?
station,
How did I get down
already knew how this
I
was
led her
going
back
to
upstairs,
go down.
my mind racing.
Chief Randall
Was the house
waiting
affecting
for
us?
us.
Were we
His
breathing in some
bushy
decades-old
eyebrows
experimental
furrowed
drug,
in concern.
slowly losing our minds?
Teague
We decided
Greer
then that we
report.
had to leave.
Did you
We'd
find
go to the police,
Matthews?
consequences be damned.
Tom and
But
I
as we packed our
exchanged
bags,
a look.
a black SUV
How
pulled up
could
in
we
front of the house.
possibly explain
Men in
what
dark
we'd
suits
seen?
emerged, their faces
I
grim.
took a deep breath.
There was a sharp knock at the door.
Chief, we
Sarah and I exchanged
we
terrified
found
glances.
something out there.
We knew, without a
But
word,
it wasn't
that these
Matthews.
men weren't here to help us.
Not really.
They were here to silence us.
Over
Go,
the next
I
hour,
whispered to Sarah.
we
Out the
recounted
back. I'll hold
everything
them
that
off.
had happened.
She shook her head,
The
tears in her
notebook
eyes.
with its
I'm not leaving you.
strange symbols,
The knocking became
the
more insistent.
unnatural
A
silence
voice called
in
out,
the forest,
Mr. and Mrs.
the
Hawkins, we need to
thing
speak
we'd
with you about the
encountered.
property. I grabbed Sarah's hand and we ran,
or what was
through the
left
kitchen,
of him.
out the back door, into
As
the
we
woods behind the
talked,
house.
I
We could
watched
hear
the
shouts behind
chief's
us, the sound
expression
of pursuit.
change from
We ran
concern
until our
to
lungs
disbelief
burned,
to
until the house
something
was far
close
behind
to
us.
fear.
But as we paused to catch
When
our
we
breath,
finished, he
a
was
terrible
silent for a
realization
long
dawned on me.
moment.
we could
Then
never
he
go back.
sighed
Our
heavily,
lives, as we knew
rubbing his
them, were over.
temples.
That was 3 months ago.
Boys,
We've been on
I've
the run
known
ever
you
since,
both
staying
for
in seedy
years.
motels, paying
You're
cash,
two of the
always
best
looking over our
damn
shoulders.
rescue
We've tried to
officers
tell our
I've
story,
ever
but no
worked
one
with.
believes us.
But
Those who
what
seem
you're
interested suddenly
describing,
go quiet, their
it's
eyes taking on that
impossible.
same vacant look we saw in the patient
Chief,
photos.
Tom
Sometimes,
started, but
in the dead of
Randall
night,
held up a hand.
I wake up to find Sarah
I'm
standing
not
by the
saying
window,
I don't
staring out
believe
into
you
the
saw
darkness.
something
When
out
I call
there.
her name, she
But
turns to
this
me with that
talk
blank
of
expression,
monsters
and for a heart-stopping moment,
whatever the
I
hell
don't know
you
if she'll
think
recognize me.
happened to Matthews,
We're changed, Sarah and I.
we can't put
Whatever
that
was in that
an
basement,
official
whatever
report.
seeped into the very foundations
You
of that house,
understand
it's in
that,
us now.
right?
I can feel it.
I felt
a presence
a
in the
surge
back
of
of my
anger.
mind. Always
So what?
watching,
We
always
just
waiting.
pretend none of this happened.
I don't know how long we can run.
There's something
I
out
don't know
there,
if we'll ever be
Chief.
safe.
Something
All I know is
dangerous.
that some doors are meant to stay
We
locked.
can't just
Some
ignore
secrets
it.
are meant to stay buried.
Randall's
And if you ever come
expression
across a house that seems
softened
too good to
slightly.
be true, with a basement door that
I'm
no
not
one wants to
asking
open,
you to ignore
run,
it, Garrett.
run, and don't look
But
back.
we need to approach
Because
this
once you've
carefully.
seen what lies behind that door,
If
you can
word
never
gets
unsee it.
out about
And you
some
might
kind
find
of
that the true
monster
horror
in
isn't
the
what you've
woods,
discovered, but
we'll
what
have
you've
a
become in the
panic
process
on
of
our
discovering
hands.
it.
Not to mention the damage it could do to the local tourism industry. I wanted to argue further, but I could
The
see
first time
the
we heard my best
logic
friend's
in
voice
what
calling
he
for help
was
from the darkness,
saying.
we rushed to
Didn't
save
mean
her.
I had to
By the
like
third
it,
time,
though.
we realized the thing using her
So
voice was
what do
hunting
we
us.
do?
Now,
Tom asked.
I'm not sure any of us will make it out of
For
these woods
now,
alive.
we
It was supposed to be
classify
a fun
this
weekend
as an
camping trip, a
unsuccessful
last hurrah
search
before
and
we all went our
rescue
separate ways for
operation,
college. 5
Randall
of us,
said.
me, my boyfriend Jake,
I'll put
our
in
best
a
friends Mia and
request
and
to
Chris's little
have
sister
that
Lily,
area of
had
the
driven up to
forest
Blackwood
closed
Forest,
off for
a
the
sprawling
time
wilderness
being,
area none of us had explored
citing
before.
dangerous
The
conditions.
first day was everything we'd hoped for.
And we'll
We
keep
hiked,
a close
swam
eye
in a
on any
crystal
other
clear lake,
reports
and spent
coming
the
in
evening
from
around the
that
campfire,
area.
roasting marshmallows and sharing
It
our hopes
wasn't
and fears
enough.
about the future.
Not
As the fire
nearly
died down
enough,
and the stars came out,
but it
we
was
retreated
all
to our
we were
tents,
going to get
exhausted
for now.
but happy. I woke
As
in the
we
middle of
left
the night
the
to the sound
chief's
of rustling
office,
outside our tent.
Tom caught
Assuming
my
it was just an
arm.
animal, I snuggled
This
closer to
isn't
Jake
over,
and tried to go
Garrett.
back to sleep.
You know that, right?
But then I heard it. Mia's
I
voice,
nodded grimly.
distant but clear.
Yeah, I
Help.
know.
Is anyone there? I'm
Whatever's out
lost.
there,
I sat bolt
it's
upright,
not going to
shaking
just
Jake
go
awake.
away
Did you hear
because
that?
we're
He blinked at
ignoring
me
it.
groggily. Hear what?
That
Mia,
night,
she's calling for
as
help.
I lay in bed
As if on
staring
cue,
at the ceiling,
Mia's voice rang out again,
I couldn't
more
shake
desperate this
the
time.
image of Devon's
I don't know where I
distorted
am.
form at the edge
Jake
of
was
the
fully awake
forest,
now, fumbling for the flashlight.
or the
We
sound
unzipped
of
the
that
tent to find Chris
creature's
and Lily already
unearthly
outside,
hum.
looking scared and confused.
Something had
Where's Mia?
changed out there
Chris
in
asked,
those woods.
his voice tight with worry.
Something fundamental.
I don't know, I said,
And I had a
but I heard her calling
sinking
for help.
feeling that this
We
was
called out to
just
Mia,
the beginning.
but there was no response.
Days turned
Just the
into
oppressive
weeks,
silence of the forest at
and
night.
life, as
We have
it
to go look
tends
for her,
to do,
Lily said,
went on.
already pulling on her hiking boots.
But for Tom and
Jake
me,
hesitated.
nothing was
Maybe
the
we should
same.
wait until morning. It's
How
dangerous to
could
go
it
hiking
be
in the dark.
after what we'd
But another
seen?
cry from Mia, sounding even
We
more
threw
frightened and far
ourselves
away,
into work,
made the decision for us.
taking on extra
couldn't leave her out
shifts
there
and
alone.
volunteering
Grabbing
for the
flashlights and
toughest
jackets, we
assignments.
set off in the direction of Mia's
Anything
voice.
to keep our
The
minds
forest was different at
occupied.
night. The familiar
To
trails
avoid
transformed
dwelling
into
on
shadowy,
that day in the
menacing
forest.
passages. Every snapping twig
But in
made
the
us
quiet
jump. Every
moments,
rustling leaf
when
sent
the
our hearts racing.
distractions fell away,
We called Mia's name as
the
we walked,
memories
our
would
voices
come
echoing
flooding
unnaturally
back.
in the still air.
I'd
then
wake up
we
in a
heard her
cold
reply,
sweat,
I'm here. Please
the
hurry.
echo of that
We broke
inhuman
into a
hum
run,
ringing in
crashing
my
through
ears.
underbrush, our flashlight beams
Tom
bouncing
wasn't
wildly.
faring much
But no matter how
better.
fast we went, Mia's
I
voice
could
always seemed to
see
be
it
just
in
out of
the
reach,
dark
leading us
circles
deeper
under
and
his
deeper into
eyes.
the woods.
and
After
the
what
way
felt like
his
hours,
hand would
we stumbled into
sometimes
a small
shake
clearing.
when we were
Our
out on a
flashlights
call.
flickered, the batteries nearly dead.
We tried to
We were
talk
lost,
about it a few
exhausted,
times
and no closer
over
to finding Mia
beers
than when we
after a
started.
long shift.
This doesn't make sense.
But the words
Chris panted.
always
We
fell
should have found her
short.
by now.
How do you
That's when we heard
describe
it.
the
Mia's laugh,
indescribable?
coming from right behind
How
us.
do you make
We spun
sense of
around,
something
relief
that
flooding through me.
defies all
But
logic?
the clearing was empty.
About
Guys,
a month after the
Mia's voice
incident,
again.
Tom
This
showed
time
up
from
at
the other
my
side of the
door
clearing.
late one night.
We turned, but there was
He
nothing
looked
there.
haggard,
A chill
his
ran down my
eyes
spine as I
wild.
realized something was very
I've
very
been
wrong.
doing some research.
We need to get out of here,
he said
Jake
without
said, his voice
preamble,
shaking.
pushing
Now,
past me into
But
my
as we
living
turned to
room.
leave, Mia's voice
He
surrounded
dropped
us,
a stack
coming
of
from every
papers
direction at
on my
once,
coffee table.
laughing, crying, screaming for help.
Research, I
It was as if
asked,
the forest itself
eyeing
had come
the
alive
pile
with her voice.
warily.
We ran. I don't know
Tom
for how long
nodded,
or in what direction.
running a hand
just
through
ran,
his disheveled
branches
hair.
whipping at our faces,
Those
roots
symbols
threatening
we
to trip
saw
us
in
at every
Devon's
step.
notebook,
Mia's
they're
voice
not
followed us,
random.
sometimes
I've
right
seen
in our
them
ears,
before in old
sometimes far in the
folklore and
distance.
occult texts.
When we finally
I
stopped,
felt a
gasping for
chill
breath,
run down my
the sun
spine.
was starting to rise.
What are you saying,
In the
Tom?
gray light of dawn, I looked
He
at my
looked
friends.
at me, his
Jake's face
expression
was
grim.
scratched and bleeding. Chris had
I'm
lost his
saying
shoe
that
somewhere along the
whatever
way.
we saw out there,
Lily was
whatever
sobbing
happened
quietly.
to Devon,
What's happening?
it's happened before.
She whimpered.
And it'll
What's out
happen
there?
again if we don't
None of
do
us had an
something
answer.
about it.
We were lost, terrified.
I spent the next
And worst
few
of all,
hours
we still
poring
hadn't
over
found
Tom's
Mia.
research.
As the day wore on,
Most
we tried
of
to
it
find our
was
way back to the
pretty out
campsite.
there.
But the forest
Fringe
seemed to have
theories,
changed overnight.
conspiracy
Landmarks we
websites,
thought we recognized
old
led us in
legends
circles.
that
Our
sounded
phones
more
had
like
no signal,
campfire
and the compass
stories
on
than
Jake's watch
fact.
was spinning wildly.
But there were
And all the
patterns,
while, Mia's voice taunted
connections
us.
that were hard
It
to
would call
ignore.
out, sounding so real,
Reports
so
of
close,
strange
that we'd instinctively
creatures
move
in
toward it.
forests
But each
around
time
the
we did,
world.
we found nothing but empty air,
Unexplained
and the growing certainty that
disappearances.
whatever was using Mia's voice
And
wasn't Mia at all.
always,
Night fell again,
always those
bringing with it a
symbols
bone-deep cold that even our shared
showing up
body
in
heat
the
couldn't
most
dispel.
unexpected
We
places.
huddled together in a small cave, too afraid
We
to light
need
a
to
fire
go
for
back,
fear of attracting
Tom said
whatever
as
was
the
out there.
first light of dawn
Maybe
started
it's
to
a
creep
skinwalker,
through my
Lily
windows.
whispered, her eyes wide.
I looked at him
My
sharply.
grandmother used to tell stories about
Are you
creatures that could mimic
insane
human voices
after
to lure
what
people to their
happened
deaths.
last time?
Don't be
That's
ridiculous.
exactly
Chris
why
snapped,
we need
but
to
I could
go
hear the
back,
fear in his
he
voice.
insisted.
There's got to be a logical explanation.
Whatever's out there,
But as
it's
the night
not
wore on
going
and
to
Mia's
stop
voice
with
continued its
Devon.
eerie serenade,
We
logic
have a
seemed further and further away.
responsibility to
At
put
some
an end
point,
to
I must
this.
have dozed off because
I
I woke
wanted
with a
to
start
argue,
to find the cave
to
empty.
tell him he was
Panic clawed
crazy.
at my throat as I
But
scrambled
deep
outside,
down, I
calling for
knew
my
he
friends.
was right.
They're gone.
We
Mia's
couldn't
voice
just
whispered
sit
from right
back
behind
and
me.
do nothing
I
while
whirled
that
around, but there was nothing there.
thing was
Just
out
trees and
there.
shadows. Where
All
are
right, I said
shouted,
finally.
My voice cracking.
But we do this
What have you done
smart.
with them?
We
Laughter echoed through
prepare,
the
we
trees,
plan,
but it wasn't Mia's
and
laugh
we
anymore.
don't tell
It
anyone
was
where
something
we're
older,
going.
darker.
If something
Something that had
happens
never been
to us
human.
out there,
I ran, blind with
Tom
terror,
nodded
no
grimly.
longer caring about direction
I
or
know,
sense. I just needed to
but
get
we
away from
have
that
to
voice,
try.
away from the thing that had taken my friends.
As we
I
started
don't know how long
planning
I
our
ran.
return to the San
Hours,
Francisco peaks,
Days.
I couldn't
Time
shake
seemed to
the
lose all meaning
feeling
in
that
that
we
endless
were
green
walking into
My
something
throat was
far
raw from
bigger
screaming,
and more
my legs weak from
dangerous than
exhaustion.
we could imagine.
But still, I ran.
But we had no
Until suddenly,
choice.
unexpectedly,
Whatever
I
was
burst out of the
out
tree
there
line
in
and
those
onto a road.
woods, it
A car
was
screeched
our
to a halt in front
job
of me,
to
the
face
driver
it,
leaning out of his window with a look of shock.
even if it killed
Are you
us.
okay, miss? He asked,
We
taking in my
spent the
wild
next
appearance.
week
I couldn't speak.
preparing for
I
our
just shook my
return
head
to
and
the
collapsed
San
onto the asphalt.
Francisco peaks.
The next few
We
days were a
told
blur
no
of
one
hospital
of our
rooms and police
plans.
interviews.
Not
Search
the
parties were
chief,
sent into the forest,
not our
but
colleagues,
they found no trace of my friends.
not even our
no
families.
bodies, no campsite.
As far as
Nothing.
anyone knew,
It
we
was
were
as if they
just
had vanished
taking
into
some
thin
time
air.
off to
The official
decompress
report
after
called it a tragic
tough
hiking
few
accident.
months.
They said my
We
friends had
gathered
probably fallen into a
supplies,
ravine or gotten
more
lost
than
and
we
succumbed to the
need for a
elements.
standard
They said the
rescue
voice I heard was just a
operation.
stress-induced hallucination.
Extra food,
But I know the truth.
water purification
I know what's
tablets,
out there in those woods,
first
wearing
aid
my
kits,
best friend's voice like a mask,
and some
luring
items that
unsuspecting hikers
raised
to their
a few
doom.
eyebrows at the
Sometimes,
camping
late at
supply
night,
store.
I still hear Mia
Salt,
calling to me,
iron
begging me to come back,
filings,
to save her.
UV
And
flashlights.
sometimes, God help me,
Tom
wanna
had
answer.
some theories
To go
about
back into
what
those
might
woods and
work
find her,
against the
to bring her
creature
home.
we'd encountered,
but then I remember the laughter,
based on his
the inhuman
research
sound
into
that came from my
folklore
friend's mouth.
and the
And
occult.
I know that if I ever set foot in Blackwood Forest
The
again,
night before we
I'll
were
never
set
come
to
out.
leave,
so I
I
stay
sat
away.
on my porch,
I've moved to the city, as
staring
far
out
from any
at the
forests as I can get.
star-filled sky.
I don't go camping anymore,
Part of me still
even like to
couldn't
be outside
believe
after
we were
dark.
doing this.
but I can't escape the guilt.
Going back
The
to
knowledge
that
that I left my
place,
friends behind,
deliberately seeking
whatever
out
took them is still
something
out
that
there,
had nearly
still
killed
hunting.
us before.
And worst of all, I
It
can't
was
shake the fear
madness.
that one day it
But
might learn
then I
to
thought
mimic more
of
than just
Devon,
voices.
of what
That
had
one
been
day,
done to
I
him,
might open my door to find
of
Mia
the
standing
other
there,
missing
smiling that
hikers who
familiar
had
smile,
never been
asking me
found,
to come with her.
of
and I'm
what
terrified
might
that when that
happen
day
to
comes,
others if we didn't
might say
put a
yes.
stop to this.
So if you're ever in the woods and
And
you hear
I
a familiar
knew we
voice
had
calling out
no
for help,
choice.
don't answer. Don't go looking.
We set
because
out
it
at
might sound
dawn,
like someone you know,
the
someone
rising
you
sun
love. But trust
painting
me,
the sky
it's not
in
them.
shades of
And if
pink
you
and
answer,
gold.
you might never be heard from
It
again.
should have been beautiful, but all I felt was a growing sense of dread as we approached the mountains. The
first time I got a
trailhead
call from
parking
myself, I
lot
thought it
was
was a
empty
prank.
when we
By the third
arrived,
call, I realized I was
just
receiving warnings
as
from my
it
own
had
future.
been that
Now
day
I'm
a
terrified
month
of what the
ago.
next ring might bring.
We
It started on a
double-checked
Tuesday,
our
just
gear
another
one
mundane
last
day at
time
the office.
before setting out.
I was knee-deep in
Both
spreadsheets when
of
my
us
phone buzzed.
hyper-aware
Grateful
of
for the
our
distraction,
surroundings.
I glanced at the screen and
The
froze.
forest seemed
The caller
different
ID showed
this
my own
time,
name and number.
darker,
Thinking it was a
more
glitch.
oppressive.
I answered with a tentative,
The silence that had
Don't take Elm
unnerved
Street home
us
today.
before was
"Hello." The
now
voice on the other
almost
end was
tangible,
unmistakably mine, but
pressing
distorted,
in on us
as if
from
coming
all
from very far
sides.
away. Before I could
No
respond,
bird
the
song,
line went dead.
no rustling
I
leaves,
stared at my phone, a
not
chill
even the
running down my
buzz of
spine.
insects.
It had to be a prank, right?
Just the
Some
crunch
new
of
app
our
that can
boots
spoof
on
caller
the
IDs
trail
and use voice
and the
modulation.
sound
But
of our
something about the
own
urgency in that
labored
voice,
breathing.
my voice, felt
We
all
pushed
too
on,
real.
retracing
Against
our
my better
steps
judgment,
from that
I decided
fateful
to heed
day.
the warning. Instead of
Every
my usual
shadow
route down Elm
seemed
Street,
to hide a
I took the
threat.
long way home.
Every
As I
rustle
approached
in
my
the
neighborhood, I
underbrush
saw
sent
flashing
our
lights
hearts
and a crowd
racing,
gathered at the intersection
but nothing
of Elm and
attacked.
5th. A
Nothing
massive sinkhole
revealed
had opened
itself.
up, swallowing 2 cars.
It wasn't until we
If I had
reached
taken my
the
usual
clearing
route,
where we
I would have been
found
right in the middle
Devon
of it.
that things
night, I
started
barely
to go
slept.
wrong.
I kept replaying the
The
call in my
clearing
mind,
looked
trying to make
exactly
sense
as
of
it had
How
before,
had
down
I
to
known?
the flattened
Was
grass
it really
where
me from the
Devon
future,
had been
somehow reaching
sitting.
back in time? Or
But
was it
as
just
we
an
stepped
incredibly
into
lucky
the open
coincidence?
space,
2 days later,
the air
it happened
seemed to
again.
thicken.
Same caller ID,
The air
same
in the
distorted version
clearing
of my
seemed
voice.
to thicken,
This time, the message
becoming
was,
almost
check the bottom drawer
syrupy.
of your desk at work.
Each breath
Now.
was a struggle,
Heart pounding.
and a
I
strange
drove to the
pressure
office using my
built
key
in
card to
my
enter the deserted
ears,
building.
like being
With
deep
shaking hands,
underwater.
I opened the bottom drawer of my
Tom,
desk.
I gasped.
There, underneath a
Something's
stack of old
wrong.
files, was a flash
He
drive I'd
nodded,
never seen
his
before.
face pale.
Curiosity
We need
overcoming
to
my
get
fear.
out of here.
I plugged it into my computer.
But as we turned
What I
to
found made
leave,
my blood run cold.
we found our
Financial
path
records,
blocked.
emails, memos, all
The
pointing to a
trees
massive
at the
embezzlement
edge of the
scheme within the
clearing
company.
had
And worst of all,
shifted.
someone had used my login
Where
credentials
there
to
had
access
been
these
an
files.
opening before,
I was being set up to take
there
the
was
fall.
now
I
only
spent
an
the next several
impenetrable
hours copying the
wall
files
of
and sending
gnarled
anonymous
trunks
tips to
and
both the police and the
twisted
company's
branches.
board of directors.
A
By morning,
low,
half the
vibrating
executive team was
hum
being let out in
began to
handcuffs.
fill the air.
I was hailed as a whistleblower,
The same
my
sound
job
we'd
and
heard
reputation
before
intact.
when we
But the
encountered
implications
the
of these
creature.
calls terrified me. If they
It
really were from
grew
my future
louder,
self, what kind of world
making
was I
my
living in
teeth
where I
ache
had access to
and my
time-bending
vision
technology?
blur.
And if I could warn myself
There,
about sinkholes and corporate
Tom
crime,
shouted,
why not
pointing
warn
to the
myself
far
about bigger
side
things?
of the clearing.
Why not prevent wars or cure
I
diseases?
saw it then.
The third call came a week later.
The thing from
By
before,
now, I was jumping at every
emerging
ring,
from between
both
the
dreading and
trees,
anticipating contact from my
but
future
it wasn't
self.
alone.
When I saw my own name flash on the
Behind
screen,
it,
I answered
moving with
immediately.
that same
Listen carefully,
unnatural,
my voice said,
jerky
even more
gait,
distorted than before.
was Devin.
In exactly 43
Or
minutes,
what
a
used
man
to
in a blue
be
jacket will
Devin.
approach you. He'll ask for
As
directions
they
to the library.
approached,
Do not
I
engage.
could see
Run.
that
Your life
Devin's
depends on it.
body had changed
The line went
even
dead.
more since
I
we'd
looked at my
last
watch,
seen him.
my heart racing.
His
43
limbs were
minutes.
elongated,
What was I supposed to do
joints
for 43 minutes
bending at
knowing my life was in danger?
impossible angles.
I paced my apartment,
His
peeking
skin
out
was
the windows,
nearly
jumping at every
translucent,
sound.
pulsing
When the
with
43
an
minutes were
eerie
almost up, I
internal
decided
light.
to leave. Whatever
The
was going to
creature
happen,
stopped
I
at
didn't want
the
it
edge
happening
of
in
the
my home.
clearing, but Devin
I had
kept
just stepped
coming.
onto the sidewalk when I saw him,
His mouth
a
open,
man in a blue jacket,
and when he
walking
spoke,
purposefully in my
it
direction.
wasn't his voice
Every
that
instinct
came
screamed at me
out.
to run, but I was frozen
You
in place.
shouldn't have come
He opened his
back,
mouth,
it
presumably to ask about the
said, in a
library,
voice that
but I didn't wait
sounded
to
like
find out.
rustling
I
leaves
turned and
and
ran
grinding
faster
stone.
than I'd ever run in my life. I could hear
Tom and
footsteps
I
behind
backed
me,
away,
gaining quickly.
but there
I
was
darted
nowhere
down
to
alleys,
go.
vaulted over fences,
We were
my
trapped.
lungs burning, my legs
What
screaming
are
for
you?
rest. But
I
the footsteps
managed
kept
to
coming.
ask, my
Just when I
voice
thought I couldn't
shaking.
run anymore, I burst out
Devin's
onto a
head
busy street.
tilted at
I
an
lost myself in the
unnatural
crowd,
angle,
finally
a
daring to look back.
grotesque
The man in
parody
the blue
of
jacket was gone.
curiosity.
I spent the night in a cheap
We are
motel,
the
too scared to go
forest.
home.
We are
My
the
mind raced with
shadows
questions.
between the trees.
Who was that man?
We
Why
are
did he
the
want to hurt
hunger
me?
that never
And most
sleeps.
importantly, how was my future
As
self
it
able to
spoke,
warn me?
more
Over
figures
the next few
emerged
weeks, the calls
from
became
the
more
woods.
frequent.
I
Sometimes they were mundane,
recognized some of
warning
them
me about a pop
from
quiz
missing
or telling me to
persons
bring an umbrella.
reports over the
Other
years.
times, they were
All
life-altering,
changed,
steering me away from danger
twisted into
or towards
something no
unexpected
longer
opportunities.
human.
I began to rely on these
You
calls,
can't stop
structuring
us,
my life around them.
the thing
I
wearing
stopped making
Devin's
plans,
face said.
always waiting
You
for
can
instructions
only
from my
join
future
us.
self. Friends drifted
That's
away,
when Tom
concerned
made
by
his
my
move.
increasingly erratic
He
behavior.
pulled something
I
from
lost
his
my
pack,
job because I
a
refused to
flare
attend a
gun.
conference my future self
Before I
hadn't approved.
could react,
But I didn't care.
he fired
I
it
was alive,
directly
wasn't I?
at the creature.
Safe, thanks
The
to my own
clearing
warnings.
erupted in
Whatever I was
blinding
becoming in the
light
future,
and acrid
it was clearly
smoke.
someone with the power
The
to reshape
creature
reality.
shrieked,
Someone who
a
could bend time
sound that
itself to
made my
protect me.
ears bleed
Then,
and my
one
vision
day,
go
the
white.
calls stopped.
Run!
At first,
Tom
I was
yelled,
just confused.
grabbing my arm.
I kept checking my phone, restarting
Somehow,
it,
we found a
even buying a
gap
new
in
one
the
in case there
wall
was
of
some
trees
technical issue.
and burst through
But
it.
as days turned to weeks
We
with no
ran
contact,
blindly through the
confusion
forest,
gave way to panic.
branches
What had
whipping at our
happened to my future
faces,
self? Had
roots
something gone
threatening
wrong?
to trip us at
Had I
every
changed
step.
the timeline so much that the me who was
Behind us,
making
I
those
could
calls
hear
no
the
longer
creatures
existed?
giving
I became
chase,
paranoid, seeing danger
their
around every corner.
inhuman cries
Without my future
echoing
self's
through the
guidance,
trees.
how could I know what decisions
We
to make?
ran until our
Which
lungs
streets were safe to
burned
walk
and our
down?
legs
Which
felt
people I
like
could trust?
lead.
I barely
But
left my
when we
apartment,
finally
ordering
stopped,
groceries online and
gasping
working
for
remotely
breath,
at a mindless data
we
entry job.
realized
My
something.
days blurred together,
The
an endless
forest
cycle of
around
fear
us
and
was
anticipation.
silent.
Then,
No pursuit,
exactly 3 months after the
no
last call,
unearthly
my phone rang.
cries,
My name
just the
flashed on the
normal
screen.
sounds
With
of the
shaking
woods.
hands, I answered, "Hello,
Birds
I'm sorry."
chirping,
It was my
leaves
voice, but
rustling
different,
in the breeze.
older,
We'd
sadder.
escape,
I'm so
but at
sorry.
what cost?
What's going on?
The
I
journey
asked,
back
my
to
voice cracking.
civilization was
Where
a
have you been?
blur.
I made a mistake.
Every shadow
my future self
made us
said.
jump.
We made a mistake.
Every
These
unexpected
they're not what
sound
we
had
thought
us
they were.
reaching for our
A
weapons,
chill ran down my spine.
but nothing
do you mean?
attacked us.
We're not saving
We
ourselves.
made it
We're
back to
trapping
our
ourselves.
truck and drove
With
away
every
from
warning,
the San
every
Francisco
intervention,
peaks.
we're creating a loop.
Neither
a
of us
prison of our own
daring to
making.
look back.
I sank to the floor,
We
my
should
legs
have
no
felt
longer able to support me.
relieved,
I don't
triumphant
understand.
even.
The man in the blue
We
jacket,
faced
my
the
future self
impossible and
continued.
survived.
he wasn't trying to hurt us.
But
He was
as
trying
the
to warn us to break the
adrenaline
loop.
wore
But we
off,
ran. We always
all I
run.
felt was
Tears
a
were
deep,
streaming down my face now.
gnawing
So what do we
dread.
do? How do we fix this?
We'd escaped.
There was a long
yes,
pause. When my future
But
self
we
spoke
hadn't
again,
stopped
his voice was
anything.
barely a whisper.
Those
can't.
things were
It's too
still
late for
out
me.
there,
But you
still hunting,
still have a chance.
still
When the next
changing
call
people
comes,
into
and it will come, don't
whatever
answer.
Devin
Break
and
the
the
cycle.
others had
Live your
become.
life without knowing what's coming.
When we
It's the only
got
way to
back
be
to
free.
town, we went
The line
straight
went
to
dead.
Chief Randall's
I
house.
sat there on the floor,
It
phone
was the
clutched to my
middle of
chest
the night,
for hours.
but this couldn't
My mind
wait.
reeled,
We
trying to
told him
process what I'd
everything.
learned. All
Our
this time I
secret
thought I was
return
saving
to the
myself,
mountains,
but I
what
was just
we'd
ensuring my
seen,
own isolation, my
what
own
we'd
fear.
learned.
Days passed,
To his
then
credit,
weeks. My
he
phone remained
listened
silent.
without
Slowly,
interrupting.
hesitantly,
When we
I began to
finished,
reclaim my life.
he was silent
I called
for
old
a
friends,
long moment.
apologizing for my behavior.
You realize
new
what
job,
this means,
One that
don't
challenged
you?
me.
He
I started
finally
dating again.
said.
But always,
I nodded
back of my
grimly.
mind, I waited for the ring.
We can't keep
the call
this
that would
quiet
test my
anymore.
resolve.
People
It
need
came on
to
a sunny
know what's
Tuesday
out
afternoon,
there.
exactly a year after
It's
that first
bigger
warning
than
about
that,
Elm Street.
Tom added.
I was in the middle of a lunch
These
date when my phone
things,
lit up.
whatever they
my own
are,
name, my own number.
they're not
My
just
date
in our
looked at me
forest.
curiously.
They're all
Aren't
over
you going
the
to
world.
answer that?
We
I stared
found
at the phone,
reports,
my hand hovering over it.
sightings, going
Everything in me
back
screamed to
centuries.
answer, to hear that warning.
Randall
know what was
sighed
coming.
heavily,
But then I remembered the
suddenly
sadness
looking
in my
much
future
older
self's
than
voice,
his years.
the regret.
This
The
is
trapped
going to
existence
change
that awaited me if I
everything.
continued
You
down
know
this
that,
path.
right?
I declined
We
the
did
call.
know.
Wrong number.
The world
I said,
as we knew it
smiling
was
at my
about
date.
to be turned
Now,
upside
where
down.
were we? As we
But what
continued our
choice
conversation,
did we have?
I felt a weight lift off my shoulders.
Over the next few
For the first
weeks,
time in a year,
our story
I wasn't waiting for
spread.
instructions. I
At
wasn't living in
first,
fear of the future.
most people didn't
I was just
believe
living.
us.
The
But
phone calls
then
may come
others
again.
came
The
forward.
temptation to answer,
Hikers,
to
campers,
know what's coming, will
other
always be
search
there.
and rescue workers,
But I've made my choice.
all with
I
their
choose
own
uncertainty.
stories of
I choose
strange
free will.
encounters in the
I
woods.
choose to live in the present.
The
what
government
may.
got involved. The area around the San Francisco peaks was quarantined. Scientists, military
first time I saw the
personnel, and
creature in my bedroom,
paranormal
I thought I was dreaming.
investigators flooded
By the
into
third night, I
Flagstaff.
realized something otherworldly
Tom
was
and
stealing
I
my
were
possessions.
questioned endlessly.
I'm not sure if
Our
I'll have
every
anything left,
word
or if I'll be
scrutinized.
next. It
We
started with small
became
things.
reluctant
A pen I could have
celebrities.
sworn I left on my
Our
desk.
faces plastered
that should have been
across
in the laundry
news
basket.
channels and
A favorite
internet
mug that
forums.
mysteriously vanished from the kitchen.
But through it all,
At first,
one
I chalked it up to
question kept
absent-mindedness.
nagging at me.
After all,
Had
I'd
we
been working
done
long
the right
hours at
thing?
the office, and stress had a way of making your mind
Yes,
play tricks
people
on you.
now knew about
then
the
I noticed
danger
a pattern.
lurking in the forest.
Every morning, I'd wake
But
up to
at
find
what
something else
cost?
missing.
The
Always
panic,
small,
the
always
fear,
something I'd used the day
the
before.
way people now
It was
looked at the
unsettling,
wilderness.
but not enough to really worry
Not
me.
with awe and
Maybe I had a
respect,
sleepwalking
but
problem.
with suspicion
Or maybe
and
my
dread.
cat, Mr. Whiskers,
And the
had developed a
creatures,
penchant for hoarding.
They were still out
It wasn't
there,
until the night I caught it in the act that I
waiting,
realized how wrong I was.
watching,
I'd been having
hungry.
trouble sleeping, tossing and
As
turning
I
for hours
sit here
before finally
now,
drifting off.
looking out at the
Something woke
forest
me.
that was once
soft
my
scratching
second
sound,
home,
like
I
nails
can't
on
help
wood.
but wonder,
My eyes flew open,
what
but I
have we
remained perfectly
unleashed?
still.
And
Heart
more
pounding in my
importantly,
chest.
can it
There,
ever be
illuminated by the
stopped?
soft glow of my digital alarm
I
clock,
don't have those
was
answers.
something.
I'm not sure
It was
anyone
vaguely
does.
humanoid, but wrong
All
in a way
I
that made
know
my
is
skin
that
crawl.
the world
Too
has
tall,
changed.
too thin,
The
with limbs that
shadows are
bent at
deeper
impossible
now.
angles.
The
Its skin seemed to
silence
shimmer
in
and
the
shift,
woods,
as if it couldn't
more
quite decide what
ominous.
color or texture to be.
And
And it was
somewhere
reaching
out
for my
there,
glasses on the nightstand.
in the darkness
watched,
between the
paralyzed with
trees,
fear, as those
something
long,
is
spindly
waiting.
fingers closed around the
So
frames.
let this be
The
a
creature
warning
turned then,
to you all.
and I caught a glimpse of its face,
The next
or
time
rather,
you're
the
hiking in
absence
the
of one,
mountains
where
and you
features should
hear a
have been.
twig
There
snap
was only a
behind
smooth,
you,
featureless
or
expanse.
see a shadow
I must have
move
made a
where
sound,
no shadow
a whimper,
should be,
a gasp.
don't dismiss
I'm
it.
not sure.
Don't
But suddenly,
rationalize it away.
That blank face
Run.
was turned towards me,
Run as
I squeezed
fast
my
and
eyes
as far
shut,
as you can.
praying that when I opened them,
Because
it would all
in
be
this
a dream.
new world we've
But when I looked
uncovered,
again, both
the
the creature and my
monsters
glasses
are
were
real.
gone. I spent
And
the
they're
rest of the night
hungry.
huddled under my blankets, jumping at every creak and rustle. When dawn finally broke, I burst out of bed, frantically searching for any sign of the creature or my missing possessions. Nothing. No glasses, no strange footprints.
I just
No
stepped
evidence at all
foot
that
into
anything
the
unusual had
cozy
happened.
but well-worn
I tried to convince myself it had been a
State
dream,
Park
a
cabin,
particularly vivid nightmare
my
brought on
home
by
away
stress
from
and lack
home
of sleep.
for the next few
But
days.
deep down, I knew what I'd
As
seen
a
was real.
seasoned park
That day at
ranger
work was a
named
blur.
Jedediah
I could barely
Kincaid,
focus. My mind
spending
constantly
nights
replaying
immersed
the
in
events
the
of the night
wilds
before.
of nature
My
was
coworkers
nothing
noticed
new
my
for me.
distraction, my jumpiness. Rough
Solitude
night,
was a
they asked,
familiar
and
companion.
I just nodded, unable to explain.
I lived alone.
As evening approached,
my
I felt a
once
growing sense of dread.
close-knit family
I didn't want to go home.
splintered by
Didn't want to
years
face
of
another night in that
festering
room.
arguments
But where else
and
could I go?
cold indifference.
I stopped at a hardware store
But
on the
the
way home,
isolation
buying a
never
night vision
bothered
camera
me,
and some
really.
motion sensors. If that
Out
thing came
here
back,
among the
was going to be
whispering
ready.
pines and
setting up
chirping
the camera
crickets,
was easy enough.
nobody
I
gave
positioned
me
it to
any
cover most of
trouble.
the room, making sure
And
it had a
I
clear view of
always
the areas
knew
where things had
that
gone missing
should
before.
an emergency
The motion
arise,
sensors I placed near the windows
help
and door.
was just
Then,
a
heart
crackle
pounding,
away
I got
on
into
my
bed and
trusty
waited.
radio.
Hours passed. Every
It
sound
had
made
been
me
a
flinch.
typical
The hum of
day
the
of
refrigerator, the
traipsing
rustle of
through
leaves
the
outside, and the
forest,
settling of the house.
breathing
But nothing
in
happened.
the earthy scents
alarms,
and
no creature.
absorbing the
Just as I
tranquil
was starting to
sights and
relax,
sounds.
thinking maybe it had all been in my head
As
after
I
all.
hiked the
I heard it.
winding trails,
That same
I
soft scratching
traded
sound from the night
light-hearted
before.
stories
I lay
and
perfectly
friendly
still,
small
hardly
talk
daring
with
to breathe.
fellow adventurers,
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a
swapping
shimmer in the
tales
air,
of past
heat waves
wilderness
rising from hot pavement.
escapades.
and then it was there.
As the sun
Materializing
dipped
out of
below
nothing.
the horizon,
It moved differently this time.
stars
more
began
cautious.
to flicker
Its head
into
swiveled
view one
slowly,
by
as if
one in
scanning
the
the room.
gradually
Did
darkening
it know about the
sky.
camera? Could it sense
Little
the motion
did I
detectors?
know as I savored
watched,
the
heart in my
serenity
throat,
of dusk
as it glided across
descending,
the room. It
that
paused
a
at my
night
dresser,
of
those long fingers
unimaginable
trailing over the
terror
items there.
lay ahead,
It picked up a small
crouching in the
figurine,
shadows.
a glass elephant my grandmother
In
had given me years
retrospect,
ago,
perhaps
and
there
turned it
had
over in
been
its hands.
signs,
Then,
subtle
to my horror,
warnings that all
began
was
to
not
change.
right.
Its form rippled and shifted,
During my hike,
shrinking and reshaping
I'd
until it was an
noticed
exact copy of
remnants
the
of
elephant
clothing,
figurine.
a
The real
shredded
figurine
flannel
disappeared,
shirt here,
seemingly
a
absorbed into
torn
the creature's
trucker
body.
hat there,
For a long moment,
scattered
the elephant creature stood
haphazardly
motionless
along
on my
the
dresser.
trails.
Then, with a fluidity that
Unusual,
defied physics,
but not
it flowed down
unheard
to the
of
floor
in a
and under the
vast
crack of my
park where
bedroom door.
belongings could
As soon as it was
easily
gone,
be lost
I leapt
or
out of bed and
discarded.
ran to the door. But when I yanked it
Whispers
open,
had been
the hallway was
circulating
empty.
among the locals,
No sign of the
too.
creature. No sign of
Murmurs
my
about a
grandmother's
recent
figurine.
spate of missing
I
persons
spent the rest of
in
the night
area.
reviewing the camera footage. It had caught
Mostly
everything.
solo
The
travelers
creature's
or
appearance, its
adventurous
transformation,
campers
its impossible
who
exit.
had wandered too
I watched it
far off
over and
the
over,
beaten
torn
path,
between fascination
never
and
to
terror.
be seen again.
What was this thing?
Disappearances
taking my
weren't
possessions?
uncommon in
most
remote
importantly,
stretches of
how
wilderness
could I stop
like
it?
this.
Over the next
But
few
the
weeks, I
frequency
became
and
obsessed. I
circumstances
set up
of the
more
recent
cameras,
cases
covering every
had
inch of my
folks
apartment.
on edge.
I installed better
As
locks,
darkness
lined my windows
blanketed
with
the
salt
forest,
on the advice of a website
the
about
very
supernatural
trees
entities.
themselves
Even considered
seemed
getting
to
a
take
dog.
on an ominous
But nothing
air.
worked. Night
My
after night, the
surroundings,
creature returned.
so
Sometimes it
familiar
took small
and
things,
welcoming by
a button,
daylight,
a paperclip,
morphed
a single earring.
into something
Other
more
times,
menacing,
larger items disappeared.
sinister
Books,
even.
shoes, once even my
And
laptop.
this from a man
each
who'd
time,
spent the
it changed
better
its
part
form
of his
to match
years
what it had taken.
navigating
I
deep
watched it become a
woods
lamp,
in every
a chair,
conceivable
even my cat
condition.
for one terrifying night. Thankfully, the
Suddenly,
real Mr.
an
Whiskers was found hiding
ear-splitting
under the couch the
scream
next morning.
tore through the night,
I tried to communicate with it.
reverberating
I
through
left
the
notes,
trees.
asking why it was doing this.
It was a
what it
raw,
wanted. I
primal
spoke to it when
cry
it
for
appeared, pleading
help
for answers.
that made
it
the
never
fine
responded,
hairs on my
never even
arms
acknowledged
and
my
neck
presence.
stand at
My life
attention.
began to unravel.
Without
I
a
couldn't sleep,
second thought,
couldn't concentrate at
I
work.
clicked on
My
my
apartment became a
heavy-duty
fortress of cameras
flashlight
and
and
traps.
sprinted
Every
toward the
surface cluttered
source
with the
of the
random
awful
objects I hoped might
sound.
entice the creature to reveal its
Boots
purpose.
pounding the
Friends stopped
hard-packed
coming by.
earth,
Put off by my
I
increasingly
briefly
erratic behavior,
considered
I missed
radioing
deadlines
for
at work,
backup,
forgot
but
to pay bills,
thought better
but
of
none
it.
of that mattered. All
No
that mattered
need
was
to hit the
understanding this
panic
thing,
button and
stopping it
rile
before it took
everyone
everything.
up over what could
Then came the
very
night it all
well turn
changed.
out to be
I
nothing.
was sitting on my bed, reviewing
Better
footage from
to
the previous night,
investigate the
when I felt it.
situation
a
first,
presence in the room, a shift in
assess
the air.
the true
I looked up
gravity of
slowly,
the threat,
and there it was,
if there
standing
even
at the foot
was
of my bed.
one.
But this
I'd
time was
handled
different.
plenty of minor
wasn't reaching for
incidents
any of my
on my own
possessions.
before.
Instead,
Surely
its
this
blank
would
face
be
was
no
turned towards
different.
me, its body unnaturally
As I
still.
rounded a bend
"What
in
do
the
you want?"
trail,
I whispered, my
flashlight
voice
beam
hoarse from lack of
bouncing,
use. For a long
I
moment,
nearly
nothing
collided
happened.
with something that
Then,
sent icy
slowly,
tendrils
its
of
form
fear
began to change.
snaking down my
I watched in
spine.
horrified fascination as it shifted
There
and
in
morphed,
the
growing
shadows
smaller,
stood a
taking on color
towering
and definition,
creature, at
until I
least
was
7
staring at
feet tall,
myself.
with a heavily
It was like
muscled
looking in a mirror,
frame barely
but wrong.
concealed beneath a
This
coat
version of me stood too
patchy
straight,
matted fur.
its movements too smooth as it
Even
cocked its
in
head
the
to one
dim
side.
light,
"What do you want?"
I could make
It parroted
out the
back at me,
lattice work
its
of
voice an
scars
unsettling imitation of my own.
crisscrossing its hide,
I scrambled backwards on the bed,
hinting
putting
at a
distance between
long
myself and this
history of
doppelganger.
battles fought
"Why are you
and
doing
won.
this?" I demanded.
Piercing
taking my
yellow
things?
eyes bored
It
into
blinked,
mine,
the gesture somehow both
intelligence
familiar
and
and
malice
alien.
sparking
"Taking,"
within their
it said,
depths.
as if testing out the word.
Wickedly curved
No,
claws
learning,
dragged
becoming.
something heavy,
A
its
chill ran down my
identity
spine.
obscured by the
Becoming
darkness.
what?
The
Its
creature
lips curved into a
snarled,
smile that didn't reach its
a
eyes.
guttural sound
Everything,
that sent
anything,
primal shivers
With
cascading
that,
down my
it began
back.
to change again, cycling rapidly
Luminous
through forms.
eyes,
My
never
grandmother's
leaving
elephant, my
mine.
missing glasses,
It slowly
the
drew
sock from the
back
first night.
lips to reveal
Faster and faster
row
it shifted,
upon row
a dizzying
of
kaleidoscope
dripping
of all the things it had
dagger-like
taken from me.
fangs.
and
Then,
with a sound
quick
like
as a
rushing wind,
lightning strike,
it was
it
gone,
whirled and
along
vanished
with everything
into
else in
the
my room.
gloom,
I sat there in my
leaving
now empty
only
bedroom,
faint
trying to
rustles and
process what had just
snapping
happened.
twigs in its
All my
wake.
possessions, everything the
Rooted
creature
to
had been
the
stealing over
spot,
the past weeks
chest
had vanished
heaving,
with it.
I tried
But
to
more than that,
process the
I felt
terrifying sight
different,
I just
as
witnessed.
if something fundamental had shifted
Every
inside me.
detail of the beast
I caught sight of my
seared
reflection in the
itself
window and
into my
froze.
mind.
For just a
The
moment,
corded,
I could have sworn my
sinewy
face
muscles,
rippled and changed,
the predatory
becoming that
eyes,
smooth, featureless expanse
those
I'd
wicked
first seen weeks
teeth
ago.
and claws.
But then it was gone.
But I couldn't afford
And I was
to
just
give
me
in
again.
to the mind-numbing
Wasn't I?
fear.
As I sat there,
Not when
surrounded by
someone
the
out
empty shell
there
of my
still
former life,
desperately
a
needed
terrifying
help.
thought occurred to me.
Infused
What if the
with
creature
fresh
hadn't just been taking
adrenaline,
my
I
possessions?
pushed onward,
What if,
vowing
piece
to
by
gather
piece,
as
memory by
much
memory, it had
information
been
as
taking
I
me,
could before
and now that it
sounding
had
the
everything,
official
now that it had
alarm?
learned me completely,
But nothing,
what would it do?
not my
Where had it
years
gone?
of training
More
nor a
importantly,
lifetime
who
in the
or
wilderness
what am I now?
could have prepared
I'm writing
me
this as
for
a
the
warning.
horrific
If you
sight
notice things going
awaiting
missing,
me in that
If you catch
moonlit
glimpses of
clearing.
something that shouldn't be there, don't ignore it.
As I
Don't try
stumbled
to
into
understand
the
it.
clearing where
Run
the blood-curdling
too late.
screams had
Before you're not you
originated,
anymore.
my
And if you see
stomach
someone who looks
clenched
just like me
and
out
my
in the world,
blood ran
someone
cold.
who knows things only I should know,
Illuminated in
well,
the ghostly
I'm not sure what to
moonlight
tell you,
was a
because I'm not
scene
sure
of
anymore if
unspeakable
that person is really
carnage,
me, or if I'm
like
really me
something
either.
straight out of a grisly horror film. There, strewn amidst the dewy grass, as if carelessly discarded,
The moment the lights
was a
went out, I
mutilated
knew something
human
was terribly
body.
wrong. By the
It
time they
had
flickered
been
back
ripped
on, the
apart
children
with
I was watching had
savage
been replaced by
ferocity,
something inhuman.
limbs and
Now, I'm
entrails
trapped in a house with
scattered
creatures that wear
about
the
like
faces of innocent
macabre
kids,
confetti.
and I'm running out of places to hide.
The face was
It was
battered
supposed to be an
beyond
easy
all
night,
recognition.
just a simple babysitting
A
gig for the new family in the neighborhood.
oozing ruin
The Millers
that bore
seemed nice
no
enough,
resemblance
a bit
to
odd,
anything
maybe,
that
with their
had
matching
once
blank
been
smiles
human.
and too perfect lawn. But who was I to
Bile
judge?
rose in
Their
my
money spent
throat
just the
as I
same,
fought
and
to
as a broke college
process
student,
the sheer
I wasn't about to turn
brutality
down
of
an
it
easy
all.
$50. The kids,
In an
Tommy and
instant,
Sarah,
the
were
haunting
angels when their parents
cries
left.
that had drawn me
8 and
to
6
this
years old,
gory
respectively.
tableau
They sat quietly
took
coloring while I
on a
flipped through channels on the massive
gut-wrenching
flat-screen
new
TV.
meaning.
Outside,
those
the wind
hadn't
howled,
been screams
trees
of
scraping
terror.
against the windows like
They'd
skeletal
been
fingers.
the agonized
The storm was brewing,
death
but I wasn't
throes
worried.
of a
I'd
person being
babysat through
torn
plenty of power
asunder,
outages before.
and I'd
As if on
arrived
cue,
too late
the
to
lights
do a
flickered
damn
once,
thing
twice,
about it.
and then plunged us into darkness.
As I stood there
I heard Sarah
frozen,
let out a small
struggling not to
"It's
lose
okay,
the
guys,"
meager
I said,
contents of
fumbling
my
for my phone
stomach,
to use as a flashlight.
a sharp
Just a little
voice
power
cut
outage,
through the
nothing to be
night.
scared of.
Hey,
But as I turned
who's
on my
there?
phone's light,
It
I realized the
demanded,
room was empty.
tinged with
The kids were
equal
gone.
parts
My heart
fear
rate picked
and
up.
forced
They must have run
bravado.
off to their rooms, spooked by the
I
darkness.
whirled toward the sound,
I stood up,
hand
calling their names as I made
instinctively
my way towards
flying
the
to my
stairs.
holstered
That's when I heard
sidearm.
it. A low,
From the
guttural sound
shadows
coming from the
emerged
kitchen.
a familiar
It wasn't
face,
quite a growl. It wasn't quite a
Horatio
laugh.
Plunkett,
It was something
the
in
gruff
between.
but
Something that made the
good-natured
hair on the
local
back of my neck
mechanic.
stand up.
He
Tommy,
clutched his
Sarah?
trusty
I
old
called again,
shotgun
my
in
voice shaking.
white-knuckled hands,
This isn't funny, guys.
posture
Come out now.
tense as a
The sound
coiled
came again,
spring,
closer this time.
eyes wide
then,
and wary
in the beam
as
of my
they
phone's
darted
flashlight,
from me
I
to
saw
the
them.
grisly remains
Two small
and back
figures stood
again.
in the doorway to the kitchen.
Relief
looked like Tommy and
crashed
Sarah.
through me,
But
followed swiftly by a renewed
proportions
sense
were
of
off.
dread.
limbs too long and jointed
If
in places they
easygoing
shouldn't be.
Horatio looked
And their
ready to
faces.
snap,
God,
then
their
things
faces,
were even worse
where
than
there should
I
have been
feared.
eyes and noses and mouths, there was
Did
only
you-
smooth, pale
Did
skin.
you see that thing too?
I screamed.
I
couldn't
asked,
help it.
my voice
sound tore from my
emerging
throat
as a
before I could
hoarse
stop it.
croak.
The creatures,
Horatio
because they
gave a
certainly weren't
jerky
children anymore,
nod,
cocked their heads
face
in unison.
pale beneath
Then,
his grizzled
slowly,
beard.
sickeningly,
In
their
that
blank faces
moment,
split
I
open,
knew beyond a
revealing rows
doubt
of
that the
needle-sharp teeth.
monster I'd
I ran
glimpsed
up the
had
stairs,
been
taking them two
all
at a
too
time, my
real,
heart pounding so hard I thought it
and
might burst
that
out
it
of my
was
chest.
somehow
I slammed
responsible
into the first door
for
I
the
saw, the bathroom,
atrocity
and locked it behind me.
lying at our feet.
For a long moment, there was
Swallowing
silence.
hard,
I stood there,
Horatio
back
and
pressed
I
against the
came
door,
to a
trying
silent
to steady my
agreement.
breathing. What the
We
hell had happened
wouldn't
to the
let
kids?
fear rule us.
What were those things downstairs?
But we also
scratching sound
couldn't
at the door
risk
made me jump.
venturing further
Come
in
out,
the dark,
come out.
not
sang a voice
without
that was almost,
backup
but
and
not
better
quite,
intel
Sarah's.
on what
We want to play.
exactly we were dealing
Yeah,
with.
chimed in not Tommy.
The
Don't you want
unknown
to play with us?
creature had already
Their voices were all
claimed
wrong.
one life
Too high
tonight.
and too low at the same
We
time.
refused
with a
to let
strange
it
echo
take
as
ours
if multiple
too.
voices were speaking at once.
We made a
I looked
plan.
around frantically for a weapon,
Voices hushed,
anything I could use to
as
defend
if the
myself.
very trees
But the
might
bathroom
be
was sparse,
listening
just a
in.
toilet, sink, and
We'd
shower.
retreat to
No
the
window to
relative
escape through.
safety of the,
The scratching at the
cabins
door
for the
intensified,
night, but
accompanied by a
stay
sound
in
like nails on a
constant
chalkboard.
radio
I
contact.
could see the wood starting to splinter.
Always within seconds
desperation,
of
I
summoning
climbed into
help
the bathtub
should
and pulled the shower
beast
curtain
return.
closed. It was a flimsy
Tomorrow,
hiding place,
after
but it was all I
daybreak,
had.
we'd
door
mobilize
burst
a
open with a
search
crash.
party.
I held my breath.
Park
pressing
rangers
myself
and
against the cold
sturdy
porcelain of the
local
tub.
volunteers
Where are
to
you?
track the creature
Sarah
and
sing-song.
bring this nightmare
We can
to
smell
an
you,
end.
you know. I could
As
hear them
we
moving around the
parted
small bathroom,
ways,
opening
each
cabinets,
to
knocking
our
things
own
over.
cabin,
They were getting closer.
I couldn't
Suddenly, the
suppress
shower
the
curtain was ripped
shudder
away.
that ran through
I
me.
found myself face to face with the
I
thing that used to be
trusted
Tommy.
Horatio,
Up close,
but
I
a
could see that his
large
skin was
part of
almost
me
translucent,
balked at the
pulsing with
thought
an
of
otherworldly
facing
light.
the long night alone
Found you,
with that
it said,
thing.
its mouth stretching into
prowling
an
the
impossibly
park.
wide grin.
Before
I
we
reacted
went
on
our
instinct,
separate ways,
grabbing the shower head and
we
turning it on full
synchronized
blast.
our walkie-talkies
The creature
to
shrieked
the
as the water
same
hit it,
secure
its
channel.
skin seeming to bubble and melt.
Remember,
I didn't wait to see what would happen
Horatio
next.
said gruffly,
I bolted past the
anything
writhing
seems
creature,
off.
past
Even
Sarah,
a little
who was
bit,
reaching
you
for me
holler.
with elongated fingers.
I'll come running,
and out into the
guns
hallway.
blazing.
The lights chose
He
that moment to
hefted
flicker
his
back
shotgun for
on,
emphasis.
temporarily blinding me.
I nodded,
I stumbled,
mustering a tight
catching
smile
myself on the
despite
banister of the stairs.
icy fear
That's when I saw
gripping
it.
my entrails.
A family portrait on the
We'd
wall
faced
that I
down
hadn't
plenty
noticed
of
before.
challenges
It showed
before
the Millers,
Horatio
Mom,
and I.
Dad, Tommy, and Sarah.
But this
But in the photo,
This
they all
was
had the same
uncharted
blank, featureless
territory.
faces, as the creatures downstairs.
Sleep proved elusive.
A horrible
that
realization
night.
dawned on me.
Every creak
These
of
weren't
the
creatures
old
that had replaced the
cabin
children.
and whisper of
This was the
wind
Miller
through
family.
branches,
This is
setting
what they
my
really were.
nerves jangling
The sound
afresh.
of wet, slapping footsteps
I
snapped me
lay
back to
in my
reality.
bunk, fully
The
dressed.
creatures were coming,
Service weapon
I ran
within
downstairs,
easy reach,
headed for the front door.
jumping at shadows
But as I reached
and
for the handle,
straining my ears
saw
for
movement
any
outside.
sound
More
that might
blank-faced figures were
herald the
approaching the
creature's
house.
approach.
The rest of the neighborhood,
But the
I
only
realized with a sinking
noises
feeling,
were the
they
usual
were all like this.
symphony of
was
nighttime
trapped.
in the forest.
the next few hours were a blur of
The
terror. I
mournful
moved from room
hooting
to
of
room,
an owl,
always just one
the
step ahead of the
skitter of
creatures.
small creatures
They were
in
playing
the
with me, I
underbrush,
realized.
the
Like a cat with a
buzz
mouse.
and chirp of
They
insects.
could have caught me at any time,
Somehow,
but they were enjoying the
those
chase.
familiar
I
sounds
found
were
myself in Mr.
almost
Miller's
more
study,
unsettling,
frantically searching for anything
serving
that
to
might help me
highlight
understand
the
what was
eerie
happening.
quiet
And
left
there,
behind
in a
the
locked
wake
drawer
of
that I
death
managed
and
to pry open,
monsters.
I found a book.
Despite
It was
my
old,
bone-deep
the leather cover cracked and
exhaustion, I
faded.
must have
The title,
dozed off
barely
at
legible,
some point.
read The Convergence,
I
a
awoke
guide to
with a
interdimensional
start,
colonization.
heart
With shaking
pounding.
hands, I
The
opened it.
phantom echo
The
of
pages were filled with
screams
diagrams
still
and dense
ringing
text,
in my ears.
most of it in languages I didn't recognize,
But it was
but
only
there were
a
notes in the
nightmare.
margins, written in
My
Mr. Miller's
slumbering
handwriting.
mind
The humans
conjuring
suspect nothing.
fresh
One note
horrors
read,
to mingle
"Their
with
flesh
the
suits
all
us well."
too real ones.
Another, the children are adapting
Weak
quickly to their new
sunlight
forms.
filtered
Soon,
through the
we
grimy
will be ready to
cabin
expand.
windows,
My blood
heralding a
ran
new
cold as I
day.
realized the full scope of what
But
was
the
happening.
golden
This
rays
wasn't just
did
about one
little to
family.
lift
This was an
the
invasion.
ominous pall
A creak in the
hanging over
floorboards
the
made me snap
park.
the book shut. I turned
If
to see all
anything,
four Millers standing in the
The
doorway, their blank
incongruity
faces somehow
between
radiating
cheery
amusement.
sunshine
Curious
and
little thing,
lurking
aren't you?
danger
Mrs. Miller
only
said, her
heightened
voice a
the
discordant
sense
chorus.
of wrongness.
Most babysitters just sit and watch TV.
After a hasty
are you?
breakfast of
I
trail
asked,
mix and
although I
weak
already knew
coffee,
the answer. Mr.
I
Miller stepped
rendezvoused
forward,
with
his form
Horatio
rippling
to
and changing
assemble
until
our
he looked almost
makeshift
human
task
again.
force.
Almost, but not quite.
As I
We are
surveyed
the
the
future,
small
he
group
said.
of
And you,
grim-faced
my dear,
men and
are
women
witnessing the
gathered
beginning of a
around
new
us,
world order.
I
Why
couldn't
are you
help
telling me
but
this?
feel a
I
pang
asked,
of guilt.
backing away until I hit the
These
desk.
people
Why not
trusted
just
me,
kill me?
looked up to me as a
Sarah,
leader
or the
and
thing wearing
protector.
Sarah's shape, giggled.
And
It
now
was a
I was
horrifying
leading
sound.
them straight into the
Oh,
hunting grounds
we're not
of a
gonna kill you,
vicious,
she said.
unnatural killer.
No, Tommy added. We're
But
going to
what
make
choice
you one
did
of us.
we have?
As one,
The
they began to
authorities
advance on
had
me.
already made
looked
it
around
clear
desperately for an
that
escape
they
route,
wouldn't be
but there was nowhere to
riding to
go.
the rescue
That's when I
anytime
remembered the
soon.
book in my hands. Without
It was
thinking,
up to
I
us,
hurled it at the overhead
this
light.
ragtag
bulb shattered,
band of
plunging the
rangers,
room into
hunters,
darkness.
and
In the
tradesmen
confusion,
to
I
restore
managed to slip past
safety
them
and
and out of the study.
sanity to
I
our
ran
woods.
for the front door, no longer
We
caring
were
about
the
what waited
only
outside.
line of
Whatever
defense
it was,
between the
it couldn't be worse
creature
than what was in this
and
house.
untold
But as I burst
future
out onto
victims.
the front lawn, I saw
So,
that the street was empty.
with heavy hearts
blank-faced
and a
neighbors,
gritty
no
sort
sign
of
of anything
determination,
unusual. Just a
we
normal,
struck out
quiet
into the
suburban night.
misty dawn,
I didn't stop running
a
until I reached the
cadre
police
of
station.
makeshift
They
monster
didn't believe
hunters,
me, of course,
armed
They sent a
with
car to check on the
whatever
Millers,
weapons we
but
could
reported
muster.
back that everything was fine.
I
The
didn't
kids
know
were in
what
bed,
the day
the
would
parents
bring,
confused
but
but
one
polite
thing
about
was
the
certain.
disturbance. I sit here now,
One way
writing
or
this as a
another,
warning.
this
They're out
ended
there,
today.
wearing human faces,
The beast's
planning who
reign
knows
of
what.
terror would
And
be
they're spreading.
snuffed out
so the next time
or
you see a
we'd
family that
die
seems too
trying.
perfect, with smiles that don't
in
quite
the
reach their eyes,
untamed
be
wilderness.
careful.
There
Look
could be
closely at their
no
family
halfway
photos,
measures,
and whatever you
no
do,
compromises
don't agree to babysit
with
their
the
kids,
primal
because in this new
savagery
world,
of tooth
the
and
monsters
claw.
don't hide under the bed.
The
They are
monster
the bed,
had
the
thrown
house,
down the
the entire
gauntlet.
neighborhood, and they're
And
always,
now
always watching,
we answer.
waiting for the lights to go out.
For better or worse, we'd see this through to whatever bitter end awaited. As our grim-faced group
The first
set
time I saw
out
the
into
figure on
the
my morning
misty
run,
forest,
I dismissed it as a
an
trick of the
almost
light.
palpable
By the third
sense
time,
of
I realized it
trepidation
was
hung
following
in
me.
the air.
Now, as it inches
Despite
closer each
the
day,
wan
I'm
sunlight
terrified of what will happen when
filtering
it
through
finally
the
reaches me.
canopy,
I've always
The
been an early
woods
riser,
seemed to
preferring to
press
start
in
my day with a
around
brisk
us,
jog through the quiet
dark
streets of my
and
suburban neighborhood.
foreboding.
There's something
Every
magical about the world
snapping
at dawn.
twig and
The
rustling
soft
leaf
glow of the
made us
rising sun,
flinch,
the gentle
hands
chorus of waking birds,
reflexively
the
tightening on
peaceful emptiness
weapons.
of roads usually bustling with
We
activity.
barely made it
was my
100
time,
yards
my
from
ritual,
the cabins
my
when
sanctuary,
Horatio's
until it wasn't.
walkie-talkie crackled to
It started
life,
on a crisp autumn
making
morning.
us all
The air
jump.
had that perfect chill that invigorates
Kincaid,
your lungs and makes you feel
Plunkett,
alive.
you there?
I was about halfway
We've
through
got-
my usual 5-mile
We've
route
got
when I saw
another
it.
body.
A figure
Over.
standing perfectly still on the sidewalk
The
about a block
voice on
ahead.
the other end
In the misty
sounded
half-light of
shaken,
dawn,
almost
it was little more
hoarse
than a
with
silhouette.
shock and sorrow.
unnaturally
My
thin,
heart sank
facing
as
directly towards me.
Horatio depressed
A
the
shiver
talk
ran
button.
down my spine, but I shook
Roger
it off.
that. We're on
Probably
our
just
way.
someone waiting for an early
Stay
bus,
put
I
and
told
stay
myself.
alert.
Or maybe
Over
a
and out.
particularly realistic Halloween
He
decoration
met
put up
my
by an
gaze,
over-enthusiastic
a
neighbor.
muscle jumping
But as I
in
drew
his
closer,
weathered cheek
figure
as
seemed
he
to shimmer and
clenched his
fade,
jaw.
like heat waves
I
rising
nodded,
from hot pavement.
mouth set in
By
a
the time I
grim
reached the
line.
spot where it had been standing,
We'd
there
all
was nothing
known
there.
on some
Not even
level
footprints in the
that
dewy
the
grass
creature's
beside the sidewalk.
violence was far
I
from
finished my
over.
run that day with an uneasy feeling in
But
the pit of
that
my
didn't
stomach.
make
But by the
facing
time
the
I'd showered and
ugly
headed to work,
reality
I'd almost
any
convinced myself
easier.
I'd imagined the whole thing.
With leaden feet
Almost.
and heavy hearts,
2 days later,
we
I
made
saw it
our
again.
way to the
Same
coordinates
route,
provided.
same time.
An isolated
time it was
thicket,
closer.
not far
Maybe half a
from
block
one of
away
the
instead of a
lesser
full
used
block.
trails.
And this time, I was sure it was looking
There,
at me.
just as
I couldn't make out
described,
any features.
lay yet
It was still just a
another
black silhouette
mangled
against the
corpse.
lightening sky.
My
But I could
breath
feel its
caught in
gaze
my
boring
throat.
into me. I stopped dead in
Nausea
my tracks,
rising
heart
as I
pounding.
took in the nightmarish
"Hello?"
scene.
I called out, my voice
This
sounding
time,
small and scared in the
The
early morning
victim
quiet.
was one of our
No
own,
response. No
a
movement.
fellow ranger
Just that
named
silent,
Reinhard
watching
Neufeld.
presence. I
His
stood there for what
sturdy
felt like
uniform,
hours, but was
meant
probably
to
only a minute
protect
or two,
against the
locked
elements,
in a staring
had
contest
been
with this
shredded
impossible
like
figure.
tissue paper,
Then, just like
offering
before,
no
it
defense
faded away as
against
if it
the
had never been there
creature's
at all.
savage claws.
This time, I couldn't shake off the encounter
Reinhard's
so easily.
body was a
I spent the
ruin
day
of
jumping in
torn
shadows,
flesh and
constantly
shattered
looking over
bone.
my shoulder.
His
That night,
face frozen
I barely slept.
in an
My
eternal
dreams plagued by
rictus
visions
of
of a
terror.
tall, thin shadow creeping ever
I
closer.
swallowed
But
hard,
the next morning,
grief and
I went for my
anger
run
welling
anyway.
up inside
I
me,
told myself I was
threatening
being
to choke
ridiculous.
me.
That there had to be a logical
Reinhard had
explanation.
been a good
But I couldn't
man,
let some
a
strange trick of the light
dedicated
or overactive
serviceman.
imagination disrupt my routine.
He'd sworn an
I
oath
regretted that
to
decision as
defend
soon as I
these
rounded the corner
lands
onto
and
Maple Street and
all
saw
who
it again.
wandered them.
This time,
Now
It was only
he
about
was
20
just
yards away,
one more
close enough
grisly
that I should have been able
monument
to make
to
out
our
details.
failure.
clothing,
One
facial
more
features,
unanswered
something.
cry for help.
but it was still just a featureless
But
black
even
form.
as shock
as if
and
someone had cut a
sorrow
person-shaped
threatened
hole
to
in reality.
overwhelm us,
I turned and ran.
gritty
Not my
determination
usual
set
measured
in.
jogging pace, but a
We
full-out
couldn't
sprint
fall
fueled by pure
apart.
animal
Not
terror.
now.
I didn't stop until I was back
Not
home,
with a
door
monster
locked behind
still
me,
on the
gasping
loose.
for breath. I
And
didn't
who
go running
knew
for a
how
week
many
after that.
lives
I told
hanging in
myself
the
it was
balance?
because of a busy schedule at work.
If we
But
let
deep down,
ourselves
I knew
succumb
the
to
truth.
despair,
I was scared.
then Reinhard
Scared of
and
what I
the
might
other
see if I
victims
ventured out
would
in
have
those early
died
morning
for
hours
nothing.
again. But eventually,
So we did the only
restlessness
thing
got to
we
me.
could do.
the need for my
We
morning
put
ritual
our horror
for the peace
and
and clarity it
heartache
brought me
aside,
outweighed my fear.
channeling it into
So,
cold,
Exactly 1
clear
week after my
purpose.
last encounter, I laced up my
Morning
running
would
shoes
come
and stepped
later,
out into the pre-dawn
once the
quiet.
creature was
For the first mile,
destroyed
everything
and the
seemed
park
normal.
was safe again.
The familiar rhythm of my feet hitting the
Until
pavement,
then,
the steady
we
in
had
and out
work
of my
to do.
breath, the gradual lightening of the sky.
I knelt beside
It all lulled me
Reinhard's
into a false
body,
sense of security.
swallowing back
Then I saw
bile as I
It was
forced
standing at the end of my
myself to
driveway,
examine his
waiting for me,
injuries more
as
closely.
if it knew I'd come back eventually.
Despite
I
the
froze,
savagery of
My
the
body
attack,
flooding with icy terror.
there was
It
calculation
was close
to
enough
the
now that
carnage.
I should have been able to see every detail.
Each gouge and
But it was
gash
still just a silhouette,
seemed placed
a black
with
cutout against the
deliberate,
world.
almost
The
surgical
edges of its form seemed
precision,
to waver and shift,
as if the
it wasn't
creature
quite solid.
wasn't just killing,
We stood there, facing each
but
other, for what
dissecting,
felt like an eternity.
learning.
I wanted to run, to scream,
Look at this,
to do something,
I called hoarsely,
but I was paralyzed,
gesturing
in the
to
gravity
a
of its unseen
particularly
gaze.
deep slice
Finally,
along Reinhardt's thigh.
It raised one impossibly
The
long arm
edges
and
were
pointed
too
at me.
smooth,
That broke
too
the spell.
straight to have been
I turned
made
and
by
fled back into my
claw
house,
or tooth
slamming and
alone.
locking the door behind me.
Horatio
I spent the rest of the day
frowned,
huddled on my couch,
leaning in
curtains
for
drawn,
a closer look.
jumping at every sound.
His
I
eyes
called in sick
widened
to work the next day,
as
and the
realization
day after that.
dawned.
I couldn't bring myself to leave
It's
the house.
using tools.
Every time I looked out a
he
window,
breathed,
I expected to see
horror
that figure
and
standing there,
fascination
waiting.
warring in his voice.
On the third day of my self-imposed quarantine,
Knives,
my best
blades,
friend Lisa
something
came by to check
sharp
on me.
and metal to
I broke
help
down
with
and told her everything.
the
To her credit, she
dismemberment.
listened without interrupting.
The
her face growing more
implication
concerned
sent
with
a
each word.
collective shudder
When I
through
finished,
our group.
She was quiet for a long
What
moment.
we were dealing
Then she
with
said,
was no mere
"Okay,
animal.
Tomorrow morning,
It was
I'm coming
something
with you
far
on your run.
worse.
We'll figure this out
A
together."
thinking,
I wanted to
reasoning
refuse,
predator
to tell
with
her
a
it was too
taste
dangerous,
for
but the
man-made
thought of facing
weapons.
that thing alone again was
A
too much to
true
bear.
monster
So I agreed.
in every sense of the
The next
word.
morning, Lisa showed
But
up at
if
my
the
door at
creature were
5:30
smart
a.m.,
enough
dressed
to
in running
use
gear
tools,
and looking determined.
that meant
"Ready?"
it might
she asked.
also be
I nodded,
leaving
not
behind
trusting myself
other
to speak.
traces of its
Together,
presence.
we set off down my usual route.
Clues to help
For the
us
first
track
mile,
it down
everything was
before
fine.
it could strike again.
I started to relax, thinking maybe the
With
presence of another
renewed
person had
purpose,
scared
we
off whatever
fanned
that
out
thing was.
in a grid pattern,
But then we turned onto Maple Street.
scouring the
and there it
area
was.
for any
It stood
sign
in the
of
middle
the
of the
beast.
sidewalk, maybe 10 yards away,
Snapped branches,
closer than it had ever been before.
tufts of
I stopped
coarse
so
hair
abruptly that
snagged
Lisa nearly
on
ran into me.
brambles.
"What?" she
Weird
asked, following my
three-toed
gaze.
tracks
"What is it?"
sunk
I
deep
pointed,
in the
my hand
muddy
shaking.
earth.
"There. Don't you see
Every
it?"
scrap
But Lisa
of
just looked
evidence was
confused.
carefully
"See what?
bagged
There's
and
nothing
logged,
there, Jen." I turned
building
to
a
her, disbelief
fragmentary
and terror warring in
profile
my
of
mind.
our
"How
quarry.
can you not see it? It's right there."
As the day wore
As we
on,
argued, the figure
we
began to move.
ranged
Not
farther
walking,
afield,
exactly. More
leaving
like it was being pulled
Reinhardt's
forward by an
body under
invisible
solemn
force, its
guard
feet never
to
leaving
be
the ground.
retrieved later.
It was coming straight for us.
We
I
couldn't
grabbed Lisa's
afford
arm.
to waste
"We have to go.
daylight on the
Now."
long hike back
She
to
resisted,
base camp.
still looking bewildered.
Not when
"Jen,
the clock
there's
was
nothing."
ticking and
But I was already
fresh
running,
horror might
dragging
be
her with me.
unfolding
We sprinted
even
back
as
to my
we
house, Lisa
hesitated.
protesting the whole way. I chanced to
Despite our
glance over my
best
shoulder
efforts,
just before we reached
the
my
creature
driveway.
continued
The
to
figure was there
elude
at
us,
the end of the block.
always
watching,
seeming to melt
waiting.
away into the
Once we were
undergrowth
safely inside,
just as
Lisa
we
demanded an
closed in.
explanation. I told her
It
everything
was
again,
toying
my words
with us,
tumbling out
I
in a panicked
realized,
rush.
with
She
mounting
listened, her
frustration,
expression a mixture of concern and skepticism.
letting us think we
"Jen,"
were the
she
hunters
said gently
when
when
in
I'd finished,
reality
"I think you might need to
we
talk to
were
someone.
little
a
more
professional.
than hapless prey,
This sounds like it could be some kind of
being
stress-induced
led on a
hallucination."
merry chase.
"It's not," I insisted.
But we
"It's
couldn't
real.
give up.
I know it is." But even as I
Surrender
said
was
it,
not an
doubt
option.
began to creep in.
Not with innocent
going
lives
crazy?
on the line.
Was this all in my head?
And the monster's
Lisa
cruelty
left shortly
still
after,
fresh in our
extracting a promise
minds.
from me that I'd call a therapist.
We had to keep going.
I agreed,
Had
if
to
only to
see
get her to
this
leave.
through, no matter
But I had
how
no intention
hopeless
of
it
following
seemed.
through. I knew what
And
I'd
then,
seen was real,
Just
even if
when
I couldn't explain it.
exhaustion and demoralization
I
were
woke up at
starting
exactly
to take their
3:33 a.m.
toll,
The room was
a
filled with a
shout
strange,
rang
shimmering
out
light.
from the eastern
And there,
quadrant
at
of
the
our
foot of my
search
bed,
grid.
was the figure.
Over
I
here,
tried to scream,
I
but
found
no sound
something.
came out. I tried to
We
move,
converged
but my
on
body
the
wouldn't
scene
respond.
at a stumbling
all
run,
I could do was lie there,
breath
paralyzed,
ragged
as
and
it slowly
hearts
leaned over me.
pounding with
For
mingled
the first time,
fear and
I could make out
anticipation.
features on its face. Or rather,
There,
the lack of
half
features,
hidden in a
where there should have been
tangle of
eyes,
thorny
a nose,
underbrush,
a mouth. There
was
was only
a
smooth
large
black
canvas
nothingness.
sack,
It reached out one long,
clumsily
spindly arm, its
stitched
finger almost
together
touching
from
my forehead,
mismatched
and then,
scraps.
in a voice that seemed to come from
It
everywhere and
bulged
nowhere at once,
obscenely,
it spoke.
hinting at the grim
Soon,
contents
it said,
within.
"Soon,
With
you
a
will
sense
understand."
of leaden dread,
I must have passed out,
Horatio
because the next
reached
thing I
out
knew, it
with
was
a
morning.
trembling hand
Sunlight
and
streamed through my
upended the
windows, and the
sack.
figure was gone.
Out
But on my
spilled a
nightstand was a
grisly
single black
jumble
feather,
of bones
impossibly
and bits
soft
of
and light.
flesh, all
sit here
in
now,
varying
writing this
states
as a
of
warning.
decay.
I don't know what that thing is or what it
Bile
wants with me.
burned the back
I
of
don't
my
know if it's
throat
real
as I
or if I'm losing my
recoiled.
mind.
The
All I know is
noxious
that it's getting
stench
closer
of
every day,
rot
and I'm
flooding
running
my
out of time.
nostrils.
So if you're out for an
But
early
even
morning
through
run
the
and you
haze
see
of
a strange figure
disgust,
in the
I
distance,
forced
don't dismiss
myself
it.
to look
Don't try to
closer,
rationalize it away.
because
And whatever you
strewn
do,
amidst
don't
the
let it get
organic
close,
debris
because once
was
it starts
something
following
else.
I don't think it ever stops.
Something
And I'm
jarringly
terrified to
out
find
of
out what happens
place
when it
in the
finally
midst
catches up.
of nature's chaotic tapestry. There, tangled up with the gory remnants, were a handful of canine
The first night I heard the
teeth,
hammering, I dismissed it
unnaturally
as a neighbor's
sharp
late-night
and
DIY
gleaming.
project. By the third
And
week,
not just any
I realized
teeth,
something
but
far more
metal
sinister
ones,
was happening in the apartment below mine.
intricately crafted dentures,
As I sit surrounded by
complete
photographs of
with
myself I never
tiny,
took, I
vicious-looking
wonder if I'll
hooks.
make it out of this building alive.
The
It
discovery
all
of the
started when I moved
grisly
into my first
sack
apartment after
filled
college.
with bones,
The place was a
decaying
steal,
flesh,
a cozy one-bedroom in
and
a
those
decent part of town
strange
for way below
metallic
market rate.
teeth marked a
I should have known
turning
it was too
point
good to
in
be
our
true,
desperate
but I was too
hunt.
excited about my newfound independence
As
to question my good
unsettling
fortune.
as the
The
find
first few days
was,
were blissful.
it
I
also
arranged and
represented
rearranged
our
my meager
first real
belongings,
lead.
reveling in the fact that every decision,
Tangible evidence
from where
of
to
the
put the couch to
creature's
what time to go to bed,
unnatural
was
cunning
entirely
and
my own.
cruelty.
I even met a few neighbors,
With grim
mostly other young
determination,
professionals like
we
myself,
bagged the
drawn in by the
macabre
suspiciously
bundle
low rent.
and brought
Then
it
came
back
that
to
first night of
base
hammering.
camp for
It started
closer
around 10 p.m.,
analysis.
just as I was getting ready for bed.
As we
A
searched,
steady, rhythmic thumping
I
coming
couldn't
from the
shake the
apartment directly
sense
below
that
mine.
we were still
I
playing
groaned,
catch-up,
pulling my pillow over my head.
reacting to the
Probably just someone
creature's
hanging pictures or
sadistic
assembling furniture, I
games,
told myself.
rather
No big
than
deal.
actively
But the
pursuing
noise didn't
it.
stop. It went
We
on for
needed
hours,
to get
well
ahead
past
of the
midnight.
killer,
When my alarm
predict
went off the
its
next morning,
move,
I felt like I'd barely
or
slept at
more
all.
innocence would
Over breakfast,
surely
I
pay
debated
the
whether to say
price.
something to the building manager. But I didn't
Gathered
want to be that
around
person,
a
you know.
makeshift
The annoying
examination
lieutenant who complains
table,
about every little thing.
we gingerly
So I kept
picked
quiet,
through the
hoping it
sack's
was a one-time
contents,
occurrence. It wasn't.
fighting
Every
down
night, like
nausea
clockwork,
at the
the
sights
hammering would
and
start around 10
smells
p.m.
of
and continue
decay.
until the early hours of the morning.
Horatio,
Sometimes it was that
his
steady
face a
thudding,
stoic
other times it was
mask,
more erratic,
even
like someone
as
was
his
frantically
hands
trying to nail down
trembled
their entire
slightly,
floor. After a week of
used a
this,
set
I
of
was at my
long
wits' end.
tweezers
Dark
to
circles had taken up
extract
permanent
one of the
residence under
metal
my eyes,
fangs from
and my
the
work
putrid
performance was starting
tangle.
to slip from sheer exhaustion.
Look at these,
I finally worked up the
he
courage to
muttered,
knock on my downstairs neighbor's
holding
door.
the tooth up to the
I waited,
light.
hearing movement inside.
They're not just
but no one answered.
random hunks of
I tried
metal.
again the next day.
These were
And the day after that,
machined,
same
crafted
result.
with real
It
precision.
was like they were deliberately avoiding me.
He
Frustrated,
squinted,
I
turning
went
the
to the building
fang
manager,
this way and
a
that.
portly man named Frank,
And
who always
see
seemed to be
these
sweating
little
profusely.
hooks, these
Hammering,
serrated
he
edges.
said, frowning as he mopped
They're
his brow
not
with a
just for
handkerchief.
show.
That's odd. The
These
fella below
things
you
were
keeps to
made
himself
to
mostly.
rend and
Never had any
tear
complaints
flesh.
before. Well, I'm
An
complaining
uneasy
now, I said,
murmur
trying
rippled
to keep the
through the
irritation out
group
of my
at
voice.
Horatio's
Can you at
words.
least ask him to keep it down after
What
midnight?
manner of
Frank
being
nodded,
were
looking
we
uncomfortable.
dealing with?
I'll see
That
what I
it
can do.
could
But
fashion
nothing
such
changed.
twisted
If anything,
instruments
the
of
hammering
death.
got louder, more insistent.
The more we
And now,
learned,
I
the
started
less
noticing
sense
other
it all
strange
made.
things. Sometimes,
As
when
we
I came home from
continued
work,
our
I
grim
could swear things in my
inventory,
apartment had been
a
moved.
sudden thought
Nothing
struck
major.
me like a
A book slightly out
thunderbolt.
of place, a mug on a
The
different shelf,
teeth, I said
but enough to make me
slowly,
feel uneasy.
my voice sounding
Then there were the
strange
noises.
and distant
Not
to
just
my
the
own
hammering
ears.
anymore, but scratching
The
sounds,
tears
like
and
something
cuts
being
on
dragged
the
across
bodies.
the floor. And
What
once I could have sworn I heard
What
whispering
if this
coming from my
thing is
closet.
collecting
But when I threw the
trophies,
door open, heart pounding,
souvenirs
there
of
was
each
nothing there.
kill to
I
add
started
to
spending
its
less and less
arsenal?
time in my apartment. I'd stay late at
Silence
work,
descended
then
as
crash on
the
friends'
others
couches as
turned
often
to
as I could
stare
without
at me,
overstaying my welcome.
expressions
But I
ranging
couldn't avoid
from
my home
shock
forever.
to
One
queasy
night,
understanding.
about 3 weeks after the hammering first started,
It was a
I
sickening
came home late from a
notion,
dinner with coworkers.
but one
As
that
I
fit
approached my
with
door,
everything
I
we'd
noticed
seen
something
so
strange.
far.
A small envelope had been
The
slid
creature
underneath,
wasn't
the corner just
killing
peeking out
for
into the hallway.
food or territory.
My hand shook as I picked it up.
It was
There was no name,
deriving
no return
some
address,
kind of
just a
twisted
plain white
pleasure
envelope,
from the
slightly
act,
bulky, as if something other than paper
savoring
was
each
inside.
gory
I should have thrown
detail.
it away, should have called
We
the police, or at least
redoubled our
Frank,
efforts,
but curiosity got the better of
scouring
me.
the bag
Inside the
for any
envelope was a single
clues to the
Polaroid photo.
creature's
As
whereabouts
soon as
or
I saw
hunting
it,
patterns.
my blood ran cold.
Amidst the
was a
grisly
picture of me,
debris, we
sleeping in
found
my bed.
scraps of fabric
I
and
dropped the
leather,
photo like it had burned me,
bits
my
of
mind
what
reeling.
looked like primitive
Someone had been in
jewelry,
my apartment.
even a
Someone had
few
watched me
slivers
sleep.
of bone
The
that
violation made me
seemed
feel sick
too
to my stomach.
precisely
I don't know
cut
how
to
long
be
I stood
mere
there,
animal
frozen in the hallway.
remains.
But eventually, survival
Slowly,
instincts kicked in.
painstakingly,
I
we
needed to get out
began
of there.
to assemble a
I
profile
burst
of
into
our
my apartment,
quarry.
grabbing a duffel bag and
It
shoving
was
clothes
smart,
into it haphazardly.
strong, and
As I moved around
utterly
the small
ruthless.
space, I became
It
acutely
had
aware
a
of
sick
how exposed I was.
fascination with
The
trophies
window that I used to
and a
love for its view of
talent
the
for
city now felt like a
weaponizing
giant
its
eye,
kills.
watching my every move.
Most
Just as
chillingly
I was
of
about to
all,
leave, the
it
hammering
seemed
started
to
again.
possess
But
a
this time,
near-human
it wasn't
level
coming
of
from below.
cunning,
It was coming
letting
from
it
inside my
evade
walls.
our efforts
I bolted
while
for the door,
continuing
but
its
as my hand touched
rampage
the knob,
unchecked.
the lights went out.
But for
Not just
all
in my
our grim
apartment, but in the entire
discoveries,
building.
we were
I heard
still
doors
no
opening in the
closer
hallway,
to actually
confused
confronting
voices
the
asking
creature.
what was going on.
It was
In the
out
sudden
there
silence,
somewhere,
I heard
lurking
something
in
else.
the shadows,
A soft,
while
scratching
we
sound,
fumbled
like
in the
nails
dark,
on wood.
always
It
two
was coming
steps
from inside my
behind.
closet. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it
Frustration
might
and
burst out
fear
of my chest.
mingled,
Slowly,
coiling in my
dreading
gut
what I might
like
see,
serpents.
I turned toward the closet door.
How could we hope
It was
to
opening.
outwit a
Just a crack,
monster
but it
that
was
seemed
definitely
to
moving.
anticipate our
I
every
didn't
move,
wait to see what emerged. I yanked my door
as
open
if
and
in
ran, leaving
answer to
everything
my
behind.
unspoken
I spent that
question.
night in a 24-hour
A sudden
diner, jumping
commotion
at every
erupted
sound,
from
my
the
mind
forest's
conjuring terrifying
edge.
scenarios.
Shouts of
When dawn
alarm
broke,
and the
I steeled
staccato
myself to go
crack
back.
of
I needed
gunfire
answers.
shattered
This
the
time,
tense
when I
quiet.
knocked on my downstairs neighbor's door,
Exchanging
it
a
opened.
split-second
A young man
glance of
stood there,
dread,
looking perfectly normal
Horatio
in
and
jeans
I
and a
grabbed
t-shirt.
our weapons
his
and
eyes,
sprinted
there was
toward
something
the
off about them.
chaos.
Too wide,
The rest
too
of the
intense.
search party
Can I help
close
you?
on our
He
heels.
asked, his voice eerily calm.
We emerged
I
into a
opened my
scene
mouth,
of
but no words came
pandemonium.
out. What could
Two
I
of
say?
our team,
Hey,
their
have you been
faces
stalking me and
ashen
taking
and
pictures while I
eyes
sleep?
wild with terror,
He tilted his head, studying me.
stood back to back at
You're
the
her, aren't
center
you?
of a
The
small
one from
clearing,
upstairs.
guns
I've been waiting for
trained
you to
on
come
the
down.
trees.
A chill ran down my
At their
spine.
feet lay the
What do you want from
mangled
me?
remains
I
of a
managed to
third
croak out.
figure,
His
blood
face split into a wide
staining
grin,
the leaf
too wide
littered
to be natural.
crimson.
Want?
It came out
Oh,
of
I don't want
nowhere.
anything. I
One
just
of
need you
the
to see.
survivors babbled,
Before I could react,
his voice
he grabbed my
high
arm and
and
pulled me
thready
inside.
with shock.
The door slammed shut behind us.
Just
What I saw
snatched
inside that
Debs
apartment will
and
haunt me for
started
the rest of my
ripping
life.
into her.
Every
We
inch of
tried
wall
to
space
shoot
was
it,
covered
but
in
it
photos.
was so damn
Photos
fast.
of me walking to
He
work,
trailed off,
me at the grocery store,
shoulders
me
shaking
in my
with
apartment.
silent sobs.
Some were taken from impossible angles,
I
as
approached
if the
the
photographer
body,
had been hanging from the
steeling
ceiling.
myself
But
for
the
the
ceiling,
all too
oh God,
familiar
the ceiling.
carnage.
It was a giant
Deborah
collage of my
Schwartz
face.
had been a
Hundreds,
relative
maybe thousands
newcomer
of photos,
to our
all
group,
cut out and pieced
a
together
tough
like some
and
demented jigsaw
level-headed
puzzle.
farmer who'd
In the center
volunteered
was a
to help
life-sized photo
without
of me sleeping,
hesitation.
the same one from the envelope.
Now she was just
tried to scream,
one
but no
more
sound came out.
life, snuffed
The man,
out
if he was
by
even
the
human, still had a
creature's
grip on my arm.
insatiable
His skin felt
bloodlust.
wrong, too smooth, almost
But
plastic.
even as grief and
Do you see
fury
now?
coursed
He
through
whispered,
me,
his breath hot
I
on my ear.
forced myself
Do you
to
understand?
focus,
You're everywhere.
examining the
You're
scene
everything.
with a tracker's
You're us.
eye.
I
The
don't
creature
remember how
had
I
been
got away.
sloppy this
My
time,
next clear memory is
leaving
of running
clear
down the street,
prints in the
barefoot
soft
and
earth
sobbing.
and
I
paint
flagged down a
spatter
police car,
swaths of
babbling about
crimson
stalkers
to
and
mark
photos
its
and hammering.
passage.
They investigated, of course,
At last,
but when
we
they
had
went
a
to the
trail
apartment,
to follow.
it was empty. No photos,
With renewed
no hammers,
urgency,
no creepy neighbor.
we
just
organized
a normal,
into a
slightly
tight
dusty
formation and set
Frank
off in
swore up and
pursuit.
down that no one had been living there for
Weapons at
months.
the ready.
The police clearly thought I was
This
having some kind of
time we
breakdown.
swore
Maybe I
the
was.
creature
I
wouldn't
moved out
slip
that day,
away.
crashing with a friend until I
This
could find a
time,
new place.
we'd end
I
its
changed my
reign
phone
of
number,
terror
my
once
email,
and for all,
even dyed my hair,
or die
anything to
trying.
feel safe again. But
The
I can't
beast
shake the
had
feeling that it's not over.
underestimated us,
Sometimes,
revealed its
I
hand
swear
too
I can hear
soon.
hammering in the distance.
Now,
And just
we
yesterday,
would make it
I found a
pay
plain white
dearly
envelope
for
on my
every
new
life
doorstep.
it had stolen.
I didn't open it.
As
not
we
sure I wanna know
moved
what's
deeper
inside.
into the
But
forest,
as I sit here writing this, I
following
can't help
the
but wonder,
grim spoor,
what if he was right?
a palpable
am
sense
everywhere?
of tension
What if I am
crackled in the air.
them? The hammering is getting
Muscles
louder now.
tensed,
I think it's time for me to run again.
strained for any hint of movement or sound that might betray the creature's presence. We all knew the risks, understood the stakes,
The splash of our midnight
but
swim
there
was
could
drowned
be
out by
no
the thunderous
turning
pounding of my
back
heart when I
now.
saw the message scrawled in
Not
blood.
with justice
Someone
so
or
close
something
at hand.
had been watching us, and now they wanted us
Step
to
by
know it.
cautious
It was
step,
supposed to be a
we
perfect summer night.
tracked the
My
creature
girlfriend
to a
Lena and I
small,
had been cooped up studying
stagnant
for finals
pond.
all week.
The
And with the
water's
heat wave that
surface
had settled
choked
over the
with
city,
slimy
we were desperate for
algae
some relief.
and rotting
The idea of a late
vegetation.
night dip in my backyard pool
There, the
seemed like the
trail
perfect way to
seemed to
unwind.
vanish,
Race you to the
swallowed
deep
up
end,
by the murky
Lena called out,
depths.
already halfway across the
A
patio
sense
before I
of
could even respond.
uncertainty
I
rippled
chuckled,
through the group.
admiring the way the moonlight
Had
glinted
we
off her wet
lost
skin
the
as she
scent?
dove in with barely a
Were
ripple.
we walking
I followed
into
suit,
an ambush?
the cool water a blessed
But
relief against my
before
skin.
we could decide on
splashed
our
and
next
played,
move,
our laughter
a
echoing in the still night air.
blood-freezing
It
roar
felt like we were in our
shattered
own
the
little world,
uneasy
far
quiet.
removed from the stress of exams and
Whirling
the
toward
oppressive
the
heat of the day.
sound, we
That's when we
found
heard it.
ourselves face
A
to
rustling
face
sound,
with the
coming from beyond the
embodiment of
fence
our
that separated my
darkest
yard from the
nightmares.
neighbors. It was
The
brief,
creature
so
loomed
quick I almost thought
before
I'd
us,
imagined it.
a
But Lena's wide
towering
eyes told me she'd heard
patchwork
it
of
too.
fur,
Probably just a
scales,
raccoon, I
and
said,
glistening
trying to sound more
muscle.
confident than I felt.
Its
They're
eyes
always getting
alight
into Mrs.
with
Johnson's
a
trash
feral,
cans.
predatory
Lena nodded,
intelligence.
but I could see the unease in her eyes.
Time seemed to
Maybe we
slow
should head
to a
in, she
crawl as
suggested,
the beast
her voice
charged.
barely above a whisper.
Wicked
I was
metal
about to agree when
claws
another sound reached
flashing
us.
in the dappled
This one was
sunlight.
different. A soft scraping,
Gunfire
like nails on
erupted.
wood. It was coming
Bullets
from the other side of
pinging
the
off
fence.
the creature's
Right where
hide
we
like
heard the rustling.
hailstones.
My blood ran cold.
It barely
This was no
slowed,
raccoon.
plowing into our ranks
Inside,
like a juggernaut.
I hissed,
Screams
already
rent
moving
the
towards
air
the pool ladder.
of
Lena
pain
didn't need
and
to be told
rage
twice.
and primal
We scrambled out
terror
of the pool,
intermingled.
grabbing our towels and
I
practically running to the
emptied
back
my
door.
own weapon at
Once
the
inside, we
monster,
stood
but it
dripping on the
shrugged
kitchen
off
tile,
the hits,
our hearts
intent
racing.
on its
What do you
grisly
think that
work.
was? Lena asked.
It
Her voice
moved
shaky.
like
I shook
quicksilver,
my head,
a
trying to calm my
whirlwind of
nerves.
fang and
I
claw
don't know.
ripping through
Probably nothing.
flesh and bone
Just some
like
animal.
paper.
But even as I
In
said
the
it,
chaos,
I knew I didn't
I
believe
lost sight of
There had been something
Horatio,
deliberate about
of
those
the
sounds.
others.
it. Something that
The
sent shivers
world
down my spine
narrowed to
despite
the
the warm night
creature's
air. We
snarling
decided to
visage,
try and shake it off.
its fetid
Convincing
breath
ourselves we were just
hot
being
on my
paranoid.
face
We
as
made
it
some
bore
popcorn,
down
put on a
upon
movie,
me.
and curled up on the couch.
I
By the
lashed
time the
out with
credits
the
rolled,
butt of my
the incident by
rifle,
the pool seemed like a
the
distant
blow
memory.
connecting with a
I should probably
sickening
head home,
crack.
Lena said,
But the
stifling
beast
a yawn.
barely staggered,
It's late.
a taloned
I walked her
hand
to the door,
lashing out to
Giving her
send
a
me
quick kiss
sprawling.
goodbye. As she drove
Stunned,
away, I
tasting
couldn't shake
blood,
the feeling that I should have
I
insisted
could
she
only
stay the
watch
night.
helplessly
But
as
that
the
was silly,
creature
right?
closed
Nothing
in
had
for
actually
the
happened.
kill.
I locked up and
Its
headed to bed,
jaws
telling
gaped
myself I was being
wide,
ridiculous.
metal
But sleep didn't
fangs
come easily.
dripping crimson,
Every creak of the house,
ready
every
to
rustle
tear
of
out
leaves
my
outside my
throat.
window had me on edge.
I braced
When I
myself
finally
for
drifted
the
off,
agony,
my dreams were
for
filled
the
with shadowy
yawning
figures and
void of
scraping
oblivion.
sounds.
But
next
the
morning,
killing
I
blow
woke to the
never
sun streaming
came.
through my window.
Instead,
groggy,
a
but
thunderous
relieved.
report split
In
the
the light
air,
of day,
and the
last night's
creature
fears seemed
jerked
foolish.
as if struck by
I
an
stretched,
invisible
deciding
fist.
a morning swim would be the perfect way to start
Dark,
the day.
viscous
I padded
blood
downstairs and out
sprayed
onto the
from
patio,
a gaping
the concrete
wound
already
in its
warm
chest,
under my bare feet.
painting
I
the
was halfway to
leaves
the pool
with
when I saw
gore.
it. and the world seemed to tilt on its axis.
Roaring
There,
in
on the white
pain
concrete of
and
the pool
fury,
deck, was a message,
as a
written
second
in what
shot
looked
took
horribly
it
like
in
blood.
the knee,
"We see you."
sending it
stomach
crashing to
lurched.
the forest floor.
This couldn't be real.
Through
It had to
the
be a prank,
ringing in
a
my
sick joke.
ears,
But as I stumbled
dimly
closer,
heard
the metallic scent
Horatio's
hit me,
voice,
and I
raw with
real.
exhaustion and grim
this
triumph.
was blood.
Silver
shaking hands,
bullets, you
I pulled out my
ugly
phone and called
bastard.
Lena. "You need
He
to come over,"
stepped into
I said,
view,
as soon
his
as she answered.
trusty shotgun
Now,
leveled at
She
the
must have heard the
creature's
panic in my
prone
voice
form.
because she didn't ask questions.
Granddaddy
Just said she'd be
always
right
said
over.
they put down
While I
anything
waited,
unnatural.
I paced the kitchen,
Reckon
alternating
he was
between
right
staring out
after
at the
all.
horrifying message and checking every lock in the house.
Slowly,
When Lena
painfully,
arrived, her face went pale
I
as I showed her
dragged
the pool
myself
deck.
to my
"Oh my
feet,
God," she whispered.
staring down at
"We
the
have to call the
fallen
police."
monster.
I nodded, already dialing.
Even now, its
The
eyes
next few hours
burned
were a
with
blur of
hate,
police questions
with
and crime
a
scene
mad,
tape. They took
defiant
samples of the blood,
bloodlust.
dusted for
It
fingerprints,
thrashed
asked
and
us over and
snapped,
over if we'd seen or heard
trying to
anything
lunge
suspicious.
for us with
"Just
its
some
last
rustling,"
strength.
I said,
But
feeling helpless.
Horatio's
We thought
aim
it was an
held
animal.
true.
The police were
One
sympathetic but
final
not
shot
particularly
pulped
helpful.
its skull,
With no signs of forced
stilling it
entry and no clear
forever in
threat,
a welter
there wasn't
of
much they could
brain
do.
matter and
They
bone.
advised us to stay vigilant,
As the
install some
echoes
security
of
cameras,
gunfire
and call
faded,
immediately if anything else
an
happened.
eerie stillness
After they left,
settled
Lena
over
and
the
I sat at my
forest.
kitchen table,
The
both
search
of us too
party
shaken to speak.
slowly regrouped,
The message had been cleaned away,
expressions
but I could still see it every
shell-shocked,
time I closed my eyes.
haunted by the
"What do we do
friends
now?"
and
Lena
comrades
finally
we'd
asked,
lost.
her voice small.
Over
I
half
reached
our
across the
number
table,
had been
taking her hand in
slaughtered,
mine. "We'll
rent
figure it out.
and mangled
Maybe-
by the
Maybe it
creature's
was just a one-time
ferocity.
thing, a sick prank."
But in the end,
But even as I said it,
we'd
I knew
prevailed.
neither of us believed it.
The beast had
Whatever
been
this was,
vanquished,
It felt far from over.
though the price
The next few days
had
were
been
tense.
dear indeed.
I installed security cameras,
With
changed
heavy
all the
hearts,
locks,
we
even
built a
considered getting a
massive
dog.
pyre,
Lena stayed over. Neither of us
consigning
wanting
the
to be alone.
creature's corpse
We jumped at
to
every
the
sound,
hungry flames.
scrutinized every shadow. Sleep
We
became a luxury we
gathered
could
what
barely afford.
remains we
It was on
could
the
of our
third night that it
fallen,
happened again.
bearing
We were
them
both
back
finally
to
asleep when a loud crash
civilization
jolted us
and the
awake.
grieving
It
families
came from
they'd
downstairs,
left
the
behind.
sound of breaking glass.
For
My
some,
heart
there
in my
was
throat.
closure,
I grabbed
a
the
sense
baseball
of
bat I started
justice,
keeping by the bed and
however
crept towards the
bitter
stairs,
in the
Lena
monster's
right behind me.
defeat.
The house was
But
dark
for
and
others,
silent, but I
nothing,
could feel a presence,
no
a
vengeance
weight
or
in the air that
victory
hadn't been there before.
could balm the
As we reached the
aching
bottom of the
void
stairs,
of
I saw it.
loss.
The living room window was
The
shattered.
days that
Glass glittering on
followed
the
the
carpet.
creature's
And there,
demise
pinned to the
passed
curtain
in
with
a
what looked like
bleak,
a hunting knife,
exhausted
was a piece of
blur.
paper. With
The
trembling
park
hands,
was
I
closed
pulled the knife free and
indefinitely.
unfolded the note.
Authorities
The message,
and
again
news
in what looked
crews
like blood,
swarming
made
the
my blood run
bloody
cold.
crime scenes
"You can't
like
hide from us."
ants.
Lena let out a choked
Questions
sob beside
flew
me.
thick
I
and
pulled her
fast
close, my mind
about
racing.
the monster's
This couldn't
origins,
go on.
the
needed
extent
help.
of the carnage,
Real help.
how such
beyond
a
what the
thing
local
could
police
have
could
gone
provide.
unchecked
That's
for
when I
so
remembered
long.
my uncle, a retired
But
detective who
answers
now
were
worked as a private
scarce,
investigator.
and cold
If anyone
comfort
could
to
help
those
us,
of us
it would
left
be him.
behind to pick up the
The
pieces.
next morning, after another sleepless
Trauma
night and
ran
another round
deep
of useless
among the
police questions,
survivors,
I called
myself included.
to his credit,
Sleep
he
was
didn't question
elusive,
the urgency in my voice.
haunted by
Just said
visions
he'd be
of
there by
claw
nightfall.
and fang,
Uncle Mike
of
arrived
friends
just as the
and
sun was setting,
comrades torn
his weathered face
asunder.
grim as I filled him in on what
We'd
had been
all
happening.
seen things,
He listened without interrupting,
endured
his eyes
horrors
sharp
that
and
would
calculating.
forever
"You got
scar our
yourself in quite a
psyches.
situation, kiddo," he
But
said
we
when I
clung
finished.
to each other,
"But don't worry, we'll figure
finding
this
solace in
Over the
shared
next few
grief
days,
and
Uncle
grim
Mike became our shadow.
solidarity.
He analyzed the security footage,
As the
interviewed
official
neighbors, and set up
investigation
additional surveillance
unfolded,
equipment.
troubling
He even brought in
details
some of his old
began
police
to
buddies to keep an
emerge.
eye on the house. For a
The
while, it
creature,
seemed to work.
while
Days passed
undoubtedly
without incident,
unnatural,
and I started to hope
showed
that
signs
maybe,
of tampering,
maybe,
of
it was
deliberate
over.
genetic
But then came the night
manipulation.
that changed everything.
Its
past
bizarre
midnight.
anatomy, its
Lena and I were
uncanny
asleep.
intelligence,
Uncle Mike was monitoring
these
the
were
security
not
feeds
the
downstairs.
products of mere
I woke to the sound of
evolution
Lena
or
screaming.
mutation.
I bolted upright, my heart pounding.
Something, or
Lena was sitting
someone
up in bed,
had
her eyes
created
wide with
this
terror,
abomination,
pointing at the bedroom window.
unleashed it upon an
written in glowing
unsuspecting
paint that
world.
seemed to drip down the glass,
But who
was
would
another
do
message.
such a thing?
Time's up.
And to what
Before
end?
I could react, the lights in the room flickered
The
and died.
answers
In
remained
the sudden darkness, I heard a
frustratingly
sound that made my
elusive,
blood run cold.
buried
The
beneath
soft click of our
layers
bedroom
of
door opening.
secrecy and misdirection.
"Uncle Mike," I called out,
Shadowy
my voice trembling.
corporations,
But the figure that stepped into the room
rogue
was not my
scientists,
uncle. It was tall,
even whispered
unnaturally
rumors
so,
of
its
government
limbs too long and
experiments
jointed in
gone
all the wrong
awry.
places.
All
faint
were
moonlight
floated
streaming
as
through the window,
possible
I could see its
explanations,
face, or
but
rather,
none
the
could
lack
be
of one.
definitively
Where features
proven.
should have been, there was only smooth,
Despite the
pale
lingering
skin.
questions,
Lena's
life
scream caught in her
slowly
throat as the
began
thing
to
tilted its
resume
head,
its normal
regarding us with an
rhythms.
eyeless gaze.
The park
Then,
reopened,
slowly,
though
deliberately,
attendance
it
was
raised a long finger hand and
understandably
pointed at us.
sparse.
That's when I heard
Memorials were
it, a
held,
voice, but not from the
tributes
creature.
paid to the
It seemed
fallen,
to come from everywhere and nowhere at once,
slowly,
filling the room with its chilling
painfully,
whisper. We
we
warned you.
began to heal,
Now, you're ours.
to rebuild
The last
from
thing I
the
remember
ashes of
is a blinding
tragedy.
flash of light, and then
But even
nothing.
as the scars
I don't know where we are
started
now.
to fade,
Lena and I are together.
I couldn't
But this
shake
place,
the nagging
It's
sense
not like anywhere
of
I've ever
unease.
seen.
The
laws of physics
conviction
don't
that
seem to
we
apply
hadn't
here.
seen the last
Sometimes I
of
think
the
I see familiar
horrors
things.
birthed
My
in
backyard
those
pool, Lena's
blood-soaked
car,
woods.
my uncle's worried face,
Call it
but they flicker and
instinct,
change like mirages.
paranoia,
And always,
or the hard-won
feel
wisdom
them
of a
watching.
man who stared
The eyeless
down
ones.
true evil
The ones who took
and
us.
lived to tell the
I don't know if
tale.
anyone will ever read this,
But
I don't
I
even know how
knew
I'm writing it or
deep
where these
in my
words will end up.
bones
but if you're out
that
there,
the
if you're
creature
reading
had
this,
been just
please,
the beginning,
be careful.
a
Listen to the
harbinger of
rustling in the
darker
night.
things to
Pay
come.
attention to the shadows that move when
And
they
so
shouldn't.
I
And whatever you do,
resolved to
don't
be
ignore the
ready,
warnings.
to
Because they're watching.
stand
They're always
watch
watching.
against the
And once they've
gathering
set their sights on
darkness.
you, there's no escape.
I poured myself into my work, honing my skills and knowledge, determined never again to be caught off guard.
The first time I saw Mr. Peterson
I
dancing in his yard at
forged
3 a.m., I
closer
thought he was
ties
drunk.
with
By the
Horatio
third time,
and the
I
other
realized something
survivors,
far more sinister was
knowing
at play.
that in the battles
I'm
ahead,
not sure if any of us in this
we
neighborhood are
would
truly
need all
human
the
anymore.
allies we
I've
could
lived next door
muster.
to the Petersons for nearly a decade.
For the threat we
They were the
faced
quintessential
was no
elderly
mere
couple.
animal
He was a
or
retired
earthly
accountant, she a
predator,
former school teacher.
but
They kept their
something
lawn
far
immaculate,
more
hosted bridge
insidious,
nights on Thursdays,
a
and always
rot
had a
at the
kind word for
very
everyone.
heart of the world,
Normal, boring,
a cancer
even.
upon the
That all
soul
changed
of
the night
all
Mrs.
that
Peterson
lived
died.
and
It
breathed.
was a quiet passing,
And if
peaceful
we
in her sleep.
faltered, if we
The
let
neighborhood
our
rallied
guard
around Mr.
down
Peterson,
even for a
bringing
moment,
casseroles and offering
it would
condolences.
surely
He seemed to be
consume us
handling it
all,
well, all things
plunging
considered.
the earth
bit
into
quiet,
an
perhaps,
abyss of blood
But that
and
was to be
madness,
expected.
from which
About a month
there
after
could
the
be
funeral,
no return.
I woke up in the middle of the night,
but
parched.
we would not
As
falter.
I shuffled to the kitchen for a
We
glass
could
of water,
not.
movement in the Petersons'
For
yard
in
caught
the
my
end,
eye. Curious,
it fell
I
to
peered
us,
out the window.
the wounded
There was Mr.
and
Peterson
weary
in his
few,
bathrobe and slippers,
to
dancing in the
stand
moonlight.
against the
But it
rising
wasn't any
tide
dance
of
I'd ever seen
chaos,
before.
to
His
be the
movements were
thin
jerky,
line of
almost
light,
spasmodic,
holding
his
back
arms and
the
legs bending
encroaching
at impossible
void.
angles, his head
It
lolled
was
on
a
his neck
heavy
as if it
burden,
might snap off at any
a
moment.
lonely road
I stood
fraught
there,
with peril
transfixed,
and
my thirst
sacrifice.
forgotten. Part of me wanted to look
But
away,
it was a
but I
duty
couldn't
we
tear my eyes from
shouldered
the grotesque
gladly,
spectacle.
for
After
the
what seemed
sake
like
of
hours,
all
but was
those
probably only
we'd
minutes,
lost,
Mr. Peterson suddenly
and all
stopped.
those yet
His head
to
snapped
come.
up, and for a heart-stopping moment,
As I
could have
stood
sworn he
at
was
the
looking right
edge
at me.
of the forest,
I ducked away from the window, my
watching
heart
the
pounding.
sun
When I
dip
finally
below
worked up
the
the courage to look
horizon
again,
in a blaze
the yard
of
was
scarlet and gold.
The next morning, I saw
I
Mr.
couldn't
Peterson
help
getting
but
his mail.
feel a twinge
He
of
waved and
something
smiled, same as
almost
always.
like
I wanted to ask about
anticipation
what I'd seen, but
amid
how do
the
you broach a subject like
ever-present
that?
dread.
Hey neighbor, saw
For
you doing some
better
freaky
or
dancing
worse,
last night.
My
Everything
life
okay?
had been
Yeah,
forever
right.
changed.
I convinced myself I
My
must have been half
purpose
asleep, that it was
reforged
just a
in
bizarre
the
dream brought on
crucible
by
of
stress and
nightmare.
late-night snacking. But
Whatever
deep down,
the future
I knew what I'd
held,
seen was real. A
whatever
week later,
fresh
it happened
horrors
again.
lurked in the
This time,
shadows,
I was ready.
I would
I
be
set up my
there
phone to
meet
record through the
them
window,
head on,
determined to have
steel
proof.
in my
But when I
hand
played back the
and
video the
fire
next morning,
in my heart.
all I saw was an empty yard.
For in a
Mr.
world
Peterson
where
was nowhere to be
monsters
seen,
walked
even
and
though
nightmares
I
took
knew
flesh,
he had been there.
there could be
That's when
no
the fear
other
really
choice.
set in. What was happening?
No other path
Was I losing
but
my
that
mind?
of the warrior,
I started
the
watching more
guardian
closely.
at the gates
During the
of
day,
the abyss.
Mr. Peterson seemed normal
So
enough,
I turned my
if a bit more
back on the
energetic than usual
gathering
for a man
dark,
his age.
striding into the
oddities.
uncertain
Sometimes
future
his movements
with
were too
grim
smooth,
resolve.
too fluid for his arthritic
Come
joints.
what may,
Other times,
I would
I'd
fight
catch him staring
and
blankly into
bleed
space,
and
completely
endure.
unresponsive until
For
someone
the
spoke to him
fallen,
directly.
for the
And
innocent,
then there were the noises.
for
Late
the
at night,
very
when
soul
the neighborhood was
of
quiet,
the world we
I'd hear sounds
cherish.
coming from his house.
And
Not
may
the usual
God have
creaks and
mercy
groans of an old
on
building
any
settling,
beast
but something
or
else.
abomination
Something that sounded
that
almost
dared
like
stand in
chittering.
my way.
I tried talking to other neighbors, casually bringing up Mr. Peterson in conversation. Most just commented on how well he was coping with his wife's death. But Mrs. Abernathy, the neighborhood gossip,
My
leaned in
name
close
is
and whispered,
Rodrigo
"Have you noticed
Alejandro
anything
Morales,
strange about him lately?"
and this all
My heart
happened
raced.
back in
"What do you mean?"
1977
She glanced
when
around,
I was
as if afraid of
27
being
years
overheard.
old.
I saw
I
him in
was
his garden
living
the
a
other
pretty
day.
ordinary
He was pulling
life
weeds,
as a mechanic in a
his
small,
arms,
forgotten town
too
in
long.
eastern Oregon.
And when he turned to wave at me,
You
his
know
neck,
the kind of
it
place.
twisted further than any
Just
human
a
neck should.
smattering of
I
worn
felt a chill run
houses,
down my spine.
a couple
So I
of
wasn't the
dimly
only one
lit
who had noticed.
watering holes,
Things escalated
and one
quickly after
grocer
that.
that
More neighbors
moonlighted
reported
as
odd
the
sightings.
only gas station
Mr.
for
Peterson
miles.
walking on the roof in the middle of the night.
It wasn't
Mr.
much,
Peterson's shadow
but
moving
it was
independently
enough
of his
for
body.
the few hundred
Mr.
folks
Peterson's
that
eyes
called it
reflecting light
home.
like a cat's. And always,
Me, I
the dancing.
mostly kept to
It became a
myself,
nightly occurrence.
tinkering with
As soon
ancient
as the clock struck
cars
3,
for
Mr.
those
Peterson
who
would emerge
couldn't
from his house
afford
and begin his
anything
otherworldly
better, but
gyrations.
still needed
More and more
some
neighbors
way
witnessed
to
it,
get from
but like my
point A
video,
to point
no one
B.
could capture proof.
When I
Cameras
wasn't
malfunctioned,
elbow deep
phones
in
died
an engine,
inexplicably. We tried
you
to
could
intervene.
usually
A
find
group
me
of us
out
went
in
to his
the
house
woods,
one afternoon,
enjoying
intending to
the
confront him,
solitude.
to offer help if he needed it.
There was this
But as soon
spot
as we
I
stepped
loved
onto his
about
porch,
10
A
miles
wave
out
of
of
dizziness
town,
washed over us.
up where
By
an
the time it
old
passed,
logging trail
We were back
snaked
in our
its
own
way
homes with
into
no
the
memory
mountains.
of how we got there. That's
It
when
was
people
my
started to
escape,
change.
I guess
It
you could
began
call
with
it,
Mrs. Abernathy.
a place
One day
I
she
could
was her
sit
usual
and
chatty
think,
self.
or cast a
next she was
line into the river
different.
in hopes of
Her
hooking a
movements became
trout for
jerky,
dinner.
her speech stilted,
The
and her
quiet
eyes,
never bothered
they
me
had the same
much.
blank look I'd seen
In
in
fact,
Mr. Peterson's.
I reveled in
Then
it.
it was the Johnson family across the
Growing
street.
up an only
Garcias
child
next door
to a
to them.
single mother,
One by one,
you learn
neighbors
to
were transforming
appreciate
into
your
something
own company real
else.
quick.
I barricaded myself
Mom
in my house,
did her best,
watching through the windows as my
working
once
long
normal suburban
hours at the
neighborhood descended
local
into
diner
madness.
to keep us afloat.
Every night at 3
So
a.m.,
I was used
more
to
and more
being
people
on
joined
my
Mr.
own.
Peterson in his dance.
I
Their
guess
bodies
that's
contorted
part
in
of the
ways that
reason
defied
I
anatomy.
never put
Their
down
faces
roots,
frozen in rictus
even
grins.
after she
I stopped
passed a few
sleeping,
years
stopped
back.
eating. I knew it was only a matter of
Bounced
time before they
around
came
for
for
a
me.
while doing
what could I
odd
do?
jobs
Who would
before I
believe me?
landed in this
Last night,
town
it
as their
finally happened.
resident grease
At
monkey.
exactly 3 a.m., there was
It
a knock at
wasn't
my
a
door.
bad life, just a
didn't
bit
answer,
lonely at times.
But it didn't matter. The door
But I
swung
had
open
my
on its
little
own,
cabin
and there
at
stood
the edge
Mr.
of
Peterson.
town, my
But it wasn't really
workshop,
him anymore.
and the
His body
vast
had elongated,
expanse of
his
nature
limbs
to
stretching
keep
to
me
impossible lengths.
occupied.
His skin was pale
For the
and
most
waxy,
part,
almost
that was
translucent,
enough.
and his face,
That
where his features should
particular
have been, there
September
was only
had
a
brought
smooth,
with
blank
it a
expanse of flesh.
welcome chill in
But
the
somehow,
air,
I knew he
the
was smiling.
kind that signals
Behind him,
summer's
I could
end
see the
and
others.
nature's
The
slow
entire neighborhood
descent into slumber,
transformed into these alien beings,
with the
swaying
leaves
gently
just
as if to
beginning
music I
their
couldn't hear.
yearly wistful
Mr.
sigh
Peterson,
from
or the
green
thing
to
that used to be
gold.
Mr. Peterson,
I couldn't
extended a
think
hand
of
to
a
me.
better time
His
to
fingers
head
were
up
too
to
long,
my
too
special
thin,
spot for
ending
a
in points
weekend
rather
of
than nails.
camping and
I knew if I took that
contemplation.
hand, I would join them.
So
I would become one
that
of them.
Friday,
Part of me
after
wanted to.
shutting up
Part
the
of me was
shop,
tired of being afraid
I
of being
threw
alone.
some
Wouldn't it
essentials
be easier
into
to
my
just give in?
beat-up Chevy.
But I couldn't.
A small
Some
tent,
last shred of
worn
humanity,
sleeping
of
bag,
individuality,
a few
rebelled
cans
against the
of
idea.
beans,
I ran.
and of course a
Somehow,
cooler full
I made
of
it
beer.
past them, out into the street.
The old
I ran and
logging
ran,
road was
not looking
rough
back,
going,
until I collapsed
more
from
of a
exhaustion.
suggestion
I woke
than
up in
an
this motel
actual
room,
route.
miles away from my
But
home.
my trusty
I don't know
truck
if I'm
had
safe here.
navigated
I don't know
far
if I'll ever be
worse
safe
in its
again.
day.
Because now I understand
About
the truth.
2
It's
miles
spreading.
in,
It's spreading.
the
Whatever
ruts
took over Mr.
became too
Peterson,
much
whatever
even
changed
for
my
its
neighbors,
tenacity.
it's not confined to our
So I
little
pulled
suburb
off,
anymore.
gathered
As I
my
write this,
gear,
I can
and
see
set
people
out
walking
on
past
foot.
my window. Their movements
The
are a little
hike
too
in
smooth.
was always
Their
half
smiles a
the
little too
fun,
wide.
really.
And in the distance,
The
I
way
swear
the
I can hear the faint sound
towering
of chittering.
evergreens
I don't know how long I
seemed
can
to
run.
whisper
I don't know if
their
there's anywhere left to
ancient
hide.
secrets.
All I know is that the world is
The
changing,
occasional
transforming into
darting
something
of a
inhuman.
startled deer,
And it all started with an old man
that
dancing in his yard at 3
indescribable,
a.m.
earthy,
If you're reading
crisp
this,
scent
if you're still
that
human,
only
be on your guard.
exists deep
Watch your neighbors
within a
closely.
forest's
And whatever
embrace.
you do, don't dance.
By the
Because once the
time I
music starts,
reached the small
once you join their
clearing by
grotesque
the
ballet,
river that
you may
I'd
never be
long
yourself
ago
again.
claimed as
As for
my
me,
own,
I'm not sure
my
how much
soul
longer I can resist.
already felt
Even
lighter.
now, I feel a
The
strange urge to
burdens
move,
of the work
to sway
week
to a rhythm I
slipping
can't
from
quite
my
hear.
shoulders
My
like a
joints ache with the need to
discarded
bend
coat.
in ways they shouldn't.
I
Maybe it won't be
busied
so bad,
myself
becoming
setting
one
up
of them.
my modest
Maybe-
camp,
No,
pitching the
I have to stay
tent
strong.
and building a
I have
small
to warn
fire
others.
pit
I have to.
with the precision of
you hear
familiar
that?
routine.
Is it 3 a.m. already?
As
think-
the sun began
it's
its
time to
lazy
dance.
arc toward the horizon, I settled in at the river's edge, casting my line into the glittering current.
I never
The
thought I'd be
trout
afraid of
were
my own neighbor.
biting,
But then again,
and
I
before
never
long
expected
I
to see
had a
Mrs.
few
Johnson standing
sizable
motionless in her
ones
yard
set
for 6
aside
hours
for
straight,
my supper.
either. It started on
With
a
the
Tuesday.
sun now just a
I remember
sliver
because I
of
had just gotten
orange
home from my weekly
peeking
yoga
over the
class,
mountain's
feeling
rugged
relaxed and
outline.
centered. As I pulled into
I
my driveway,
cleaned and
I
cooked
noticed
my
Mrs.
catch
Johnson
over
in her
the
front yard,
flickering
watering her
campfire.
prized rose bushes.
That
Nothing
first
unusual
night
there.
passed
She was out
in
tending to her
perfect
garden most
harmony.
days. I waved
The
as I got out of
dancing
my car, but she
firelight,
didn't respond.
the distant
was odd.
hooting of a hidden
Mrs. Johnson
owl,
was always quick with a
the
friendly hello,
burbling of the river
figured she
like
must not have seen
nature's
me.
lullaby.
so I called out, "Beautiful
Belly
evening,
full
isn't it,
and
Mrs.
mind
Johnson?"
at ease,
Still
I
nothing.
eventually
She just kept
retired to
watering
my
those roses,
tent,
her arm moving in
zipping
a rhythmic
myself
back and forth
into
motion.
the cozy
I shrugged it off and went inside
familiarity
to
of
start
my
dinner.
sleeping bag.
A few
Sleep
hours
found
later,
me
I was
quickly,
settling in for the night when I
wrapping
realized
me
I'd
in
left my
its
bedroom
heavy
window
blanket
open.
as the
As I went to close
forest's
it,
nocturnal
I glanced out at
symphony
Mrs. Johnson's
whispered
yard.
on.
To my
But
surprise,
it didn't
she was still
last.
there, in the
Some
exact same spot,
unmeasured time
watering those
later, a
roses.
sound pulled
The
me
streetlights
from the
cast an eerie
depths.
glow over her rigid
Something
form.
out of place
blinked
in the
hard,
typical
thinking my eyes were playing
nighttime
tricks on me.
chatter.
But no,
At first,
there she was,
I thought it
still
was
as a
just
statue
the
except for that
embers of
watering
my
arm.
dying fire.
a chill ran down my spine.
Random pops
Something
and
wasn't right.
hisses
I
as
considered
the
going over
wood
there, but it was late.
succumbed to
And
ash.
honestly, I was a little freaked out.
But as I
told myself
blinked
I'd
into
check on her
the
in the morning
darkness
and
of
went
my
to bed,
tent,
though sleep didn't come
I
easily.
realized
When my alarm
it
went
was
off at
more
6
than
a.m.,
that.
I rushed to the window.
A rustling,
Mrs. Johnson was gone,
like something
her yard empty in
slowly
the pale morning
moving
light.
through the underbrush
I breathed a
just
sigh of relief.
beyond the thin
Maybe I had
barrier of
imagined the
my
whole thing.
shelter.
But as I sipped my coffee and
heart
watched
quickened.
the neighborhood come to life,
A
doubt
sudden
gnawed at me.
awareness pulsing
decided to
through
pop
my
over and make
limbs
sure
as
everything
I
was okay.
strained to
I
locate
knocked on
the
Mrs.
source
Johnson's
of
door,
the disturbance.
my heart pounding a little harder than
It
it
was
should have.
moving.
After
that
a
much
moment,
I could tell.
she answered, looking
But the
perfectly normal
sound
in her
was
floral
off
house coat.
somehow.
"Good morning,
Not
dear,"
the typical
she said,
blundering
her
of
voice
a
as warm and
foraging
friendly as ever.
animal.
"What brings you by so
This
early?"
was quieter,
I
more
hesitated,
deliberate.
suddenly feeling
The
foolish.
caution of a predator on the hunt
just wanted
rather
to make
than
sure you were
prey
all right.
on the run.
I thought I saw you out in the
I
yard pretty late
slowly
last night.
reached for the flashlight
flicker of
beside my makeshift
something
pillow.
Passed across
Every
her face.
motion feeling too
It was
loud
gone so
in the
quickly I
charged
wasn't sure I'd seen it
silence.
at all.
Unzipping
you
the
know me,
tent flap
she laughed.
just enough to peer
Always
out,
fussing over those
I
roses.
swept the narrow
lost track of
beam
time.
over the immediate
I nodded,
area,
forcing a smile.
the dying coals
Well,
of
as
my
long as you're okay,
campfire
have a great
offering
day,
little
Mrs.
aid
Johnson.
in illumination.
As I turned to leave, I could have sworn I heard her mutter,
At first,
"Time is
there was
irrelevant now."
nothing.
But when I
Just
looked back,
the still
she was
forms
just
of
smiling and
trees
waving
and the
goodbye.
soft
I
gleam
tried
of the
to shake
river
off the weirdness
beyond.
as I went about my day.
But then,
But when I
a
got home from
flicker
work
of
that evening,
movement,
there was
a
Mrs. Johnson
shifting
again,
of shadow
standing
at
in
the
the exact
edge
same
of the
spot as the night before.
flashlight's reach,
This time,
near the
she
water's
wasn't
edge.
watering. She was just
I focused
standing
the
there,
beam,
facing the street,
trying to catch
arms
a
at her
better
sides.
glimpse.
I watched her for a full
But
5
whatever
minutes.
it
She
was
didn't move,
seemed to
not even a
dissolve
twitch.
back into
My
the
palms
night,
started to sweat. This
leaving
was beyond
only an
weird. It was downright
uneasy
creepy.
feeling in its
I
wake.
debated calling the police, but what
Heart
would I say?
still racing,
My elderly neighbor
I
is standing
sat
very
frozen,
still. They'd think I was
ears
crazy.
straining for
Instead, I
any
decided to
hint
investigate
of the
myself.
intruder.
I walked over, my
But
feet feeling
only the
heavier with each
normal
step.
sounds of the
Mrs.
slumbering
Johnson,
forest
I
reached
called out
me.
when I was about 10 feet away.
After
No
a
response.
few
I
long,
moved closer.
tense minutes,
Mrs.
I
Johnson,
convinced
are you okay?
myself it must have
Still
been
nothing.
a trick of exhaustion
I was right next to her
and
now,
firelight.
close enough to touch her.
Maybe
Her
a
eyes were open,
curious
staring
deer
straight
that
ahead.
had wandered
She wasn't
too
blinking.
close to the
My heart was racing
unfamiliar
now.
scent
I reached
of
out,
human,
my hand shaking, and touched her arm.
settling
It was
back
cold,
down.
not like a corpse,
I
but
tried to let the
wrong,
normalcy
like
of the
touching a
night
mannequin.
sounds lull
Suddenly,
me back to
Mrs.
sleep.
Johnson's head snapped
But
towards me,
that
her neck
niggling
turning at an
feeling
impossible
of
angle.
wrongness
Her eyes locked onto
persisted,
mine, but they weren't the
hovering
warm,
at the edges
twinkling
of
eyes
my
I knew.
consciousness.
They were completely black,
It was
like
a
empty
long
voids.
time before
I
sleep
stumbled
found
backward,
me again,
a scream caught
and
in my
even
throat.
then, it
Mrs.
was
Johnson's
restless,
mouth opened, impossibly wide,
haunted by
and a sound
shadowy
came out
figures
that I can only describe
darting
as a
through
dial-up
my
modem
dreams.
mixed with nails on a chalkboard.
Morning
I ran.
came,
I ran
and
faster
with
than I've
the
ever run in my
sun's
life,
first
slamming my
gentle
front door
caress,
behind me and locking it with
the
trembling hands.
previous night's
I spent the rest of
unease
the night huddled
melted
on my
like
couch,
a
lights on
half-remembered
E,
nightmare.
jumping at every sound.
As
Mrs.
I
Johnson
emerged
remained in
from
her
my
yard,
tent,
perfectly still once
blinking
again,
into the
until
soft
dawn broke
light
and she disappeared back
filtering
into
through
her house
the
as if nothing
evergreen
had happened.
canopy. The
The next few
clearing
days
looked
were a blur of
exactly
paranoia
as it
and
always
sleepless
had.
nights. Mrs. Johnson's
Serene,
bizarre behavior continued,
undisturbed,
but it wasn't just her anymore.
almost expectant in
I
the
started
way
noticing other
only
neighbors
nature
acting strangely
can be.
too. Mr.
I went
Peterson,
about my
who usually
usual
left for work
morning
at 7 a.m.
routine,
sharp, now stood by his
stretching the
mailbox for
kinks
hours,
out of my
checking
back
it over
from
and
a
over
night
again.
on the hard ground,
The teenage girl next door sat on her
splashing
front
some
steps all
cool
day,
river
brushing
water
her hair
on
with
my
robotic
face,
precision. Even my
and
best friend
setting
Sarah,
a small
who
pot
lived a
of
few houses
campfire
down,
coffee
seemed
to
off.
brew.
When I went to talk to her,
As I
her speech was
waited
stilted,
for my
with odd
caffeine to
pauses and
percolate,
intonations that made my skin
I
crawl.
surveyed my
I felt like I was losing
surroundings
my
with a
mind.
more
Was I
critical
the only
eye
one
in
who saw how
the
wrong
revealing
everything
light
was?
of day,
I tried talking to people outside our
looking for
neighborhood and
any
guessed that they all
sign of
brushed off my
last
concerns.
night's visitor.
You're just stressed,
But
they'd
the
say.
forest
Maybe
kept
you need a
its
vacation.
secrets,
But I knew what I was seeing.
offering no
Something was
clues to
very,
the source
very
of my
wrong in our little
late-night
suburban enclave.
agitation.
I started documenting everything.
With a shrug and a
videos,
sip of
kept a
the
detailed
strong,
journal,
slightly
even set up
bitter
a camera
brew,
to record the street at
I
night.
chalked it
The
up
footage
to
I
an
captured was
overactive
chilling.
imagination
People moving in ways
and
that
too
defied
many
human
ghost
anatomy,
stories
synchronizing
around
their actions in
childhood
impossible ways,
campfires.
disappearing and reappearing in the
After
blink
all,
of an eye.
The mind
night,
can play
about 2
tricks
weeks
on
after it
you
all
in the
started,
dark,
I woke up to a strange
particularly
sound
in
coming from
places
outside.
like this
It was
where
that same screeching
civilization
noise Mrs.
feels
Johnson
a
had
world
made,
away.
but amplified 100-fold.
Deciding to
I
put the
cautiously peeked
incident
out my
out of
window
my
and nearly
mind,
fainted at what I saw.
I focused on
Every single
enjoying
one of my
my
neighbors was in the
peaceful
street.
surroundings.
They stood in a perfect
After
circle,
a quick
their
breakfast
heads
of
tilted back at
leftover
unnatural
trout
angles,
and a
mouths
granola
agape,
bar I'd
emitting
found
that
buried
bone-chilling
at the
sound.
bottom of my pack,
In the center of the circle was
I set out to
something.
explore a bit,
It was hard to look at directly,
following
like my
animal
eyes couldn't quite
trails
focus on it.
deeper into
It
the
seemed to
lush
shift and
forest.
change. One moment
It
looking
was
like a pillar
easy
of
to
swirling
lose
darkness,
track of time
the next
out
like a
here
mass
with
of writhing
no
tentacles.
clocks or obligations
As I watched,
to mark its
frozen
passing.
in horror, My neighbors began
Before
to
I
change.
knew it, the
Their
sun
bodies
was
elongated,
directly
limbs
overhead,
twisting and contorting,
filtering
their skin rippled
down
and
in
bubbled,
hazy
taking on oily,
shafts
otherworldly
through the
sheen.
dense foliage.
I must have made a sound, a gasp,
Making my way
whimper.
back to camp,
I'm not sure.
I spent
But
the
suddenly,
afternoon
every
in
head snapped
lazy
in my direction.
pursuits,
100 pairs of
reading a
pitch-black eyes
tattered
locked onto me.
paperback
The
I
thing in the
brought
center
along,
pulsed, and I felt a pressure in
whittling
my head like it was trying to
aimlessly
push
on
its
a
way into
piece
my
of
mind.
driftwood,
I stumbled back from the window,
napping in
clutching
the
my skull,
dappled
fighting against
sunlight
the
next
invasive
to
force
the
with everything I
softly
had.
babbling
I don't know how
river.
long I struggled. It could have
It
been
was
minutes
the
or
kind
hours.
of deep
But eventually, the pressure
relaxation
subsided,
one can
and
only
silence fell.
find far
When
from
I
the
finally worked
busy
up the courage
press
to look
of
outside
humanity.
again, the street was empty.
A soothing
There was no
balm
sign
to
of the
the soul.
nightmarish gathering I'd witnessed.
As
But I knew it had
evening
been
once
real,
again
and I knew it wasn't
painted the
over.
sky in
The next
streaks
morning,
of orange
everything
and
seemed
pink,
normal. My
I
neighbors
found
went about their
myself
day as if
feeling
nothing had
grateful
happened.
for this
They
little
smiled and
slice
waved,
of paradise
looking just like they
I
always
carved
had.
out for myself.
But I knew better now. I saw the
The
emptiness
worries
behind their
and
eyes,
loneliness
the slight
that
oddness in
often
their movements.
plagued me back
Whatever
in
had happened
town
last
felt
night,
distant
these weren't my
here,
neighbors anymore.
muted
They were
by the forest's
something else.
gentle indifference.
I packed a bag that day and left town,
For a moment,
driving as far and
I
as
let
fast as I could.
myself imagine
I've been on the
just
move ever since,
staying out here
never staying in one place for too
indefinitely,
long. Sometimes I think
living
about
off
going
the
back,
land
about
and
trying to save
leaving
my
the
old neighborhood, or at least
complicated
figure out
mess
what
of
really
the
happened.
human world
But then
behind.
I remember those black eyes, that
But as
otherworldly
the
screech,
sun
and the
finally
feeling of something trying
surrendered
to
to the
invade my mind.
horizon,
No,
and I
can
built
never
up
go
my
back.
nightly
all I
fire,
can do is keep running and hope that whatever
last
took over my
night's
town doesn't spread any
unease
further.
started to
But
creep
late at
back
night,
in,
in the quiet darkness of whatever
casting
temporary
itself
lodging I
in the
found,
growing shadows
shake the
at the
feeling that it's
edge
already
of
too
the
late.
flickering light.
that the invasion I witnessed is just the
It was
beginning.
a subtle thing at
sometimes,
first,
When I look
just
in the mirror,
a prickle at the
I
back
swear I
of
see
my
a
neck
flicker of
as I
blackness in my
sat
own eyes.
poking at the flames with a stick. But as the night deepened around me, the feeling grew, an almost
The moment the lights went
tangible
out,
presence
something was terribly
lurking
wrong.
just beyond
by
my
the time they
circle
flickered
of
back on, the
firelight.
children I was watching had been replaced by
I
something
found
inhuman.
myself glancing
Now,
over my
I'm trapped in
shoulder
a house
more
with
often
creatures that
than
wear the
I'd like
faces of
to
innocent
admit,
kids, and I'm running out of
straining
places
to
to hide.
catch a glimpse
It was
of
supposed to be an easy night,
something.
just a simple babysitting gig for the
It
new
was
family in the
maddening,
neighborhood.
like trying
Millers
to
seemed nice
remember a
enough,
dream
a bit odd,
just
maybe,
after
with their
waking.
matching blank smiles and
The
too perfect
details
lawn.
always
But who was I to
remaining
judge? Their money
frustratingly
spent
out
just
of
the
reach.
same, and as a broke college student,
Part of
I
me
wasn't about
wanted
to turn
to
down an
just
easy
crawl
$50.
into my tent,
The kids,
zip
Tommy and Sarah,
myself in,
were angels when their
and
parents left.
pretend this
8 and 6
uneasy
years old,
feeling was
respectively.
all in my
They sat
head.
quietly coloring while I flipped
But
through
another
channels on the
part,
massive flat-screen
the
TV.
part that had always been
Outside,
drawn to
the
the
wind howled,
mysteries and
trees
wild
scraping against
beauty
the
of
windows like
places
skeletal
like
fingers.
this,
A storm was
couldn't
brewing,
let
but I
it
wasn't
go.
worried. I'd babysat through plenty of power
and so
outages
I
before.
sat,
As if on cue,
wrapped in
the
the
lights
small
flickered once,
cocoon of
twice,
light and
and then
warmth
plunged
my
us into
fire
darkness.
provided.
I heard Sarah
waiting
let out a
for-
small whimper. "It's okay,
I didn't
guys,"
know what.
I said, fumbling for my phone
The
to
night
use as a
wore
flashlight.
on,
Just
the
a little
usual
power outage,
chorus of
nothing to be
crickets
scared of.
and nightbirds
But as I
somewhat
turned on my
muted,
phone's light,
like
I
even
realized the
they
room
were
was empty.
holding their breath
were
in
gone.
anticipation.
my heart rate picked up.
When the
must have run off to their
snapping of a
rooms,
twig
spooked by the
somewhere
darkness.
in the darkness
I stood up,
made me
calling their
nearly
names as I
jump
made
out
my
of
way
my
towards the
skin,
stairs. That's when I
I
heard it.
decided I'd had
A low,
enough
guttural
of this
sound coming from the kitchen.
nerve-wracking vigil,
It wasn't quite a growl, wasn't quite a
chalking
laugh.
my unease
There
up
was something
to
in
an
between,
overactive
something that made the hair on the
imagination
back of my neck
fueled
stand up.
by too many
"Tommy,
late-night
Sarah?" I
campfire
called again,
tales.
my voice shaking.
I banked
"This
the
isn't
fire
funny, guys.
and retreated
Come out
to
now."
my tent.
The sound came again, closer
Though
this
my
time.
reassurances
And then,
to
in the beam
myself
of my phone's
rang a bit
flashlight,
hollow
I saw
in the
them.
oppressive stillness
2 small
of the
figures
night.
stood in the doorway to the kitchen.
It was a
They looked
long
like Tommy and
time
Sarah,
before I finally drifted off,
Wrong.
and
Their
even
proportions
then
were
my
off.
sleep was
Limbs too long
shallow
and
and
jointed in
plagued
places they
by
shouldn't be.
half-formed
And their
dreams
faces,
of being watched
God,
from the
Their
shadows.
faces. Where there should
The
have been
next
eyes
day
and noses
dawned
and mouths,
sullen and
there
gray,
was only smooth,
a low
pale skin.
blanket of clouds
I screamed.
obscuring the
I couldn't
sun.
help it. The
and
sound tore
casting
from my
the
throat before I
forest
could
in
stop
a
it.
dreary
The
pall.
creatures, because they certainly
It
weren't
was
children
as
anymore,
if the weather
cocked
had
their heads in
decided
unison.
to mirror
Then,
my growing
slowly,
unease.
sickeningly, their blank
The
faces
bright
split
warmth
open,
of the
revealing
previous
rows of
days
needle-sharp
now
teeth.
just a
I ran
distant memory.
up the stairs, taking them two at
I
a time.
tried to shake
My
off
heart
the
pounding so hard I thought it
unsettling
might burst out of
feeling
my
that had
chest.
followed me
I slammed
from
into
my
the first door I
dreams.
saw, a bathroom,
Going about
and
my
locked it
morning
behind me.
routine with
For a long
forced
moment,
normalcy.
there was silence.
But there
I stood
was
there,
a tension
back pressed
in
against
the
the
air
door, trying
that
to
I
steady my
couldn't
breathing.
seem to escape.
What the hell had happened to the kids?
A heaviness
those things
that
downstairs?
had nothing to do with
scratching
the
sound at the door
looming
made me jump.
clouds overhead.
Come out, come out,
Deciding
sang a
a
voice that
change
was
of
almost,
scenery
but
might
not
help
quite,
clear my
Sarah's.
head.
We want to play.
I packed a
Yeah,
light
chimed
lunch
in,
and
not Tommy.
set off
Don't you want to play with
downstream,
us? Their voices
following
were
the
all wrong,
river's
too high and
meandering
too low at the
path
same time,
deeper
with
into
a strange
the
echo
forest.
as if multiple voices were speaking
The
at
water
once.
was running
I looked
swifter
around frantically
here.
for a weapon,
The
anything I could
soothing
use to defend
babble
myself,
of the
but the bathroom
campsite
was sparse,
giving way
just
to
a toilet,
more
sink, and
insistent
shower.
rush
No window
as
to
the
escape through.
terrain grew
The scratching
steeper.
at the door intensified,
I
accompanied by a
hadn't
sound
gone
like nails
far
on a
when I
chalkboard.
came across
I could see the
something
wood
that
starting
made
to
me
splinter.
pause.
In desperation,
There,
I climbed into
on
the
the
bathtub
muddy
and pulled the
bank,
shower curtain closed.
Were
It was a
footprints,
flimsy hiding place,
not
but
the
it was all I
delicate,
had.
cloven
The door burst
impressions
open
of
with a
a
crash.
deer
I held my
or
breath,
the blunt
pressing
tread
myself
of a
against the cold
bear,
porcelain of the tub.
but something
Where are you?
eerily human
Not
in
Sarah
shape.
sing-songed. We can
They
smell
weren't
you know.
quite right, though.
I could hear them moving around the small
Too
bathroom,
elongated
opening
and
cabinets,
narrow
knocking
to have
things
been
over.
made by
They were getting
any
closer.
boot or shoe
Suddenly,
I'd ever seen.
the shower curtain was ripped away.
An icy
I found myself
finger
face
of
to face with the thing that used to
apprehension
be Tommy.
trailed down my
Up close,
spine as
I
I
could see that his
crouched
skin was almost
for a
translucent,
closer look.
pulsing with an otherworldly light.
It was clear they
Found
were
you,
fresh,
it said, its
the
mouth
edges
stretching into an
still
impossibly
crisp,
wide grin.
and the
I
damp
reacted on
soil
instinct, grabbing
clinging
the shower
to
head
the
and turning it on full
indentations.
blast. The creature shrieked as
Fear
the water hit
rose
it.
bitter
Its skin
in the
seemed
back
to
of
bubble
my
and melt.
throat.
I didn't wait to see
Here
what would
was
happen next.
proof that
I
I
bolted past the
hadn't
writhing
been
creature,
imagining
past not
things.
Sarah, who was reaching for me with
That there
elongated
was
fingers, and out
indeed
into the hallway.
something out
The
there
lights
in
chose
the
that moment to
woods
flicker back on,
with me.
temporarily blinding me.
Something that
I
walked
stumbled,
on two
catching
legs,
myself on the banister
but
of the stairs.
left a print
That's when I saw
that
it.
was
A family
jarringly
portrait on the wall that I hadn't
unfamiliar.
noticed before. It showed
My
the Millers,
mind raced
Mom,
with
Dad,
possibilities,
Tommy and Sarah.
each
But in
more
the photo,
unsettling
they all had
than
the same blank,
last.
featureless faces as
Could
the
it
creatures
be some
downstairs.
vagrant,
A horrible
a
realization
drifter
dawned on
who
me.
had taken to
These
the
weren't
woods?
creatures that had replaced the children.
But then why
This
the
was the Miller
strangeness of the
This
footprints?
is what they really were.
A sudden,
The sound of wet,
terrible
slapping
thought
footsteps snapped me
seized
back to
me.
reality. The creatures
What
were
if
coming.
it wasn't human
I
at
ran
all?
downstairs, headed for the front
The
door.
old stories
But as I
my
reached for the
grandmother
handle,
used to
I saw
tell me,
movement outside.
tales of
More
creatures
blank-faced figures
not
were approaching
quite
the house.
animal,
The rest
but
of the
not
neighborhood,
quite
I
man,
realized with a sinking feeling,
that lurked
they were all
in the
like this.
deep places
I was
of the
trapped.
world.
The next few hours were a
waiting
blur
for
of
the
terror.
unwary.
I moved from room to room, always just one
I
step
shook
ahead of
my
the creatures.
head, trying to
playing with me, I
dislodge
realized,
the irrational
like a cat
fear.
with a mouse. They could have
This
caught me
was
at any
the
time,
real
but they were
world,
enjoying
not
the
some
chase.
children's fairy
I found
tale.
myself in Mr. Miller's study,
There had to be a
frantically searching
logical
for anything that might
explanation.
help me understand what was happening.
But even as I
And there,
tried to
in a locked
reassure
drawer that I managed to
myself,
pry open,
I
found
found
a
my
book.
gaze drawn
It was
back
old.
to those
The leather cover
eerie,
cracked and faded.
elongated
The title,
prints.
barely legible,
A shiver
read,
running
The
through me
Convergence,
despite the
a guide to
muggy air.
interdimensional colonization.
Swallowing
With shaking
hard,
hands,
I
I
forced
opened it.
myself to
The pages were
continue
filled
on,
with diagrams and dense
though
text,
my
most of
earlier
it in languages I
desire
didn't
to
recognize.
explore had
But there were notes in the
completely
margins,
evaporated.
written in Mr. Miller's handwriting.
Now each rustle in
suspect
the
nothing.
underbrush,
One note read,
each snap of
flesh
a
suits us
twig
well.
underfoot sent
Another,
a jolt of
the children are
adrenaline
adapting quickly
surging
to
through
their new
my
forms.
veins.
Soon,
The forest
we will
no
be ready to
longer
expand.
felt like a
my
sanctuary,
blood
but
ran
a
cold as I
trap,
realized the full
a
scope of what was happening.
labyrinthine green
This wasn't
maze
just about one family.
hiding
This was an
unknown
invasion.
threats.
A creak in the
I
floorboards made
didn't
me
go
snap
much
the book
further
shut.
before
I
turning
turned
back,
to see all four
my
millers standing in
unease
the doorway,
growing with
their
every
blank
step.
faces somehow radiating amusement.
The walk back to
Curious little
camp
thing,
seemed
aren't
to
you?
take an eternity.
Mrs. Miller said, her voice a
Every
discordant
shadow
chorus.
a lurking
Most
menace,
babysitters just sit and
every
watch
bird
TV.
call a warning.
What are you? I asked,
By
although I
the
already
time
knew the
I
answer.
reached the
Mr.
familiar
Miller stepped
clearing,
forward, his
my
form rippling
nerves
and
were
changing until he
thoroughly
looked almost
shot.
human again.
My
Almost, but not
imagination
quite.
running wild
We are the
with every
future,
horror
he said,
that might
and
be
you,
waiting
my dear,
for me.
are witnessing the
But
beginning
the
of a new
camp
world order.
was just as
Why are you
I'd
telling me
left it.
this? I asked,
My
backing
small
away
tent
until I hit the
and
desk.
banked fire,
Why not
the
just
only
kill
signs
me?
of human presence
Sarah, or the
in the
thing wearing
vast
Sarah's shape,
expanse of
giggled.
wilderness.
It was a horrifying sound.
I let out a
Oh,
breath
we're not going to kill
I
you,
hadn't
she said.
realized
No,
I'd been holding.
Tommy added. We're going to
Feeling
make you one of
slightly
us.
foolish
As
for
one,
letting my
they began to
mind
advance on
get
me.
the better of
I
me.
looked around desperately for an
And
escape
yet,
route,
as
but
I
there was
set
nowhere
about
to go.
preparing a
That's when I
meager
remembered
dinner,
the book in my hands.
I
Without
couldn't
thinking,
quite
I
shake
hurled it
the
at the overhead
feeling
light.
of being watched,
The bulb shattered,
of eyes
plunging the
on my
room into
back
darkness.
from the depths
In the
of
confusion,
the forest.
I managed to slip past them and
The
out of the study.
shadows seemed
I
to
ran for
press
the front
closer
door,
as
no
the
longer
day
caring about
wore
what waited
on.
outside.
The gloom
Whatever
of
it was,
the
it couldn't
overcast
be worse than what
sky
was in this house.
only adding to
But as
the
I burst out
oppressive
onto the front
atmosphere.
lawn, I saw that the street was
I
empty.
found myself
No blank-faced
jumping at
neighbors,
every
no
sound,
sign of anything unusual.
my heart
Just a
racing at
normal,
the
quiet
slightest
suburban night.
anomaly.
I didn't stop running
When
until
a
I reached the
branch
police station.
snapped somewhere
They
in
didn't
the
believe me, of
underbrush
course.
just
They sent a
beyond
car to
the
check
edge
on the
of the
Millers,
clearing,
but reported back
I
that everything
nearly
was fine.
upended my
The
cooking
kids were in
pot
bed,
in my
the
haste
parents
to grab
confused
my
but polite
hunting
about the
knife.
disturbance. I sit here
Brandishing
now,
it before
writing this
me
as a
with a
warning.
shaking hand,
They're out there, wearing
I
human
peered
faces,
into the
blending who
gathering
knows
dusk,
what, and they're spreading.
trying to
So the next time you
distinguish
see a
threat
family
from
that seems too
shadow.
perfect, with smiles
But
that don't quite
nothing
reach their
emerged.
eyes, be careful.
No
Look closely
menacing
at their family
figure
photos,
stepped from the
and
tree
whatever
line.
you do, don't agree
After
to babysit
several
their kids,
tense minutes,
because in this new
I
world,
lowered
the
the
monsters
knife,
don't hide under the bed.
feeling a
They are
bit
the bed,
sheepish,
the house,
but no
the
less
entire
uneasy.
neighborhood, and they're always
That
watching,
night, I barely
waiting for the
slept.
lights to go out.
Every creak of branch or rustle of leaf jolting me from my fitful dozing. I lay in my sleeping bag, clutching my knife to my chest, ears straining for any hint of approach. But apart from my own ragged breathing and the rapid thud of my heart, the night remained still, almost unnaturally so. When the first pale light of dawn finally crept over the horizon, I felt more exhausted than if I hadn't slept at all. My mind was foggy, my body leaden with fatigue, and yet the thought of staying another night, of facing the unknown that lurked in the darkness, filled me with a dread I couldn't quite rationalize. With heavy limbs and a heavier heart, I began to pack up my campsite, each rustle of my movements sounding over loud in the dawn's hush. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was letting a few weird noises and my own overactive imagination ruin what had always been my escape. But the primal, insistent part of my brain, the part that had kept our ancestors alive in a world of predators and unknowns, wouldn't be silenced. It was with a profound sense of relief that I shouldered my pack and began the trek back out of the wilderness. And yet, even as I left the woods behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that some fundamental safety had been stripped away. The forest, which had always been my sanctuary, my place of peace, now felt alien, sinister. Little did I know as I walked away from that place that the true horror was only just beginning. The drive back to town was a blur, my mind still reeling from the events of the last few days. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see some nightmarish figure emerging from the tree line, following me. But the road remained empty, the only movement the swaying of branches in the early morning breeze. When I finally pulled up to my little cabin on the outskirts of town, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The familiar sight of the weathered wooden siding and tin roof had never looked so welcoming. I hauled my gear inside, not bothering to unpack, and collapsed onto my sagging couch, the exhaustion of a sleepless night finally catching up to me. I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake, heart pounding, the remnants of a nightmare still clinging to the edges of my consciousness. In the dream, I had been back in the woods, but they were darker, more twisted, the trees looming like malevolent sentinels, and there in the shadows, a figure watching me, waiting. Shaking off the disturbing images, I glanced at the clock, surprised to see that it was already late afternoon. I'd slept the day away, and yet I still felt drained, a heaviness settling into my bones that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. In the following days, I tried to return to my normal routine, to lose myself in the everyday motions of my life. The routine of the auto shop, the quiet evenings tinkering in my small workshop, the weekly grocery run. But no matter how I tried to distract myself, my mind kept circling back to those eerie woods,